Chapter 0, Prologue. There's only a day left. I clicked my tongue lightly as I entered my ID and password in the familiar login window. End of game service. It was a few months ago that this announcement came out, but thinking that today was really the last time, I felt empty. Rachronia Saga, abbreviated as Ra-Sa, was an RPG that I had been obsessed with since I was in school and had been playing it for over 8 years. A game that was once quite popular with its excellent graphics, immersive story, expansive worldview, and relatively novel system. Currently, it had long been branded as a game of obsolescence, and only several hardcore users remain. I poured a third of my life into this game. It had already become a part of my daily life. However, such a game eventually announced the end of service. It's not that there weren't signs. And to be honest, there was nothing strange about ending it, but I couldn't help but feel empty and betrayed. I moved my characters to visit the warehouse. It displayed the stored items on the screen. It also showed the inventory. Many items accumulated while playing for nearly 10 years. There were ordinary items, great items, and then there were the treasures that were even hard to find in the game. Looking back, I had too many of them. I didn't stop there and opened the character information window and the skill window. LV99 Ra-Sa's level system made it exponentially more difficult to level up as the level increased. Starting from level 80, it not only needed experience points but also many difficult achievements. At level 99, it was the unofficial maximum level of Ra-Sa. No user had reached it yet, but not it had only become a one level of regret for me. I wanted to reach level 100. Sky-piercing stats, all kinds of skills, and even the most gorgeous equipments were lined up on the screen. It was a splendid character specification that even experienced users did not have. But now, it was all useless. Why did I spend all that time to collect and strengthen these scraps of data? Shall we start? I moved the mouse, feeling the anticipation welling up. It was for my last curiosity that I put all these things on the screen. The place where the mouse cursor was directed was at the box-shaped item stuck in a corner of the warehouse. Box of Chaos. A box of chaos that could fuse everything in the world. Items, gold, skills, stats, whatever the character owned could be set as materials. Rating: 9 stars. Compared to other RPG, Ra-Sa had a lot of freedom. So, there were a lot of things like hidden pieces from all over the world. And this box of chaos was also an item I got from a dungeon I found by chance. As you could see from the description, the effect was very interesting. There was nothing special about simple item synthesis. But in this box of chaos, not only items, but also character skills and stats could be synthesized. In short, there were no restrictions on the type or number of materials that could be set. Except for novelty, it's an item that doesn't really have much value. However, the only time I used this item since I got it was when I wanted to use it for fun. It's the reason there were few 9-star items in my warehouse. The efficiency was simply too low. Usually, when something was synthesized, something of a higher value would come out. However, in my case, the value did not improve but decreased. What's the use of this item when that would usually happen 9 out of 10 times when fusion was attempted? Of course, it was nice to experiment with since you could use anything as a material, and you would never know what would come out. But it's just not worth it. Until now. Where else could there be an item as great as this to decorate the end? Set the materials for fusion. I activated the box of chaos and moved the cursor. I clicked on items, gold, stats, skills, everything one by one. I set the items it took me a lot of effort to get, and the skills I had gained through luck as materials without hesitation. Only then would the fusion be completed, and the character would return to the first level. But so what? It's the last time anyway. If I synthesize everything without leaving a single thing, what will come out? Material settings have been completed. Do you really want to fuse? Soon, the preparations were over. I clicked yes without hesitation, and at the same time felt regretful. I thought I had selected all of them, but I did not set one skill as a material. Soul of the King. The spirit of the Supreme Emperor is imbued with it, and is unshakable under any circumstances. Fully immune to all mental debuffs. Every word and action imbued with the dignity and coercion of a rule. Significantly increased the chance of gaining an upper hand in conversation with NPCs. Rating: 9 stars. Type: passive. Level: 1MX. Ra-Sa's unofficial highest grade, 9-star skills or items, were extremely rare and their effects were fraudulent. Soul of the King was also one of those 9-star skills. Convergence begins. Oh, it's starting. It was regretful to leave out one, but it didn't matter anyway. I stared at the box of chaos vibrating violently on the screen, emitting a dark aura. Why does the effect seem much chaotic than before? A few seconds later, a brilliant light burst through the darkness that enveloped the box, and a notification popped up. Fusion complete. Instant kill skill acquired. Instant kill instantly kills the target, ignoring all effects. It can be activated while in contact with the target, and there is no limit to the number of targets. Rating: 10 stars. Type: active. Level: 1MX. Cooldown: none. I blinked and looked at the skill that appeared because of the fusion, and soon, I let out a low, astonished sigh. Wow, fuck. What was this? The rating was not 9 stars but 10 stars. The existence of a 10-star rating in Raw Saw was a fact that had never been revealed. To be honest, I had no expectations, but the outcome was completely beyond my imagination. I was even more shocked reading the skill description. Instant death ignoring all kinds of effects, and there's no cooldown or target limit? An instant kill with no target limit. Did that mean that I could use it not only on normal mobs but also on boss mobs? Even the heinous bosses, who could only be caught after struggling for a few hours, could also be subjected to instant kill. It can't be. Oh, but its rating has never been seen before, isn't it? I moved the character with an absurd expression on my face. I should probably just check it out for myself. I never thought that I would actually gain such an outrageous skill with one day left before the game ran out of service. If I had known it would be like this, I would have done this sooner. Woo! For a moment, my vision shook, and the world suddenly sank into darkness. I screamed in surprise, but I couldn't hear my voice. My body didn't even move. Amid the strange sound that pierced my ears, and the dizziness that seemed to turn the world upside down. Don't give up. Consciousness slowly faded. Chapter 1. Escape 1. Dingy floor. Musty smell of dust. I blinked my eyes and lifted my drooping head. Ah, Tilda, when can I have a sip of alcohol? Right next to me, I saw a bald man muttering something with a stern expression. Around us, people in similar clothing were crouching down in rows. It took me a few seconds to realize that it was a prison uniform, and that this was a prison. Thick chains were tied to each of their wrists and ankles. I could even see the densely strewn iron bars in front. Besides, what was that semi-transparent blue curtain swaying beyond the bars? It seemed to come out of any fantasy. Wait, what was that? Other than that, the clothes I was wearing were no different. I blankly looked down at the heavy iron chains on my limbs. What the heck? I couldn't understand the situation at all, so I searched for my memory. I must have just been sitting in front of my computer playing Raw Saw. Why, I fused materials in the box of chaos. An amazing 10-star skill came out, and then, ah yes. My vision suddenly went dark. Did I faint? And when I opened my eyes again, it was already like this. The memories before this happened were clear, but the current situation was not. Rather, it got more confusing. What are you looking at? The bald man next to me met my eyes and growled ferociously. Where is this? I asked him. The cool voice that came out naturally when I spoke surprised me. What is this crazy bastard saying? I stared at the man, who was swearing with an absurd expression on his face. Then, he seemed to flinch, but soon replied with a reluctant expression. Where is it? Inside a fucking convoy? A convoy? Did you doze off? We're on our way to Archiman. That damn place, the prisoner's grave. Archiman? Prisoner's grave? As soon as I recalled it had a somewhat familiar name, I almost reflexively asked, what? That's right, because it was the name of a place that existed not in reality, but in a virtual world. In the game world that I knew too well. Hey. What else? Are you sure Archiman is referring to the prison camp managed by Lognar Kingdom? Why do you keep asking the obvious? This place, it's not called Earth, but the continent of Recronia, correct? The man now looked at me like I was a complete madman. Crazy, why did this guy suddenly change? The man who muttered so quietly moved away to the side. I also shut my mouth and just remained silent. It was because I felt like I finally understood what was what without asking further questions, including the numbers right above the heads of the prisoners, including the man next to him, that slowly appeared in his field of vision. LV, 48 LV, 51 LV, 45 level display. It was hard to believe, but it seemed like I had entered the world of Recronia Saga. There was no other way to explain the current situation. The vivid sensations were clearly letting me know that the present situation was not a dream. Besides, this isn't even my real body, is it? It would have been nice if there's a mirror. But even without looking at my face, I could tell that this wasn't my body. The color of the skin, the voice, the body shape, everything was different. The body itself felt different from usual. Possession? Did I possess a character in a game? How could this nonsense happen? I quickly settled the confusion in my mind and sorted out the situation of this body first. It wasn't difficult because I got enough information from the short conversation I just had. Convoy and the Archiman camp. As the bald man said, the place did not differ from a prisoner's grave. It was a place I knew well because it was one of the many processes that I went through while progressing through the main story. A place where you can't even dream of being released or of escape, living your life in harsh labor and being experimented by, and then dying with all your blood sucked dry. Apparently, I possessed one prisoner being escorted to that rough area. Why did I enter this body? More than that, who, and for what purpose, put me in such a dog-like situation? If you think about it, it's something that couldn't be easily figured out. More than that, I had to do something first for my immediate survival problem. At that moment, I suddenly realized the weird gap in my mentality. But why am I so calm? I suddenly entered a game and became a prisoner who was about to be taken to a concentration camp. Wasn't this a situation where it wouldn't be strange if I lose consciousness and started panicking? Usually, that would be the case. But I was thinking of quickly sorting things out and solving the immediate crisis. The agitation was only for a moment. What I felt right now was not fear or worry, but only a little confusion and doubt. I used to think that I belonged to the rational side, but was I the situation who could remain calm in such an absurd situation? Quitting. Then, suddenly, a heavy explosion sounded. The space shook from the explosions that sounded one after another without seemingly no end. What else was happening this time? Embarrassed prisoners muttered and raised their bodies that had fallen to the floor. Fuck, what's that? What's going on? Looks like something exploded upstairs. While the vibration of the hull continued for a long time, the prisoner eyes all at once turned towards the bars. All with eyes like surprised rabbits. It was because the blue curtain that surrounded the outside of the prison was slowly losing its light and becoming blurry. Eventually, as the curtain completely disappeared, someone shouted, "The barrier is gone." As if that cry had been a signal, crunches echoed everywhere. It was the sound of prisoners breaking the restraints tied to their hands and feet. Ha! What the heck is this? The mana has really returned. Freedom! Let's overturn everything. The prisoners who found their freedom in an instant ran amok with joy. I stared blankly at the unprecedented mess happening in front of me. They were like monsters beyond common sense. As if those iron bars were papers. Soon the prisoners who had torn off the iron bars came out one by one. Even then, I still had no choice but to sit alone and stare at what they're doing in dismay. With the sound of explosion and the rocking boat, I knew the situation was taking an unusual turn, but I had no option to escape. Shit! I cursed inwardly as I looked down at the restraints that wouldn't budge, no matter how hard I tried. The muscle strength of this body seemed to be at a normal level, not much different from my original body. So, it's only natural that I couldn't break it, unlike the other prisoners. At that moment, another explosion erupted. It was very close this time. One prisoner who was first to come out suddenly went flying like a cannonball and crashed into the wall. The other prisoner's eyes widened at the sight of that prisoner dying instantly with a huge hole in his chest. His shape was so distorted that it was hard to even recognize him. These bugs are jumping around excitedly. Where are you planning to crawl out? It was an old man with gray hair who entered and said that in a ghastly voice. An old man who exuded a sense of intimidation like a mountain. He looked gigantic that all the rugged prisoners looked like children. Stop him. Some prisoners, who were unaware and tried to pounce, ended up in a situation no different from the prisoner who had crashed into the wall earlier. As if to drive away flies, the old man's fist turned to those who tried to attack him into a piece of minced meat. He didn't stop there and started slaughtering all the remaining prisoners. Speed and destructive power far beyond humans. I couldn't follow his movements with my eyes. All I could see was the sight of prisoners' bodies bursting out one after another, which turned into fountains of red blood. It was a sight that seemed infinitely unreal. Could it be that the human body could shatter so easily, like bursting a fruit? Pudding. In the meantime, a guy flew to where I was sitting and crashed into me. Blood splattered on my face. He literally wiped the prisoners out in the blink of an eye, unable to resist or flee. In fact, from the moment the old man appeared, it was easy to guess the result. Because, LV-91, I could tell from the level displayed above his head. He was a monster in a different level from others. At most, no matter how many level 40 or 50 prisoners flocked to him, they could never touch the old man. As with all RPGs, especially in Raw, the larger the level gap, the harder it was to establish an equal battle. The number of prisoners was meaningless, not to mention the vast difference in levels. Fuck. A terrible sight, a thick bloody smell. Wiping the blood from my cheeks, I once again cursed inwardly. I entered the game out of nowhere, became a prisoner of a convoy, something exploded, and then shit happened, and the monster old man suddenly appeared and massacred the other prisoners. So much had happened in a short amount of time. The only thing that was certain was that my life was now in greater danger than hanging from a rotten rope on a cliff. Ha! Is there still someone left? The old man looked my way curiously, brushed off the blood soaked in his fist, and walked closer. He climbed over the broken bars and entered the prison, looking down at me. I also looked up at him without speaking. In fact, it was just that I couldn't get out of the restraints. But since I didn't run away and stayed calm, I had a tiny expectation that he would somehow save me. But it seemed like a futile hope. A cruel smile crept across the old man's lips. A guy with strange eyes. Such a waste that you have to be killed here. He suddenly placed a huge hand on top of my head. Even though it was just him placing a hand on my head, I felt the pressure as if my head would collapse at any moment. If the old man put even a little of strength in his grip, my head would explode. And that was the future that would happen soon. Am I going to die in vain like this? Even amid this, my head was still calmly assessing the situation. Maybe if I die like this, I can go back to my original world? It was not without possibility. However, I couldn't just throw away my current life as easily as a game. In an instant, while desperately searching for a way out, I remembered something. Last minute before entering the game, the box of chaos, a skill that popped out because of merging everything that my character possessed. Instant kill instantly kills the target, ignoring all effects. I can activate it while in contact with the target, and there is no limit to the number of targets. No way. That thought crossed my mind, because I entered this game right after the fusion ended. There was no certainty. However, now, it was a desperate situation where I had to grab at least a straw. I am the warrior, Garten. If you have any last words, I will listen to it. I met the old man's eyes, and opened my mouth. Die. The hand that had been placed on my head slipped away. The old man's huge body collapsed on the floor like a doll with its strings cut off. Chapter 2.1. Escape 2. I stared blankly at the fallen old man, lost for a moment. Did it really happen? The unfocused eyes, without the slightest movement, those definitely belonged to a dead person. The effect of the skill had been activated successfully. At least that's what I wanted to believe. If not, what else could be the reason for this monster to suddenly collapse? I was now convinced that I possessed this body while retaining the instant kill skill that came out of the fusion. Then what other skills do I have besides that instant kill? My thoughts naturally flowed in that direction. Even in Rasa, I was one of the high-level players which could be counted in one hand. If I maintained the other skills that my character had as they were, I would have danced happily right about now. But it wasn't the case. Among the skills that I possessed, there were many passive skills that amplified the character's basic stats. So, if the skills were maintained, it wouldn't make sense for this body to be so weak now. Even if I tried to use some of the active skills, none of them seemed to be usable. There are no other skills, so why only instant kill? I quickly realized the reason. Why? Because all other skills and stats were used as fusion materials. If the game character's abilities were transferred based on the point at which I completed fusion, then everything made sense. This extremely weak physical ability, and that no skills other than instant kill existed, I sighed. Could it really be like that? Really? For a moment I felt a chill behind my back. Then, if there was no fusion, could it have been possible for my game character's abilities to have been maintained? No, the current situation itself might not have occurred if that fusion never happened. I possessed someone in the game right after I fused all of my game character's abilities and items. The correlation between the two is a bit of a reach. But it's the most plausible answer. Either way, I shouldn't have done that damn fusion at all. Regrets wouldn't help. I calmed down the rage that was about to boil inside me and tried to regain my composure in an instant. Was it like that? Then, I suddenly realized the reason I could maintain this nonsense composure without the slightest agitation. Soul of the King had imbued the supreme status of a king in the soul, and was unshakable under any circumstance. Fully immune to all mental debuffs, every word and action imbued with dignity and coercion of a ruler, significantly increased the chance of gaining an upper hand in conversations with NPCs. A 9-star skill that I accidentally left out during fusion, the Soul of the Emperor. I wondered if its effects were affecting my psyche. Thanks to this, it must be possible to continue maintaining composure even in this crazy situation, even in this chaos where I almost died, and the surroundings had become a sea of blood with pieces of corpses all around. It would truly be impossible if it was me before. I moved my gaze again to the old man who had become a cold corpse. By the way, did he say the warrior garden? One of the 5 stars of Santia, a person who could rank among the continental class powerhouses in the worldview of Rasa. It referred to the label warrior. I know the name warrior very well, but the name Garten was unfamiliar. The warrior that appeared while I was playing Rasa was not Garten, but someone different. I'm sure I didn't remember it wrong. Could it be a different timeline? Also, I was not sure why someone of such a status was aboard Archimonde's convoy. No, I should put aside those things for now. What should I do from now on then? It's good that my life was saved right away, but there's still a crisis at hand. My hands and feet were still bound in restraints, and although the sound of the explosion had stopped, the ship's unsteady shaking seemed to get worse. I was not sure what the heck was going on with this convoy, but if I continued to be tied up like this, there's a high possibility that my survival would be threatened again. At that moment, my gaze turned to one side. It wasn't conscious, it was more like a reflex. It's because something strange caught my eye in the corner of my field of vision, just beyond the bars. LV 89, a level indicator floating on an empty space. After thinking of the possibility of what was happening, I concluded quickly, with little difficulty. Stealth type skill. There's no way a level indicator would float there when there's no one standing in that area. It meant that someone invisible was there. I was not sure how long this person had been hiding, but that wasn't the important part. The level was not as high as the previous one, but it's still a monster with almost the same level. I had to make the right decision about how I would act in front of that unknown opponent. But before that, my mouth had already opened reflexively and spoke against my better judgment, and in a very arrogant and careless tone too. Stop acting like a rat and come out. Did I suddenly go crazy and was secretly wishing to die? I didn't know why those words suddenly popped up, Something like mere instinct overtook reason for a moment. I immediately realized where it was coming from. Was there anything than the soul of the king that could have a sudden impact on my current personality? Fuck. Whatever it was, it completely screwed me over. Even if there's an instant kill skill, it couldn't be activated unless I was in contact with the target. If that unknown opponent, angry at my provocation, launched an attack, my life would end just like that. But fortunately, no such disaster occurred. Squeak. After a while, darkness filled the air, and a man in a robe appeared. Chapter 2.2 Escape 2 Daifun walked down the hallways, across the corpses of convoys and sailors. Things went smoothly as planned. The ship had been largely destroyed, so the convoy would soon sink. Now he only needed to kill the warrior, and he could return without leaving a single survivor. He didn't expect that the Rognar kingdom would have any preparations, so it was quite unexpected that one of the 5 stars would appear. 5 stars of Santia. It was unreasonable to deal with someone as strong as that alone, even if it was Daifun. But he wasn't too concerned, because there was a card prepared for such a variable. Is it over there? The strong energy felt from downstairs made Daifun immediately convinced that the warrior was there. The inside of the cabin, which appeared to be the prisoner confinement spaces, was already a gruesome scene with the bodies of the prisoners. It was difficult to control, even the rampaging prisoners, when the convoy was attacked, so the person responsible for this must have dealt with them all. Moving leisurely inside the cabin while hiding, he could find the warrior Garten as expected. I am the warrior Garten. If you have any last words, I will listen to it. The warrior had his hand on top of a prisoner's head. Daifun stood at a distance and watched the scene. He didn't know the full situation, but the warrior was planning to deal with the last surviving prisoner after he listened to his will. I have to attack the moment he kills that prisoner. If possible, it would be better to launch a surprise attack at the most appropriate time. After deciding, Daifun waited for the warrior to explode the prisoner's head, and soon the prisoner's mouth opened. Die. Daifun's eyes widened in astonishment at the sight that followed. The warrior's body collapsed on the floor at the prisoner's words. For a moment he did not know what had happened. Dead, no breathing, no heart beating. The sign of life was completely cut off from the fallen warrior, and Daifun could no longer feel any energy from him. He's really dead. In an instant, one of the 5 stars of Santia, a warrior with a high reputation throughout the continent, died just like that. Daifun reflexively stopped breathing and killed his presence as much as possible. A prisoner with restraints on his hands and feet, staring down at the dead warrior. It was hard to believe, but it was a sight that made one think he had killed the warrior Garten. But how? The other didn't lift a finger. All the man did was say a short word: die. Spirit magic? Is it some kind of spirit? However, how could there be a spirit capable of killing the warrior with just one word? What kind of spirit was that? Daifun stared at the man with confusion. The appearance of a variable that was far beyond the assumption. He couldn't really decide what to do in this absurd situation. Surprise attack. Doing that would be crazy, especially since he's up against a monster who killed the warrior in just an instant. Even with the power provided by the King of the Dead, the original plan to kill the warrior, the odds of winning were unknown. So, should I retreat like this? But to return without knowing the identity of that unknown person? For a moment, Daifun felt goosebumps welling up all over his body. It was because the man suddenly turned his gaze, and was staring at where he was. Stop acting like a rat and come out. Caught. Since when? That his stealth skill was so easily discovered made Daifun feel the greatest shock and disappointment. It was because he had the highest stealth ability on all continents. He was still thinking of escaping just now, but he soon gave up on that idea. His life could easily end in an instant, just like what happened to the warrior just now. He couldn't risk that. Squeak. Daifun appeared and met the man's eyes. In the empty eyes that did not show any emotion, he felt an indescribable sense of coercion. Daifun only had a vague intuition that the man in front of him might be someone on par with the monarchs. Who are you? After a moment of silence, Daifun asked. The man just stared at him with his mouth still closed, as if he had no intention of answering. Unspoken pressure. Daifun guessed the meaning of that gaze, and thought about what to say. The other's identity was unknown, but he was escorted to Archiman as a prisoner, and he killed the warrior without hesitation. At least there was no friendly relationship there, so it wouldn't matter if Daifun revealed his identity. No, it would be better to make it clear. I am a member of the Calderic monarchy Daifun, not affiliated with the Rognar kingdom or Santia Empire alliance. At those words, a slight change occurred in the man's expression. He wasn't sure what the other was thinking. Calderic monarchy? After mumbling like that, he paused and asked, "What did you do to the ship?" "If you want to know the condition of the hull, the convoy will soon sink without reaching Archiman." At those words, the man's expression slightly frowned for a moment, and then straightened again. Conversation ended like that. As if that was all he was curious about, the man asked nothing else. He seemed uninterested in why Calderic attacked a single convoy, or the details behind it. For now, is it fortunate that that's the case? Daifun was a little relieved at the other's attitude that didn't show any hostility. No, rather than having no hostility, it seemed closer to not being interested anymore since Daifun had already answered his question. As long as Daifun didn't attack, the man didn't seem to care anymore whether he escaped. However, Daifun hesitated to leave, because he felt regretful about leaving just like this. He too was in a state of growing doubts and curiosity about this bizarre man. Why is someone like you a prisoner in this convoy? A monster that killed the warrior in an instant and discovered him, whose ability and power were unfathomable. To Daifun this situation seemed ridiculous, like finding a dragon sleeping quietly curled up with meager shackled at the corner of a goblin cage. Kuan! The hull shook violently and tilted. The man still did not take any action, and the answer to the question was not returned. Daifun, who was staring at him, suddenly realized something. Empty eyes with cold emotions. Total indifference to the surroundings. A uniquely bored atmosphere. He had seen a similar person. That was clearly the attitude of someone who no longer felt any meaning in life. Perhaps everything was irrelevant to that man. Even now, even when the ship was sinking, the other did not even think of escaping. Whether he died, his life would not matter. Killing the warrior and talking to Daifun must have been just a momentary whim. Wah! Once again, the hull vibrated. Daifun felt a great disappointment. A giant like this no longer had any interest or regret in the world and wanted to just sink to the cold seabed and disappear. The regret made him come up with a rather impulsive, out-of-the-box proposal that didn't suit the situation at all. Would you like to go with me? He just hoped that he could ignite even the slightest spark of interest in this man's heart. To Calderic's Overlord Castle, Chapter 3.1. Escape 3 Chapter 3.1. Escape 3. An identified man wearing a black robe. But at first glance his attitude was extremely cautious. I noticed right away that the other person was firmly mistaken about this situation. Can it be because of what happened to the warrior? Were you watching me kill the warrior? So, did this person perceive me as something more dangerous? Definitely misunderstood. If that was the case, the reaction was understandable. If it wasn't like that, what else could be the reason a strong person comparable to the warrior be wary of a prisoner chained like this? Anyway, for me right now, this illusion was something I was truly grateful for. So, I tried to keep my expression as expressionless as possible to match the rhythm. The other had been asking who I was, but since I wasn't sure how to answer, it's better to just shut up. If I showed any emotional agitation for no reason, it would put me in a more disadvantageous position. I am a member of the Calderic monarchy Daifun, not affiliated with the Rognar Kingdom or Santia Empire Alliance. The man introduced himself first. Calderic monarchy? What was Calderic? It's one of the 4 major powers in Rasa, which divided the power of the continent along with Santia. Could this guy be responsible for the current situation? Besides the warrior, even Calderic. What the hell were these people doing gathering in this one convoy? I was just guessing, but some unusual power struggle must be involved. More than that, the important thing to me right now was not their purpose or background, but my immediate survival. I glanced at the other and asked, "What did you do to the ship?" The shaking hadn't stopped since a while ago, but it's not like it's sinking, or anything like that. If you want to know the condition of the hull, the convoy will soon sink without reaching our chaman. Unknowingly my poker face broke in an instant. I would soon be sentenced to drown in the middle of the sea, so I couldn't help but frown. Why is someone like you a prisoner in a convoy? I also wanted to grab the guy who threw me into this game and ask him, so please shut up. What now? Hands and feet were still tied, and in the meantime, the ship was said to be sinking soon. In addition, a monster close to level 90 was standing in front of me. Far from improving, the situation was only getting worse. Even if I kept my cool, was there any way to survive this situation? Kuan! The hull, which shook more violently, warned that time was running out. But why is that guy so relaxed? No matter how high the level was, could you escape the middle of the sea with your bare body? But hey, he's the one responsible for this, so there must be an escape route. Whether if there's another ship prepared or teleporting. I realized that I was thinking too much. That there was only one lifeline to lean on in this situation. If I can get help from this person. If so, wouldn't it be possible to at least avoid being buried with the ship? The obvious problem was, there's no way he'll help me. What reason did he have to do that? There's clearly a boundary between us. Since he didn't know my strength, it must have been that he was taking a cautious attitude and not recklessly attacking. In such a situation, could I really ask for help? In fact, there was a much higher chance that my neck would be blown off immediately after he discovered I was nothing more than an insignificant piece of trash. However, he was my only way out. If I wanted to prolong my life, I had to think of a way. Whether it's using the delusion he's harboring for me or whatever, he had to find a way to escape somehow. Would you like to go with me? To Calderic's Overlord's castle? What? I looked at him, hiding my dumbfounded expression. The Overlord is someone who values ability above else. Race, origin, and your past don't matter in Calderic. A man like Sir is sure to be welcomed by the Overlord. Calderic differs from Santia in many things. At least there are many things that will interest you more than a land only for humans. Even the title had changed to Sir. But what was he saying now? It was unexpected, so it took me a while to understand. Was he scouting me? Was that guy now proposing to recruit me to his faction? No matter how much he overestimated my existence. But seriously, to a prisoner whose identity was unknown. More than I thought, I realized he was deeply mistaken about something. Of course, this was a great opportunity. A situation where he offered to take me out here without me desperately putting on a show. If I accepted the offer, I could escape safely from this sinking ship. But, the problem is what will happen after that. In reality, I was just a scumbag with no special abilities. So, what was I going to do once I reached Calderic? And what? Overlord Castle? He's going to take me directly to the Overlord of Calderic? I'd rather stick my head through the tiger's jaws. But there was no other way. Whether it's being crushed by the wreckage of a collapsing ship or drowning in the sea, if I didn't accept this offer, I would surely die on the spot. Right now my priority was to live. I'd just think of the aftermath later. After a long silence, I quietly opened my mouth. Is this a recruitment offer? Of course. A quick answer came back. It's Calderic. I muttered that, and then continued. It's a little interesting. Chapter 3.2. Escape 3. Chapter 3.2. Escape 3. Oh wait. That's probably a bit too much. I immediately regretted what I said. What did I mean by interesting? I probably went too far to create an atmosphere. It would have been okay to just nod and accept the other's offer. Still, I was safe since Daefun's face seemed to brighten up a little for an instant. Fortunately, my earnestness seemed to have been conveyed, and he walked into the prison. Kang! An unknown intangible force easily smashed the restraints, and it scattered on the floor. Only then could I regain my freedom. When I glanced at him, he didn't look like he found anything strange. Yeah, could you imagine that the guy who killed the warrior was a weakling who couldn't even break a single piece of metal? I formally greet you again. I am Daefon Cladnell, Chief of Staff of the Overlord, belonging to the Overlord Castle of the Calderic Monarchy. Overlord's direct Chief of Staff? Somehow, the identity is amazingly high. Only then did I know his true identity. I didn't memorize all the names of the many NPCs in Rasa, so I couldn't immediately recall the names when I heard them. Chief of Staff of the Overlord of Calderic. He was the closest aide to the Overlord, and his actual influence was as great as that of the Nine Lords. After he finished speaking, he stared at me. It was a gaze waiting for an answer. I felt uneasy. I didn't even know who this body belonged to, so how could I introduce myself? After a moment of silence, I finally uttered a short word. Ron. There was no meaning behind it. Just a name that came to my mind randomly in an instant. Because I couldn't even say my real name Siak-Ya in this Western-style fantasy world. Fortunately, Daefon nodded without asking further. Oh, and excuse me, but can I have the warrior's corpse? There's probably someone else who might want this. Ownership of the body, of course, belongs to Sir Ron. No, I don't need any of that. What did he mean by having ownership over a dead body? Who would want this? Ah, is he talking about the King of the Dead? Anyway, it was a good thing for me, so I replied he could take care of it in whichever way he wanted. After a short thank you, Daefon waved his hand at the warrior's corpse. Then, a dark aura rose, and in an instant swallowed the corpse without a trace. Then Sir Ron, I will take you to the Overlord's castle right now. I will teleport you, so please, do not resist my magic. Daefon said and held out his hand. Come to think of it, one of the Chief of Staff's abilities must have been an ultra-long distance teleport. But wait a minute, to the Overlord's castle right now? I stared at his outstretched hand with a trembling heart, then grabbed it and stood up. Ugh. Soon, the surrounding space slowly distorted with a soft blue light, and for an instant I felt a sensation as if my body was floating. Felt like vomiting. How much time had passed? Had 10 seconds passed? When my vision became clear again, I was no longer in the prison of a convoy. I blinked my eyes, hiding my surprise at the scenery that changed in an instant. A dark and spacious communal space. On the walls in all directions, there were countless huge stones that glowed in blue, and the light emitted from them gathered right under the feet to form a geometric figure. Magic circle? I looked down at it slowly disappearing, then raised my head and looked around. Aside from the magic circle, the monsters in robes stood motionless like stone statues around them. It's like an atmosphere that something would happen if one tried to even move. Sir Daefon. A woman dressed to look like a butler came closer and bowed her head. Thank you for your hard work. I'm glad you returned safely. Naturally, my eyes went to her pointy ears. An elf? What about the Overlord? She's in her seat. The meeting of the lords will begin in a little while. We came back at a very opportune time. After muttering that, Daefon continued talking to the woman who glanced at me with a questioning gaze. This is a nobleman I will introduce to the Overlord directly. Let's do our best to serve him. Those words obviously took her aback, but soon quickly returned to her expressionless expression. Then, with one arm folded, she bowed with the utmost respect. I have committed disrespect. My name is Karen. Should I say that things were moving in the right direction? Even after escaping the convoy, the situation was still frantic. So, this is the Calderic's overlord's castle, right? Did we really travel that long distance from the realm of Santia to Calderic in one go? And from now on, would I have to face the overlord of Calderic? Of course, I somehow had already expected that, but straight away, I wondered what kind of reaction would Daifon have if I changed my words and told him I would reject his offer. Unlike the convoy from earlier, this was Daifon's main base, and the very center of Calderic's forces. Was it too optimistic to expect someone to let go of me with a smile on their face? Welcome to Calderic's overlord castle, Siran. Daifon, who had no way of knowing how I was feeling, said that, and I could only sigh. The price of escaping a sinking ship was entering the tiger's den. The overlord of Calderic, Rashtang. In addition, even in Rasa's worldview, one of the most powerful leader. Now I really didn't know what to do. Whatever happens, happens, I guess. Chapter 4.1. Council of Lords 1. Chapter 4.1. Council of Lords 1. The cavity must have been deep underground because the stairs going up felt like it would continue on forever. Upon arriving on the ground, Daifon apologized and went somewhere first. Karen guided me and I followed her. If Siran needs a meal, a bath, or anything else, just tell me. I'll get things ready right away. I replied I would take a bath first. My appearance was filthy because I had been a prisoner just a while ago. As if Karen had already expected that answer, she immediately ordered the servants to prepare. The maids tried to help me bathe, but I told them all to go away. It's embarrassing to let someone else wash my body when I was just an ordinary modern person less than an hour ago. I will prepare a separate meal while you're taking a bath, no need. I just wanted to wash and clean up. I didn't really have the urge to eat. After somehow taking a bath, I changed into clean clothes and was escorted to my room. It was a very spacious and colorful room. I walked in and stood in front of the mirror. On the other side of the mirror, a very unfamiliar man was staring at me. Jet, black hair, pale skin, two bright golden eyes and distinct features. How disgustingly handsome. Putting aside the current situation, this was just a pure appreciation of the body I possessed. I had already checked it while taking a bath, but it was a face I would never get used to. More than that, this was not the avatar of my game character, which had blonde hair and blue eyes. I moved, and this time stood by the window. Since it was a room on a high floor, I could see the scenery of the castle well from the window. The gigantic walls surrounding the outskirts, the tall and majestic buildings, and the soldiers and knights standing guard everywhere with a formidable spirit. The Calderic monarchy, one of the continent's 4 major powers, with the overlord Rashtane and her 9 lords at the peak. Unlike Santia, where almost only humans lived, it was a land where various races other than humans were mixed. As can be seen from such characteristic, it was the most free and open-minded force among the 4 major powers. The place where I was now was the overlord castle of Calderic. The overlord's castle was in the very center of Waborn, the capital of Dragor. Dragor was also a familiar area that I used to frequent while playing Rasa. Does the city of Waborn spread outside the wall? Beyond the computer screen, it's hard to recognize places in reality that one had only seen through the game graphics. If it had not been for this situation, I would have been able to enjoy the overwhelming scenery in front of me. I rested my chin on the window sill and let out a deep sigh. Really, how did this happen? Why did I have to meet the overlord of Calderic? Even if this all blew up from just one misunderstanding, it simply blew out of proportion. Now, I could even transcend species and understand the mind of a cow being led to a slaughterhouse. Suddenly, what Karen said earlier came to mind. Come to think of it, they said the meeting of the lords would start soon. I was one of the very first players of Rasa. Of course I knew a lot about Calderic. Not only the main NPCs belonging to Calderic, but even the way the ruling class worked and their governing system were still quite detailed in my mind. It was rare for users to play a game, knowing even the detailed settings that had nothing to do with the story progress, but the case was a little different when the game was Rasa. Rasa was a game with a lot of hidden pieces, and sometimes one could find clues about them within the game settings. That's why it was common for not only me, but for most of the players in Rasa to know the most trivial settings one after another. The Lords' Meeting. As the name suggested, it was a regular conference attended by the Overlord and all the 9 lords. And the place where the meeting was held was, of course, the Overlord Castle, where the Overlord lived. Then, doesn't that mean that most of the other lords are also gathered here? As I thought about it, a feeling of uneasiness welled up. Somehow, I got the feeling that this timing wasn't very good, because from what I knew, the Overlord Rashtane was someone with a rather erratic personality. After being in anguish for a while, a knock rang. Are you resting, Sir Ron? It was Daifon, not Karen, who opened the door and entered. I knew the time had come. The words that followed proved the ominous premonition I had. The meeting of the Overlord and the other lords is about to begin, but the Overlord wants Sir Ron to attend it as well. Oh, The Gotham foresight was proven correct once again. Chapter 4.2 Council of Lords 1. Chapter 4.2 Council of Lords 1. After a short talk, I immediately followed Dayfun. Only the sound of 2 pairs of footsteps at regular intervals echoed in the wide and quiet hallway. The destination was, as I heard earlier, the Overlord's conference hall. Depending on what would happen next, it was a place that could become a public execution ground for me instead of just a conference hall. Things are just getting more and more complicated. No, why should I, a complete outsider, attend a meeting where only the Lords of Calderic gathered? Right now, I just wanted to hit the back of Dayfun's head, who was currently walking ahead of me. After all, he was the culprit behind all this. It's true that I could escape the convoy because of him, but it was also him who attacked it. Otherwise, the ship would have been cruising across the sea by now without sinking. Even though the destination was a concentration camp, compared to the current situation in which I had to face the rulers of Calderic in just a few minutes, wouldn't the former be better? It's a useless assumption. I moved on with a detached mind. I couldn't even avoid it since I had already come this far. We would soon find out which way was the better way. Would I be able to survive safely in front of the Lords, the pinnacle of Calderic, without revealing my insignificant self? If worst comes to worst, and I really got caught, even if it's only one instant death skill, it could still protect me, even if just a little. Since it also worked on the warrior, the effect was certain. But there was a fatal condition that I could only activate it upon contact. Well, even if that was the case, there wouldn't be any other way anyway. I could use my vast knowledge of the game as a negotiating card with the Overlord, but I doubted if that would even help. Of course, the best thing would be to get through this hurdle somehow without getting caught. The more we walked further, the darker it seemed. Before I knew it, the windows in the hallway had completely disappeared. Instead, glowing stones embedded in the ceiling lit up the darkness. Eventually, as I entered the aisle covered with a dark red carpet, several knights stood solemnly lined up at what seemed to be the entrance. The knights raised their swords and saluted. Dayfun nodded to the knights and walked past them, and I followed, pretending to be calm. After walking for a long time in the long hallway, I slowly saw a huge door at the end, and the figure of someone standing in the front a little further away, as if they had just arrived like us. It was a woman with red hair reminiscent of a blazing fire. The beast's ears stood on either side of her head, a cut that ran in an oblique line from the forehead to the chin, and the huge sword on the back. "Hey, Chief of Staff." The woman who was looking this way spoke in a light tone. Contrary to that, Dayfun bowed his head politely. "Fifth Lord." I knew her true identity from the moment I saw her, even without hearing her title or name. LV 95. With that terrifying level, and that appearance, there was only one person who came to mind. The Fifth Lord, the Mad Lord Ignal. Even before entering the meeting room, one of the lords suddenly appeared like this. I looked at her, feeling a little strange. Even though she's just standing there, her presence seemed to weigh down the entire space. I wasn't familiar with the warrior. Dayfun was a character that was rarely involved in the game, but the Fifth Lord was different. One of the most familiar names among the named boss characters in the game, which I struggled to defeat dozens of times. Once again, I realized the fact that this was a world within the game. It would be a big deal if I didn't arrive on time. But what is that? The Mad Lord asked with a chin gesture towards me. The Overlord herself is the one who gave permission to let this person attend the meeting. Oh, that, she put on a puzzled expression. The Overlord's permission, that's something rare. So, who is it? This time, I accidentally brought them from outside. Come to think of it, you went to Santia. Where did you find such a guy? Her gaze turned back to me. The beast's pupils, which were torn vertically, scanned my whole body once, and I met a pair of terrifying eyes. It doesn't look like much. Wah! An explosive sound shattering the air. Suddenly, her hair fluttered with the gust of wind, and the blade of her sword stopped right in front of my neck. I just stared at her, who was holding a sword stiff as a stone statue. What did she do? Did she wield her sword? When? I wasn't even aware of her pulling the huge sword out of her back. Unreasonable speed, as if it omitted altogether the process of going from point A to point B. The Mad Lord grinned as she drew her sword back. No matter how lifeless it looks, I never thought you wouldn't react at all. You're tough compared to your appearance. It's not that I didn't react, it's that I couldn't. I felt like I just went back and forth on the Jordan River just now. If it wasn't for the Emperor's soul, I would have collapsed already because of how weak my legs became. Fifth Lord. Thankfully, Dayfun stepped forward with a firm voice. Don't be too serious. It's just a light greeting. Giggling, the Mad Lord retrieved the sword and turned around. Let's talk together later, when the opportunity arises. No matter how I look at it, I can't feel any magic power. So I wonder what kind of ability you have. What a terrible suggestion. It seemed that more stacks of misunderstanding had accumulated unintentionally. As I watched her from the back as she continued to walk towards the door, Dayfun bowed his head to me. He seemed to apologize for what had just happened. It would have been nice if he had stepped forward before Ignal swung her sword. Well, let's just be thankful that my neck was still intact. Go on. The huge door opened wide with a heavy echo. The Mad Lord opened the door first, and went inside the meeting room. All the other lords, aside from her, must have already been inside. Then let's go in. I entered the meeting room with Daifan, feeling as if I was walking through the jaws of a monster. Chapter 5.1 Council of Lords 2 Chapter 5.1 Council of Lords 2 Bonus Chapter for today. Thank you to Melikono for donating. The air was heavy. It was a literal expression, not a metaphor. This was the only way I could describe the atmosphere when I entered the conference room. It was a much larger and slightly darker space than I had imagined. The first thing that came into sight was the huge round table in the center, and the 5 people sitting around it, no beings. Welcome, 5th Lord and Chief of Staff. Breaking the silence, an old man's benevolent voice resounded. It was a voice from a dwarf occupying a seat at the round table. He was short, tan skin, and had a thick beard that extended under his chin. Above all, his rock-like muscular body was clearly visible, even from a distance. There was only one being that could have all those features, a dwarf. I also knew who he was. First Lord the Weissman Hager. All the gazes of the lords of the round table, including him, were directed our way. Oh, it's been a while, old Hager. The Mad Lord approached one of the empty seats and sat down. Other than that, there was no other greeting. It's just that the gazes filled with question were still lingering on Daifan and I. The 3rd Lord the Heavenly Palace, the 2nd Lord the Thunder Lord, the 6th Lord, the Tyrant, and the 8th Lord, the Black Sea Empress. I also looked at their faces, and matched them with the names in my memory one by one. The Lords of Calderic were of completely different races and characteristics, so it was easy to see who was who at a glance. Is the Overlord not here? Hadn't she reached the conference room yet? Besides the Overlord, the 4th, 7th, and 9th Lords were nowhere to be seen. It was unknown whether they had not yet arrived, or were absent altogether. By the way, who is the human next to you? The 1st Lord the Weissman, asked Daifan. As he explained to the Mad Lord earlier, Daifan introduced me again. This is an honored guest brought in from the outside. The Overlord permitted him to attend the meeting. The reaction of the lords to those words were varied. The Overlord gave permission? The Weissman who asked, muttered in a mixture of doubt and surprise. Huh? What's with this situation? The 8th Lord, the Black Sea Empress, rested her chin on the table and expressed interest. Anyway, our Overlord really prepared something good. At least this meeting hasn't been boring from the start. Tarrant also laughed as if he was having fun. The 3rd Lord, the Heavenly Palace, was staring blankly into space as if he was not interested. In the first place, he hadn't even looked this way from the very beginning. Why did the Overlord allow an outsider to attend the Lord's Council? The only one who showed negative emotions was the 2nd Lord, the Thunder Lord. An elf with long, sky blue hair and long, pointy ears looked at me with blatantly displeased eyes. I also don't know why I'm here, so don't look at me like that. Then the Mad Lord giggled and intervened. The Overlord gave permission. Simple as that. Why are you acting strict and arguing here, kid? The Thunder Lord turned her gaze and glared at her. I already warned you not to call me kid, 5th Lord. Did you do that? What can I say? Something probably blocked my ears. At the Mad Lord's act of pricking up her ears, as if teasing, the Thunder Lord only clicked her tongue. I just stood there and watched the scene. As I was thinking about whether I should keep standing like this, Daifan guided me to my seat. Please sit over here. So I took a seat at the round table and sat down. Of course, I didn't return the interest given by the other lords. Oh, I hate it. This kind of atmosphere. Above all, the 8th Lord, the Black Sea Empress, who was sitting in the seat in front of me, made me feel quite burdened by just her presence. The moth-like antennae on the forehead, the huge membrane wings on the back, and the appearance of a mixture of human skin and insect exoskeleton were so grotesque that it was hard to look at her. Don't talk to me, please. Among these monsters, all I could do was keep my eyes on the air and shut up with a blank expression. As I was having such a hard time, the door to the meeting room opened again and someone came in. It was a maid. No, maid? A woman who entered the meeting hall alone bowed her head in greeting, approached the round table, and set down the teacups one by one. Somehow, a more strange atmosphere filled the air. The appearance of an ordinary attendant setting drinks before the start of the meeting shouldn't be a cause for worry, but I couldn't take my eyes off her, or more precisely, to the number above her head. LV 98 Chapter 5.2 Council of Lords 2 Chapter 5.2 Council of Lords 2, that's right. There's no way an ordinary maid could have an insane level that could overwhelm even the other lords. What the hell should I do with this? I wonder when the Overlord is going to arrive? Time is almost up. The Black Sea Empress smiled at me and muttered slyly. She'll be here soon. Just wait patiently while we have tea. Contrary to what he said, the tyrant, who drank the steaming tea at once, licked his lips and asked the 5th Lord. By the way, I heard you went to Brunel, 5th Lord. Was there anything interesting you want to share? Don't act familiar with me, you vampiric bastard. However, she mercilessly dismissed the question with a different cold voice from before. The tyrant shrugged his shoulders as if he was already used to such an attitude. How cold. I don't know why you're always impatient with me. Aren't I likable? Don't you think so, Second Lord? Who would like something vulgar like you? I've said it many times, but don't talk to me unnecessarily. You are all too much. Didn't we just fight on the same side earlier? Listening to those useless conversations, I fell into trouble. How long did I have to watch this absurd play? Can I test something? Looking at the maid who came to my side one last time and set down the teacup, I opened my mouth and said, Overlord. The maid's movement froze. When are you going to end this prank? I continued. The other lords all looked this way with an expression of surprise. Even the third lord, the heavenly palace, who had never looked at me before. Ha! Only then did the maid, who threw off her mask, took a step back and burst into laughter. I heard you saw through Daphne's stealth at one glance. It's been a while since a really interesting guest like you came. Overlord Rashtane, the master of all Calderic, and the head of the 9 lords, and one of the people closest to the strongest in the worldview of Rasa. Swish! In an instant, a black oar wrapped around her whole body, and in the blink of an eye, it transformed her into a completely different person. Her waist, length jet, black long hair and eyes, and even the clothes she was wearing, changed from a maid's uniform to a bright dress. After walking to the seat of honor at the round table, she slumped down in her seat, fluttering the hem of her dress. Daifon, who had been standing near the entrance of the conference hall until just now, moved behind her and stood still. Let's see, the 4th and 9th lords are absent because they're busy with their own business. The overlord's gaze, which was looking around the round table, turned to the Weissman. First Lord must have been busy, but you still worked hard and took part today. At those words, the Weissman shook his head gently. It's not a big deal, Overlord. It's my duty as a lord to attend the Lord's council unless it's unavoidable. The Overlord turned her gaze to the Thunder Lord, this time with a faint smile. Second Lord, you look like you have a lot to say, don't you? How are you, Overlord? The Thunder Lord nodded, glanced at me, and continued. It's just hard to fathom the Overlord's intentions in bringing an outside to the meeting. Haha, is the Second Lord asking what I was thinking, doing such a thing? The Overlord smiled and waved her hand. Since everyone would gather here, I just wanted to make sure that I invited someone suitable. Suitable? For what? Then, she clapped her hands as if to lighten up the atmosphere. Okay then, let's start the meeting. The first agenda, as you can see, is the recruitment of a new talent. Did you hear about it from the Chief of Staff? The attention of the lords was focused again, and the Overlord smiled and made eye contact with me. First, I want you to tell me your name directly. Ron. This was the start. There was no particular crisis yet, but I couldn't let go of the tension. Something had confused me ever since the Overlord appeared. What was the reason for bringing me, a complete outsider, to the meeting of the lords and sitting in the seat, as the Thunder Lord said? I don't think she would want me to fight with the lords just to test my abilities, okay? Then Sir Ron, what is your purpose in coming to Calderic? What kind of interview was this? I was quite nervous because a more ordinary question came than what I thought. I stared at her without answering the question right away. Ah, of course, I know it was our Chief of Staff who suggested it first. What I'm curious about is why you agreed. Honestly, I'm in a state of shock right now. A person as powerful as you suddenly visit the castle. With your ability, it's enough for enjoying whatever you want, wherever you want, as long as it's a goal involving wealth and fame. So what's the special reason for coming to Calderic? Special reason, my foot. This place was just the only option I had after facing a dead end. There's nothing more to that. I knew all the Overlord's abilities. I knew it would be useless to lie, so I answered as honestly as I could. There is no specific purpose. The Overlord narrowed her eyes, as if to gauge the true meaning of my words. It's just as I heard from Daphne. Then, are you saying that you came here purely out of interest? She smiled again, raising the corners of her mouth, and nodded her head while humming good, good. She looked like a boyish girl, but I didn't find it cute at all, because I knew the truth hidden inside was a monster that was nearly 1,000 years old. What you see now was just a polymorph shell, not her real body. So, what's the point? Anyway, I was sure I didn't end up sitting in this meeting just for those questions. This was the real beginning. I waited patiently for the words to follow. The Overlord's mouth opened again. Sir Ron, do you want to become a lord? Chapter 6.1. Council of Lords 3. Chapter 6.1. Council of Lords 3. What did I just hear? For a moment, I wondered if I misunderstood what she had just said, so I tried to replay it in my mind. But no matter how much I interpreted it, it meant exactly just that. This woman, the Overlord Rashtane, asked me if I wanted to become a Lord of Calderic. Was she being serious? No, it couldn't be. Of course, it could only be a joke. If even I took that seriously, then no wonder I was on edge. This was not just empty words. I'm asking you if you are really willing to be one. Right now, the seat of the 7th Lord has been vacant for several years. It just can't continue to be empty like that. But there's no one who I really like. Just in time, Sir Ron came to visit the castle, and I really would like it if you take over the seat of the 7th Lord. What the hell was this woman talking about? Take the position of the seventh lord? Who? I? Hearing her say that, she probably really wasn't joking. I could barely keep my expression, hiding the absurdity and bewilderment. But why is the seventh lord's seat empty? Where did the seventh lord, the ghost, live again? That I knew evaporate. It's like the warrior being a different guy from who I remembered. Was there really a time difference between the Rasa I played and the one I was experiencing now? Since all the other lords are the same, it's probably not the future. So, it's from the past. The timeline now was probably a few years before the game started. Well, now was it really the time to think about that? But, Overlord, are you serious? Breaking the brief silence, the first one to speak was the Thunderlord. I was wondering why you had an outsider attend the meeting suddenly. So it was because of this. Was it to decide here right away? The tyrant also let out a laugh and buried his back in the chair. The other lords said nothing, but they all had expressions as if saying these were all absurd, except for the Heavenly Palace, who looked like he was in his own world from the start. But they were right to have those feelings. The 9 lords were beings with absolute power, no one could touch except for the Overlord Rashtane. They were also the symbol of Calderic. The Overlord, right now, was trying to decide the person to sit in such a lofty seat, as if she was simply choosing a lunch menu. I was so dumbfounded, but I wondered how the other lords would be as shocked. The Overlord laughed quietly to herself. It may be sudden, but everyone knows it, right? That there is nothing else necessary for the lord's seat except for ability. The Thunderlord immediately protested. This is hard to understand. How did that man prove his ability? He proved it enough. I heard he killed Santia's warrior in one blow. Isn't that right, Chief of Staff? That's right, Daphon affirmed the Overlord's question. Naturally, she seemed to have heard of everything that had happened in the convoy. Huh? He killed the warrior? The lords looked quite surprised. Of course, all the lords of Calderic were strong beings of a higher rank than the warrior. In terms of simple numbers, it was only a difference of a few levels. But at high levels, especially in the 80s and 90s, each level was a big gap. The point that surprised them was not the fact that I killed the warrior, but probably the part where I killed him with a single blow. Besides, he discovered my identity at once. Who else could do that? At those words, all the lords fell silent. Now it seemed that the other lords had been subjected to similar pranks by the Overlord. In the meantime, the Heavenly Palace, who had been quiet until now, suddenly raised his hand. Yes, except for the third lord. The Heavenly Palace lowered his hand and stared blankly into space once again. The other lords didn't even care about him acting like that, as if they were already used to his eccentricity. The Weissman looked at Daphon and asked, "But High Overlord, I'm curious about the details of the Chief of Staff's mission when he went to Santia this time. Even if you didn't ask, it was one of the meeting's agenda, so let's put it aside for now." The Overlord looked around the table. "Anyway, I don't think there's much problem with Saran sitting in the Lord's seat. What do you think? Are there any objections?" Then, the Thunderlord opened her mouth once again. "Then can I check it myself?" Check? It was clear what the other meant. We're talking about the capabilities of this human called Ron. If the Overlord allows it, a light duel would be enough. In an instant my heart cooled down. Commas forced my heart to sink. It had to happen. From the time I entered the meeting room and got stuck with these monsters called lords, the crisis I was concerned about had never gone down. Seriously, Second Lord? Are you trying to blow up the Overlord's castle? The Mad King rested her chin on the armrest of the chair and laughed. Is there any problem with that, Overlord? Things are definitely going well. The Black Sea Empress also rustled her antennae and helped with a word. All the other lords also showed interest. Well, the Overlord looked in my direction. Seeing that smiley expression on her face, I had the feeling that she had expected something like this from the beginning. What do you think, Saran? There's nothing to think. Second Lord, the Thunder Lord allies. Fighting that monster that could even cause a lightning storm in an entire area, if she used her full power. A confrontation between an ant and an elephant would be much more rational than that. With one gesture from her, my whole body would turn into black ash and fly away. Except for one instant kill, I really didn't have any abilities. Is there a hole where I can escape? Everyone was waiting for my answer. If I avoided a fight for no reason, I didn't know what kind of reaction they would have. But things were definitely not going in the right direction for me. For a moment, a pretty plausible bravado came to mind. I didn't know if it would work, but the atmosphere would get weird if I stayed silent here longer. I glanced at the Thunder Lord and opened my mouth. If you don't mind being killed, and then added, I have little talent for being moderate. Chapter 6.2, Council of Lords 3. Chapter 6.2, Council of Lords 3. After just 2 sentences, a chilly silence descended on the conference hall. Terrifying pressure spread next, and filled the space. How dare you? Coo. The Thunder Lord had sparks all over her body, and glared at me with murderous eyes. A tingling sensation spread all over my body. I calmly accepted the killing intent of the Thunder Lord, and maintained my expressionless face. The pressure was palpable, but thanks to the soul of the king, there was no emotional or mental agitation. Rather than avoiding a fight, There was a reason I made the atmosphere bloody. What I was aiming for was the Overlord's intervention. I said that I would accept the duel as long as it was okay to kill the opponent, and the provocation enraged Thunderlord as well. It was actually a much more violent reaction than I expected. If a match was made in which neither side would end well, there would be no way the Overlord would allow a fight, wouldn't it? Hurry and stop the duel. The atmosphere felt like a lightning bolt would hit the spot when I was sitting at any moment. The Overlord opened her mouth. There was some regret in her voice, perhaps because she realized she had been too hasty. Stop. Unlike before, it was a slightly serious voice. After that, the Thunderlord calmed down. He was still glaring at me. There's nothing we can do about it. It won't be a light duel at all, will it? The Overlord, who said with an innocent voice, smiled as if to lighten the atmosphere. I let out a deep sigh of relief. I was glad that it went safely as I thought. The other lords, who all seemed unfathomable, seemed regretful that they missed out on a good spectacle. Well, I don't really care. The Mad King smiled and said, "It doesn't seem like he's vulgar like that vampire. Appointing a monarch is the Overlord's authority anyway, so is there a reason to hear our approval? Why am I being mentioned again?" The tyrant clicked his tongue and muttered. The Weissman also glanced at me and stepped in to help. It's sudden, but I don't doubt the Overlord's eyesight. Also, the seat of the 7th Lord can't be vacant forever. The Chief of Staff is also not dissatisfied with the decision. Except for the Thunder Lord, no other lord showed any complaint. Rather than agreeing, it was close to showing signs of accepting, saying nothing because they were just not interested, or because the Overlord's will was absolute. But I hadn't said I would accept it yet, so why was everything already confirmed? I wonder if that's the case. She and the ruler of Calderic. She's at the very apex of Calderic's power, one of the 4 major powers on the continent. Who would normally refuse a seat she was offering? The problem was that I didn't really have any abilities that fit the position of a lord. Until now, everyone had a huge misunderstanding about my ability because of how the situation fit in. But even the lowest guard guarding the castle gate could kill me. How long would this good fortune last? If I accepted the Overlord's offer and truly became the 7th Lord, then I would cross the river of no return. But if I refuse, it was also a risky option. It wasn't my will, but anyway, I came to the Overlord's castle and attended the meeting of the lords in order to not have any enemies in Calderic, and the Overlord offered the best conditions she could offer. What kind of reaction would come back if I said I would reject it in an atmosphere like this? Perhaps the Overlord's friendly demeanor could turn into hostility in an instant. Dare I took that risk? I didn't know if it would be a foolish recklessness to check it out myself, or if the right choice was to avoid the worst. Should I ask for time to think? My brain felt congested. Wouldn't it be better to postpone the decision for a while? Then the Mad King looked at me and opened her mouth. Anyway, it's a pity. I promised in front of the meeting room that we should try dueling sometime. When did you make that promise? And what did that have to do with me being a lord? But I soon understood. Come to think of it, wasn't there a setting in Calderic that battles between lords were strictly forbidden? It was the minimum discipline for lords with very strong individuality to coexist without major conflict. I also really hate ending things in moderation. At least until one side is dead, that's a proper duel, isn't it? The bloody sound of laughing suddenly reminded me of a terrifying possibility. If I refused the position of a lord, after the meeting was over, that crazy monster might get excited and start a fight with me. Even during their first meeting, she pointed her sword at my neck without hesitation, so the possibility was there. But was that all? Even now, the Thunder Lord next to me was glaring at me with eyes that seemed ready to eat me. If I refused, I have to worry about what would happen after the meeting was over. Accept or reject. Either way, it's a choice between the worst and the lesser evil. Similar to what happened on the convoy ship, I regretted that bringing the situation to this point. After all, I had to somehow escape this damn castle in order to escape the reach of the Overlord. But regret was useless. Now, only Saron's answer remains. The Overlord's final proclamation. As the Overlord of Calderic, I will make a formal proposal for you. Will you take the seat of the 7th Lord? A quiet silence descended on the conference hall, and the attention of all the lords on the round table was now focused on me. Having finally decided, I opened my mouth with half resignation. I accept. Chapter 7.1. Organize. Chapter 7.1. Organize. Even after the full-scale meeting started, I continued to sit in the conference room. Of course they talked about things I didn't know about, but there was no way I would intervene and open my mouth. After the meeting, we talked about the dinner in the evening and future plans, and then I returned to my room. I sat on the bed and stared blankly into space, then let out a blank laugh. The 7 lords of Calderic. From now on, I was one of them. Just a few hours ago, I was living an ordinary life and suddenly I now became a lord. There's no story like this one. The realm of Calderic could be divided into 10 areas, with the center as the Overlord's main domain and land of the 1st to 9th lords surrounding it. The lords were not just called lords for nothing. Each ruled a land like a kingdom. Now that I was the 7th Lord, I could hold all the power over the area called Unlock. This was possible because the throne of Calderic had no succession by blood, and was only determined under the appointment of the Overlord. But that didn't mean that the 9 lords swore absolute allegiance to the Overlord or anything like that. Although the Overlord was the head of the lords, as seen in the meeting, the relationship between them was more like a contractual relationship. Except for a few set conditions, lords could act freely without being bound by anything. I remembered reading the reason this bizarre structure could be achieved and maintained in a setting book related to the origin of Calderic. I remembered that the explanation was quite detailed, but this was the only key point that came to mind. Because the ability of the Overlord was that great, and she had naturally solidified the power over a long period under such competence. Some of the current lords had already been with the Overlord for over 100 years, and in particular, the first lord, the Wiseman, had been a lord for hundreds of years since the establishment of Calderic. The system that had been carried on under such a long bond was in some ways more solid than the typical monarchy, like the Santian Empire Federation. That's all fine and good, but where did things get so twisted? After a series of regrets, I suddenly felt funny. Where did it get twisted? What did I do to enter this game in the first place? Even if something was twisted, did it really have to get this twisted? I got out of bed and picked up a fruit that looked like an apple from a basket on the table. I took a big bite, and the sweet juice spread in my mouth. It was subtly different from the apple flavor I was used to, but it tasted good anyway. I just couldn't think of anything to eat because of the situation, but I had been hungry since earlier. I ate a few fruits in an instant because of my sudden hunger, and then I sat down and leaned back in my chair. There's really nothing complicated about it. I had already crossed the river of no return anyway. Was there any need to regret every single thing and lament on the situation? Rather than that, preparing for what lay ahead was much more productive. As soon as I decided, the sluggish emotion disappeared in an instant. Thanks to the soul of the king, a cold coolness was established at the very core of my heart, so that I would not be shaken easily. This was not Earth. It wasn't even a modern world like the 21st century. Monsters, war, demons, a wild and hideous land full of many dangers, and where the value of life was insignificant. In the end, unless I found a secure way to return to the original reality, this fragile life could be threatened. I knew very well what kind of dark future awaited this world, but there was nothing to be disappointed about. As one of the early players of Rasa, I had a lot of knowledge and information about this world in my head. It's also not like I didn't have any abilities at all. Didn't I have an instant kill, and the soul of a king, a mental sustainer, that exerted absolute effects? Of course, it would have been perfect if they transferred all the abilities of my game character. Either way, it's not a bad situation if one looked at it well. The title of the 7th Lord of Calderic. It came with a huge risk, but it could also give me a huge boost. At least within Calderic's realm, I could exert absolute power. It would depend on what I would do in the future, but it will be a great advantage to prepare for the upcoming dangers by using the information I had. Anyway, the Overlord is, a stream of thoughts led to Overlord Rashtang. The Overlord was more unpredictable than anyone could have imagined. I didn't know what exactly she had in mind for giving me a seat, but it made little sense at all. I guess there's a reason she asked that. Why did you come to Calderic? That was the first question the Overlord asked me. I was guessing, but maybe that wasn't just for confirmation. Because she could distinguish the truth from the lies of the other person's words. My answer, that I had no particular purpose, would have turned out to be true, so at least she would have known that I did not have any nefarious purpose. I wonder if she noticed that the name Ron is a pseudonym. At first glance, the Overlord seemed to have made a very spontaneous decision, but it wasn't. Whatever it was, she was a person with the ability to rule the great power of Calderic for a long time. Maybe she intended to make me sit on the Lord's seat and slowly observe the details of my abilities in the future. Well, anyway, for now let's just do what we can. After sorting out my complicated thoughts, I got up again. It was clear what I had to do right away. Organize information in your head and make plans for the future. Chapter 7.2. Organize. Chapter 7.2. Organize as expected. It's good to not let the seat be empty. Isn't that right, Daifon? Daifon did not respond to Rashtain's words. It was because he knew she wasn't looking for an answer, but he also had the same idea. Appointing a new lord was the sole responsibility of the Overlord, but disposing of the lord once appointed was not something even she could do on her own. If it had not been for the empty seat, it would not have been appropriate to give any other lord's seat to the newly appointed lord who had only appeared today. It was a little surprising though. What? That I gave him the position of the lord right away? Seren, I guess I should call him 7th Lord from now on. Anyway, I expected you would offer him that position the moment he's invited to the meeting. Rashtang grinned. Seeing him once was enough. Ron. When she thought about it again, he was truly a strange human being. She was genuinely surprised, especially when he discovered her disguise. It was a half-joking test, but none of the other lords previously recognized her identity at once, except for the current third lord, the Heavenly Palace. Above all, if once reached her level, they could not only see the simple external elements, but also the much more essential part within. A supreme soul reminiscent of a king. She didn't know what his true abilities were yet, but at least he was as strong as the other lords. And didn't you see it? That bored expression on his face? If I had spent a little more time unnecessarily, he would have definitely walked out. Ha ha ha. Daifan was also paying attention to Ron throughout the meeting. The other's expression didn't change so much that he thought he might refuse the position of the lord, but fortunately, that didn't happen. The seventh lord is going to move right away? Perhaps he will stay in the castle a little longer. I had sent a messenger to unlock. Yes. Anyway, you've worked hard. This outcome was even a much bigger achievement than our original purpose. There was also the plan for the chief of staff, Daifan, to move directly to Santia, but now Rashtang was only thinking about Ron. I heard he was on the Archaman convoy as a prisoner. She heard everything before the meeting started about the incident in the convoy and the situation when Daifan first met Ron, even how he killed the warrior Garten. Did you really not feel any special energy when you killed the warrior? Yes, none. Maybe I simply didn't recognize it, but I was at a close distance of less than 10 steps. Then I guess it's not magic at all. From the moment she entered the meeting hall pretending to be a servant, Rashtang had paid close attention to Ron. However, she obviously did not feel any magic power. It's ridiculous that even my senses were deceived. It's highly likely that it's a mystery. Or maybe it's a racial trait I don't know about at all. Just because he looks like he might be human doesn't mean that he really is. I wonder what kind of ability it is. Looking at her murmuring with a wide smile of interest on her lips, Daifan asked insinuatingly, "Why don't the Overlord find out more? I told you, I don't want him to become my enemy. At least, not yet. Besides, Ron wasn't even his real name." Ah, was that the case? Yeah, Rashtang knew Ron hadn't given his real name. It was easy for her to distinguish the truth from lies mixed in the other person's words. The rest of what he said was fine. But, I'd like to find out his identity myself. It surely has been a while since something like this happened, right? You mean you're going to Santia? Haha, don't be too surprised. It's not right now, but maybe later when I have time. Daifan, you always worry too much. Rashtang waved her hand and grinned. Anyway, let's watch him slowly. I'm looking forward to what our new seventh lord will do in the future. Several days passed. Life in the Overlord's castle was extremely comfortable. The meal was great, and the bed was comfortable. There was nothing inconvenient as the attendants were waiting nearby, and I could immediately order anything I needed. I was standing by the window in a daze, getting some fresh air. I could see knights gathering and training in a wide space like a plaza on one side of the castle. The reason I was still staying here instead of moving to the seventh lord's territory was because I had to organize my thoughts. I had a busy time in my own way, almost confined to my room for a few days. First, I confirmed that this world had a time difference from the background of Rasa, which I played as expected. It was the 759th year of the Racronia continental calendar, exactly 5 years in the past. Including what would happen in the future, important or even a little useful information was drawn from my memory and written, lest I forgot it. Since there was no way anyone would recognize the handwriting written in Korean, there was nothing to feel burdened by the memo. And based on the above information, I also made a rough plan for the future. What I needed most is power. Top priority, of course, was to strengthen my personal specs. I was too weak. Including personal safety issues, there were limits to what could be done with only a level 1 force. Then instant kill skill was a trump card that could kill anyone as long as there's contact, but that's all. If I could level up by killing opponents and gaining experience points, just like when I played the game, then I don't have to worry about increasing my specs. But now that the game had become a reality, unfortunately, that seemed impossible. The experience point system remained as it was. Something should have changed when I killed the warrior. In addition, there was no other systems such as stats, skill information window or inventory. I tried to mumble into the air, just in case, but nothing came out. Except for 2 skills I had, and the level indicator in my field of vision. This was almost a perfect reality. So how could I be strong in this reality? Of course, you just have to suffer and train yourself. Like those novels you have read. But I couldn't afford that. By the way, nothing had changed that showed me that I had a great talent for things like swordsmanship or magic. How much time would it take to train and become strong enough? Who would I be learning from? After a few years, would I be able to barely become strong enough to level 30? Even the weakest knight in the Overlord's castle would have a much higher level than that. Because of this, there was only one way. I just needed to gain the ability that would allow me to become stronger in an instant with no effort. Mysteries hidden all over the continent, or hidden pieces, such as ruins. Right now, there was a mystery that could be got just by traveling from the Overlord's castle to the 7th Lord's territory. It wouldn't enhance my intrinsic fighting power, but anyway, It was the only way to instantly amplify my specs in a short period. But it won't be easy after all. As with any fantasy novels, the place where the mystery was hidden was usually in a rough place. It was no different in here. Whether it be monsters or traps, I could not overcome all dangers that I would face in reaching the destination. Should I use the Lord's power to get someone who could do so? I didn't know if I should really do that if there's no other way, but doing so would make me feel uneasy. Also, there were things that couldn't be obtained unless I would go there myself. In the first place, going around the continent to find those mysteries was something I couldn't do alone. Because of this, an excellent assistant was needed. As assistant who could take responsibility for my safety anytime anywhere, yes, an escort. Chapter 8.1 Asher Granilda 1 Chapter 8.1 Asher Granilda 1 Bonus Chapter. Thank you to Jess for donating. Level 70. Considering this and that, an escort of at least level 70 was needed. It's a shabby level compared to the Lords, but in the first place, they were monsters outside the standard, and even at level 70, that was actually already very strong. If level 30 was a level that could massacre 100 ordinary soldiers alone, then level 70 could kill that level 30 easily. It won't be a problem to find an escort itself, but even if I just went to the 7th Lord's castle right away, I could find a person who met the conditions without difficulty. But the question was, how much could I trust them? What I really wanted was a helper who would always stick by my side and escort me, but of course, trust was a bigger problem than ability. Just in case, I had to have someone I could trust as an escort. It's such a burden to be in a position that didn't fit one's ability. I had done nothing yet, but just thinking about the future made me feel like I was already blocked. I let out a small sigh, and buried my back in the chair. Then, with a sudden thought, I called Karen outside the room. I want to read a book. Is there a library in the castle? Yes, there is. I asked just in case, but the answer was positive. It was said that there was not just one, but several, and even the central library existed separately. Come to think of it, there was nothing strange about having a library in the castle. The Overlord's castle did not differ from the Santia Empire's imperial palace. If you tell me the type of book you want, I will immediately get it for you. No need. I'm planning to go there myself, so guide me. I'll do that right away. Karen said something to the surrounding attendants. Surprised by this, the attendants hurriedly ran to somewhere. I was just asking for guidance. What were they doing? Anyway, I followed her to the library. Every time I met someone walking down the hallway, some of them were startled and silent. I could feel their gaze in between. I hardly showed my face, let alone did anything, but rumors about me had already spread throughout the castle. Anyway, elves, beastmen, dwarves, giants, and even some rare races. Here in Calderic, there were so many races. It was still a landscape that wasn't easy to get used to, but it would probably get better. The central library was a couple of buildings away from the building where my room was located. The square where the knights, who I saw training from the window, were near the path, so I passed by and glanced at it. As soon as I arrived at the library and entered, I saw an old man standing respectfully at the entrance, as if he had been waiting for me. Judging by the petite body, and the shape of the tail attached to the back, he was a member of the rat tribe among the beastmen. Welcome, 7th Lord. It is an honor to have you here in the central library. I was wondering why they were in such a hurry. Did they tell the news that I was coming here? An old man from the rat tribe, who introduced himself as the director, offered to guide me, but I refused because it's unnecessary. I left the two of them behind and strolled inside. The inside of the library was empty with no one, so it was quiet, with no noise. I didn't know if it was vacant from the beginning, or if they were all evicted before I came. It's very wide. After looking around, I could see why the director had offered to guide me. The classification of books by bookshelf wasn't that detailed, so it seemed like it would take quite a while to find the book I was looking for. But it didn't matter. I wasn't looking for a book with a specific content, but anything like a swordsman's book or a magic book was fine. This way, I soon found a bookshelf full of magic books and stopped walking. Then, after picking out a book, I started skimming through it. There was no problem at all reading the contents. From the moment I possessed this body for the first time, I could understand the common language of the Racronia continent, the language of this world that I had never encountered. Of course, apart from that, I couldn't understand a single thing in the book I was reading now. Magic theory. It seemed to be related to some mathematical principle, but I did not know what it was. Anyway, I can't. Turning the pages to the end, I clicked my tongue and closed the book. I didn't go here to find a magic book to leisurely learn magic. It's because when I was playing the game, sometimes there were cases where I could learn a skill from a book, shaped item like a magic book, so I wanted to try if I could find one here. However, my expectation was too high. After looking at a few more books, I neatly threw away my lingering feelings. After spending some time looking at other books, I left the library with Karen, who was waiting at the entrance. Should I ask her to make me a snack since I'm hungry? On the way back to the room while I was thinking nonsensical things, the knights training at the square came into my sight again. A lot of time had passed since a while ago, but it was still a scene where the heated training was in full swing. As I stared at them with little thought, I had no choice but to stop my gaze at one spot. It was because I suddenly discovered something disparate among the knights. LV 81, a white-haired female knight clashing swords with another knight as if sparring. Chapter 8.2 Asher Gronhilde 1. Chapter 8.2 Asher Gronhilde 1. She was the odd one out. She was on a completely different level among the knights, who were mostly at level 40. Above all, that face, it's like I had seen it somewhere. Is something the matter? When I stopped walking and stood still for a while, Karen looked puzzled. I pointed to the knights and asked, "What are they?" "They are apprentice knights belonging to the White Star Knights of the castle. They are doing their afternoon training." If it was the White Star Knights, it was an elite force directly under the Overlord. By the way, average knights from aristocratic families were around level 30. But in the Overlord castle, even those over level 40 were just apprentice knights. Oh, I remembered. That pure white hair, a knight belonging to Calderic. Of course, there was a big difference between the game graphics and the appearance in reality, but it was enough to evoke a strange familiarity. "Is that man the superior of the knights?" I asked, pointing to a man who seemed to walk around among the knights and guiding them. "Yes, the vice-captain of the 5th White Star Knights. Could you call him over here for a minute?" It was a very sudden request. Even so, Karen was taken aback for a moment. However, she immediately replied that she knew and approached the knights. She talked to the man and quickly brought him in front of me. Now this was power. LV 63, it's an infinite honor to meet the 7th Lord. I'm Kamsin, the Deputy Commander of the 5th Knights of White Star. A man frozen with tension gave a stiff salute. "There is something I want to ask you." "Yes, I will do my best to answer anything." "That white-haired woman over there." I pointed at the woman and asked, "What's her name?" Perhaps it was an unexpected question. Vice-Captain Kamsin put on a puzzled expression for a moment before replying quickly. "She's Asher, an apprentice knight. She's a newcomer who joined 3 months ago and is currently undergoing the apprenticeship process." Huh. The moment I heard that name, I felt a slight goosebump down my spine. Could there really be such a coincidence? Asher Gronhilde, one of the main protagonists of Rasa's main story. At first, she appeared as an enemy, but as the story progressed, she was incorporated into the Allied camp and was a powerful ally. She was an apprentice knight in the Overlord's castle. One natural question was bound to follow. Why did she become an apprentice knight? If the level was over 80, it was a level that could go beyond the White Star Knight's commander and become a member of the Black Star, the elite knights of the Overlord castle. She actually belonged to the Black Star Knights when she first appeared in the game. It's rough, but I know her background and circumstances. Because of this, I could come up with a plausible guess right away. She's probably still wary of her surroundings. That's why she joined while hiding her abilities. What should I do with this? After the sparring, Asher was holding the sword with no sign of fatigue. This was a great opportunity. Even if not, now I had to find a reliable escort. And if it was her, she was a character that could be trusted enough. Besides, if I could use someone who was strong enough now, but who had the potential to grow to the level of a lord in the future, she's definitely more than qualified to be an escort. The problem is how to convince her. Currently, Asher was a knight belonging to the Overlord castle. Of course, with the power of the Lord, it wouldn't be difficult to bring in an apprentice knight no matter if they belonged to the Overlord's castle, but there was another problem. Asher had a clear purpose for becoming a knight here. If I took her here with little thought, she might not only dislike me but also become hostile to me as well. Let's try it. Since I had already found her like this, it's too good to just give up and pass by. Having decided, I opened my mouth again. "When will training end?" "We plan to continue for another hour. I'd like to talk to her. Can I bring her with me when it's over?" At my words, the vice-captain became dumbfounded. This was an unexpected reaction. In Calderic, the Lord was in the sky. It was a situation where such a lord had something to do with an apprentice knight and would take them. Of course. "You can bring her with you right now." "No, an hour later," I said, with no area for refusal. I needed time to organize my thoughts before we could talk. "I'll go back first, so when training is over, bring her to my room." At my words, Karen's gaze became a little strange. I regretted it immediately. My words could definitely cause a useless misunderstanding. "I just want to talk." When I added something, she bowed her head, as if to apologize. I looked at Asher one last time and turned around. My mind went busy. How could I entice her to be my escort? Chapter 8.3 Asher Gronhilde 1. Chapter 8.3 Asher Gronhilde 1. It was about an hour later when Asher came to my room. "It's an honor to meet the 7th Lord. My name is Asher, an apprentice knight belonging to the White Star 5th Knights." Saluting with an expressionless face, she was wearing casual clothes, not greaves for training. "Sit down." I gestured to the seat opposite. After standing silently for a moment, Asher sat down. A table with 2 people sitting opposite each other. Silence pervaded the room. Slurp. I sipped my tea without saying a word, and glanced at the other side. Asher, who was staring down at the teacup in front of her, lifted her head, perhaps sensing my gaze. I vaguely felt the various emotions in those bright scarlet eyes. Tension, vigilance, and doubt. Eyes saying that she did not know what she was doing here. Honestly, this only made me more nervous. The woman sitting in front of me right now was a monster over level 80, and what I was going to say from now on would definitely irritate her greatly. But to persuade her, this would be the best way. I opened my mouth. Are you hiding your ability? Straight to the point, with no procrastination. Asher's expression slowly hardened. I don't understand why you're an apprentice knight with such skills. I wonder why you're hiding your power. I don't know what you mean. A weakly sharp, clearly wary voice. If you're going to deny it, I'll get straight to the point. Her eyes widened at my words. White Moon Tribe. I heard it was destroyed, but there's clearly a survivor. Why did you come to the Overlord's castle? The sharpened hostility immediately pierced my whole body. Compared to the aura of the Thunder Lord I had experienced during the Lord's meeting, it was far behind, but it still contained great pressure. Faced with her gaze as she glared at me with a fiercely distorted face, I said calmly, "Stop thinking about useless things. It's impossible to win against me on your own." Of course, it was a bluff. If she drew her sword and swung it here, I would die without even realizing that I was dying. But I had faith that it wouldn't. First, Asher was not the type to kill lightly. Although this was her past self when the game hadn't started yet, her nature wouldn't be different. Above all, she was not reckless enough to attack anyone much stronger than herself without hesitation. No matter how proud she was of her skills, she must know the fact that a Lord of Calderic was a different being. As if the bluff had worked, Asher bit her lip tightly and regained whatever killing intent she had released. It was embarrassing to see the blood dripping down from her bitten lip. Perhaps now she was even more confused. She was completely confused about how I knew who she was, and what my purpose was. Persuasion had just begun. Now, let's start with the negotiation. Chapter 9.1. Asher Gronhilde, 2 Chapter 9.1. Asher Gronhilde, 2 Bonus Chapter. Thank you to Melikono for the donation. It was a free break after training, but Asher had no choice but to wash off her sweat and change her clothes and go somewhere right away. As she walked behind Karen, she was lost in thought. I wonder if he was the Seventh Lord, the man who gave me a strange look during training earlier. She knew that recently rumors about the newly appointed Seventh Lord had been raging in the castle. Asher, who had recently become a knight of the Overlord Castle after a long time of wandering, knew little about Calderic. However, seeing Vice Captain Kamson, who was strict with his subordinates, frozen in front of the other, it made her realize the status of a lord. She did not know why the Seventh Lord suddenly called her. Could it be that he noticed something? She felt a slight uneasiness in the corner of her heart. Please keep in mind that the person you are about to meet is the new Seventh Lord. Please be careful with your words and actions. After hearing the last warning from Karen, they reached the last room in the long corridor. Flap! As the door closed and she faced the Seventh Lord alone, Asher greeted him with a bow. It's an honor to meet the Seventh Lord. My name is Asher, an apprentice knight belonging to the White Star Fifth Knights. The bright golden eyes gazed intently at me. Sit down. The Seventh Lord gestured to the seat opposite him. Asher sat down, feeling awkward. For a moment, there was silence in the room. The Seventh Lord savored the tea, saying nothing, and Asher, who had no place to look, stared down at the teacup. Before long, an unexpected comment cut off the silence. Are you hiding your ability? I don't understand why you're an apprentice knight with such skills. I wonder why you're hiding your power. Two questions popped into Asher's head with more bewilderment. How did you know that, and why would you ask me about it? If he noticed it from the time he was watching the training earlier, it would have been truly astonishing. At that distance, what on earth did you perceive and notice? Mana? Or some other difference? I don't know what you mean. At first it was denial. Asher calmed her agitation and looked at the reaction of the Seventh Lord. He continued talking without changing his expression at all. If you're going to deny it, I'll get straight to the point. Main point? Until this very moment, she hadn't realized it yet. That the previous worry was not important at all. White Moon Tribe. Her heart sank. I heard it was destroyed, but there's clearly a survivor. Why did you come to the Overlord's castle? For a moment, Asher's mind went blank, and she could say nothing. How? She could somehow understand that he noticed she hid her true abilities. But how did he find out that she was a white moon? It was the deepest secret that no one knew anymore, and none should have ever known. It was a reflexive and unconscious action to show hostility at the being in front of her, who casually revealed such a secret. Stop thinking about useless things. It's impossible to win against me on your own. Asher suddenly came to her senses at the indifferent voice she heard. The gaze of the Seventh Lord was infinitely deep and calm. Feeling overwhelmed by the static intimidation, she slowly withdrew her hostility. Yes, it's impossible. The being sitting in front of her right now was a Lord of Calderic, a top-notch powerhouse in all the continent, an existence that was said to be stronger than the monstrous 5-star of Santia. Just looking at the fact that he saw through her hidden power at one glance, The difference in rank was definitely quite large. Any attempt, be it a surprise attack or escape, would be futile. Feeling helpless at that fact, Asher bit her lip tightly. She could taste the fishy taste of her blood. I came all the way to this place, overcoming despair and despondency to move on. But would this be the end before I could even try anything? What do you want from me? Trembling with resentment, she squeezed her voice out, and the seventh Lord made a strange expression. You seem to misunderstand something. I'm not trying to threaten you. What are you so afraid of? At those words, Asher gritted her teeth. She couldn't say anything. No one would understand unless they were the person involved. The sorrow of losing both their family and their home. The loneliness and anxiety of being thrown into the world as a single survivor. The pressure of wanting to do something. This was Calderic, not Santia. A land of power and opportunity where one could grab what they wanted if they had the ability. In her head, Asher knew that too. However, the wariness deeply imprinted in her heart from the day her tribe was destroyed made her unable to trust anyone or anything easily. But what the hell did this person even know? I do understand. Asher was taken aback. I can understand. The longing and sadness you have deep inside your heart, the anxiety and solitude. All the excessive vigilance you show me right now must have originated from that. Right? What the hell was this guy talking about? Asher looked at the seventh Lord with a slightly dazed expression. His mouth opened again. I will help you. Chapter 9.2. Asher Gronhilda 2. Chapter 9.2. Asher Gronhilda 2. There were various races in Rasa's worldview. Leaving the demons out of the question, from humans, elves, beastmen, with the most dominant population and power, to many other weak and rare races. The White Moon was a rare race with a tiny population. A race that appeared to be beings no different from humans, but possesses the ability to convert magical powers into their own unique properties. Most times, the weaker races did not mix with the world and live in tribal units in wild lands. The White Moon tribe lived peacefully in their own home in the Altan Great Mountains in the extreme west of Santia. The infall came suddenly. Just a few years ago, from the present point, the White Moon tribe was completely annihilated by Santia, leaving only one survivor. Asher, now sitting in front of me, was the only survivor. If I remembered correctly, she wandered for a long time to find other survivors. But Asher couldn't find anyone. Despite taking all kinds of risks for several long years, and wandering around the continent, and asking around, there was not a single person. After a long time of wandering, the place where she settled was Calderic. Because she couldn't give up hope in the end. Other than herself, there must be another survivor somewhere. Calderic was a land that valued one's ability above all else. If she proved her worth and established herself here, if she could make a name for herself throughout the continent as a White Moon warrior, maybe some survivors would hear the news and come find her. Even if they didn't come, she might aim for even the smallest opportunity to take revenge on Santia by building up strength and power. Asher came to Calderic with that thought in mind. The reason she hid her power and identity to be an apprentice knight was so she could observe the atmosphere, since she just arrived at Calderic. The White Moon tribe was usually indistinguishable from humans, but because of their unique trait, their entire body turned white when they exert their strength. Eventually, soon, she fully revealed herself and became a Black Star Knight of the Overlord Castle. But, I will help you. Now before that happened, I should first put her to my side. I then opened my mouth. I can roughly guess the purpose of your coming to Calderic. Either to spread fame and make other survivors of your tribe reach out to you, or to get revenge on Santia. Maybe it's both. Judging by your expression, it seems to be the correct answer. Asher's face was now full of astonishment. It was a natural reaction, since it seemed like I could see through her inner thoughts perfectly. Time had come to bring out the main purpose of this talk. If that's your purpose, then I suggest you become my escort knight. Asher became dumbfounded for a moment. She's probably wondering what kind of nonsense this was. What? I will do many things from now on. So become my escort and follow me around. It will be a good opportunity to spread your reputation throughout the continent as the sword of the seventh Lord of Calderic, as my closest aide, and as a warrior of the White Moon tribe. Don't you think borrowing my name is much more effective in achieving your goals than relying on your own strength? It was the perfect excuse. My suggestion would be a very effective way to achieve the goal of spreading fame as widely as possible across the continent. Asher blinked silently. Then she asked me again with a wary face that showed that he couldn't understand. Why? Yes, of course you would ask that. It was an expected reaction. To her, my proposal would feel like a one-sided courtesy for no reason. In her mind, beings like a lord wouldn't do this, because they really needed an escort. Of course, I really needed an escort to act as my arms and legs, but I couldn't tell her the truth. There is no particular reason, I said dryly. If I had to explain it, it's because I understand your situation, and because your ability caught my eye, by chance. That's why I was naturally interested in you. Asher was still mixed with disbelief. After all, I couldn't convince her with such an ambiguous answer. A good reason, huh? I thought hard about it for an hour before we started this conversation, but in the end, I couldn't find any other good excuse. I thought of a typical scenario of having some kind of relationship with her tribe, but it didn't feel very plausible. What could a human being have to do with a minority race living deep in the mountains? Also, even if I concocted a story, there was a high risk that I would be caught in that lie easily, because I knew little about the white moon. Therefore, the conclusion that came to the end was to ignore that. For now, it was enough to make Asher accept my offer somehow. In the first place, it was arrogance to gain trust by exposing all the other person's circumstances and secrets from the first meeting. I could slowly build a friendly relationship with her up in time. You still don't have an answer. But is the reason for me doing this really that important? I stress that point once again. I want you to become an escort knight so that you achieve your goals more easily. That's all. Whatever the reason, my proposal was a great opportunity for Asher. There was no way for her now to have a better plan than borrowing the prestige of a lord. Asher's eyebrows narrowed. It was a sign of deep distress. Further words would be unreasonable, so I quietly sipped my tea while waiting for an answer. After being silent for a while, she opened her mouth. If you want to make me your subordinate, you can do as you wish, but why are you making such an offer and seeking my approval for the matter? A lord could do as much as they liked by taking an apprentice knight as a subordinate without their consent. Because I respect your wishes. Like I said, I'm not threatening you with your secret. If you have other better plan, you can decline the offer. Even though I said that, I knew my offer was hard to refuse. The words secret and better plan were subtly inserted intending to pressure her a little. Last question, how did you know I belong to the White Moon tribe? It's part of my abilities. I succinctly dismissed the question. This was a world where magic, mysteries, and many abilities existed, so it was enough to pass it like that casually. Asher, who was looking at me with slightly dissatisfied eyes, said, as if she finally decided, I accept the offer. I will become an escort knight for the 7th Lord. Finally, I smiled inwardly in satisfaction. Did you say your name is Asher? Do you have a last name? Gronhilda. Asher hesitated before uttering her full name. My name is Asher Gronhilda. Asher Gronhilda, the only survivor of the White Moon tribe. In the game, she served as a powerful helper for the player, and a character with the potential to become just as strong as the Lords of Calderic. Right now, she wouldn't fully trust me and would be wary, but she would stick with me from now on, so there's plenty of time to build trust. Anyway, with this, a reliable escort was obtained. It was time to head to the 7th Lord's territory. Chapter 10.1 Super Regeneration 1 Chapter 10.1 Super Regeneration 1 Taking Asher as an escort was not as difficult as expected. When I told Karen about it, as always, she just said that she knew and didn't ask for any more details. I didn't know if this could be called personnel transfer, but anyway, Karen would take care of it with no problems. After that, without delay, we prepared to leave for and rock the 7th Lord's territory. There was a hidden piece I could get on the way there. It was a rough terrain with many monsters, so I was worried about whether I should skip it, but now that Asher was my escort, I now had a solution. Why did so many people gather? I looked at the colorful four-wheeled carriage parked at the entrance of the castle. It's the one I would ride to and rock. Many people around it, including knights, were already on horseback and waiting. It was the manpower of the Overlord. They asked me how should they prepare, so I told them to prepare however they wanted, and this was a procession that went beyond what I had imagined. Then, take care, 7th Lord. Chief of Staff Dayfun said goodbye. The Overlord was away at the moment, so he came out to see me off instead. Good timing. I glanced at Asher, who was standing next to me. I thought it was rather fortunate that Asher had been secretly concerned about being noticed by the Overlord. If it was her, there would be nothing strange if she recognized Asher's level at once. In any case, it did not differ from stealing the castle's talent. Considering the Overlord's personality, she probably wouldn't care much, but still anyway, even if she heard about it later, it's best to just take Asher from here now. As for the coronation ceremony, if you change your mind, please let me know. If nothing special happens, then I'll see you at the next Lord's meeting. Coronation. I had already expressed my intention not to hold an official coronation ceremony. It was needlessly cumbersome, and I didn't want to be caught in the middle of the Lords again. I probably wouldn't see the Overlord or the other Lords again until the next council meeting. I was even thinking of avoiding it, although that would probably be impossible. Until then, I have to raise my specs enough. At the next meeting, there was a high probability that they would assign me a task that would be difficult to avoid. Time was 1 year. At least until then, I had to do my best to raise my specs as much as possible. We will set off. After getting on the carriage, the procession moved noisily. It was the beginning of a serious struggle. From the capital of Dragor to the capital of Enrock, it's like moving from the center of one country to another. Of course, it was a very long distance, so it would take a considerable amount of time to arrive while passing by many cities in the middle. It would be convenient and nice to just teleport there, just like what Daifun did in the convoy ship, But teleport in this world was not a convenient magic that one could use anytime, anywhere. Riding the wagon felt unfamiliar at first, but since humans were creatures of adaptation, I could adapt enough to the situation. Since the roads were not paved, the ride was uncomfortable, but not to the extent that it was unbearable. Other than that, the servants were prepared for meals and sleeping, so it was not too inconvenient. I quickly got used to it and killed boredom in my limited space reading books I brought with me or organizing and checking information on my notebook while idly looking at the scenery outside. It would have been much less boring if I had someone to talk to, but unfortunately, there wasn't one. Although there were many people around me, they were almost the same as being non-existent. Tup. I closed the book I was reading and looked at the seat opposite. Asher sat in an undisturbed posture with one hand close to the hilt of her sword. Unlike me, who was doing this and that, Asher spent the whole day in the carriage doing nothing, in that same state. I asked her, "Aren't you bored?" As if it was surprising that I asked such a question, Asher replied with a strange expression. "It's not boring. I'll lend you a book to read." "No need, my lord." A resolute refusal, as if saying she would be faithful to her escort mission. And the conversation was over. I sighed inwardly and looked outside the carriage again. I'd rather look at the wall and talk. I had the idea of having a conversation with Asher as we rode in the carriage together. As one could see, the result was something like this. No matter what I asked, what came back was a simple response, so it was difficult to continue the conversation. I was grateful that she was doing her duty diligently as an escort, but this was almost the same as having a stone statue riding with me. I knew she had this personality, but as expected, building closeness and trust with her in the future would be difficult. The flow of my thoughts suddenly led to one place. About the hidden piece I needed to take care of before arriving at our destination. Chapter 10.2 Super Regeneration 1 Chapter 10.2 Super Regeneration 1 coming up ahead. Thank you to Heavy for sponsoring 10 chapters. Except for the Holy Sword, there were three main types of power in this world: magic, racial traits, and mystery. In the actual gameplay, there was no such distinction, and all were unified as a skill system, but once set up, they divided it like this. Magical power was the most general and wide-ranging power that did not differ from the core of this world. Basically, it was a power that anyone could handle with effort, but of course there were differences depending on innate talents and races. Except for some races such as demons, humans had the most affinity for magic. Racial traits, as the name suggested, were a characteristic possessed by a particular race. For humans, it was the affinity for magical power, for beastmen, physical ability, and for dwarves, dexterity. In addition, it was not simply being excellent at a particular field, but there were also unique characteristics that only that race possessed, such as the power over spirits handled by the elves, the blood skills of vampires, and the white magic of the White Moon tribe. Last, mystery. Mystery was an unidentified power whose source was unknown. Because it was extremely rare, very few people owned it, and some mysteries were even so powerful that it just made no sense. On Earth, magical powers and racial traits were all supernatural powers beyond common sense. But in the concept of this world, mysteries were probably the one considered as supernatural powers. The most important part was this. It's just these mysteries were very difficult to find, but once you found it and get it, anyone could use it without conditions. In short, it was the most suitable and almost the only way to improve my abilities in a short period. The hidden piece I planned to find on my way to my destination was also a mystery. Super Regeneration. A healing type of mystery that amplified the body's regenerative power. The mystery of super regeneration was location deep in the Rudis Mountains, where the city of Genix was, on the border of the Overlord's territory. We haven't even reached the first city yet, so it's a long way to Genix. In fact, going past Genix was a bit of a detour, but if I could get that mystery, then it wouldn't be a big deal if my arrival was delayed. There's no need to worry too much. I glanced at Asher again. Until I found the place where the super regeneration was hidden, it was her job as an escort to make sure that the monsters on the mountain didn't touch me. Considering her level, there shouldn't be any problem. Even in such a situation, she was only focused on her job as an escort, so I didn't have to worry that she wouldn't do her job. Of course, that didn't mean that perfect safety was guaranteed, but this level of risk would happen more in the future, so I should get used to it. Still, if I started with super regeneration, I wonder if my life would be easier. It would have been much better if it was a defense type of ability, but well, I had to take care of what I could get first. I looked out the window. Across the vast plain, I saw a series of mountain ranges like a picture. It was a wonderful natural scenery. More time passed, and the carriage passed through several cities and finally arrived in Genix City. Located at the foot of a mountain range, Genix had a stronger fortress compared to other cities they passed by. Having the Seventh Lord visit our humble city is an honor for us. Genix's mayor was a middle-aged human male. He seemed much more calm than the mayor of the previous city, who groaned and spit out many praises. I walked with him and asked, "Who in this city is the best in the geography of Rudis Mountains?" The mayor pondered with a mixed expression of doubt, then answered cautiously, "Unfortunately, I don't know who is the best, but I think the adventurers of the Adventurers Guild know the geography of the mountain range. I need a guide to go deep into the mountains. Find someone suitable, whether it be an adventurer or someone else." I remember where the mystery of super regeneration was hidden. However, I didn't have the confidence to go there with no proper guide. Inevitably, there would be a big difference between the map seen through the computer monitor and the real world. This world was a game, but it was now my reality. The specifications of the field itself were different when playing the game. The overall map size of most games was unrealistically small compared to reality. So much so that one could move from one area to another on foot. That was just a natural setting in the game since it was impossible to make the player take a year to travel. I always needed to keep this difference in mind. Just as it took a long time to get from the Overlord's castle to this place, Genix, the actual size of this continent would be thousands of times much bigger than in the game. Since it was completely unknown what terrain or objects would fill the gap between them, a guide would be absolutely necessary. There's no way the location of the hidden piece will be different. It wasn't just the terrain, it was a problem with the setting of the game. I added to the mayor, "If anyone knows of a huge hourglass-shaped rock located deep in the mountains north of the city, be sure to bring them." Hourglass rock was a sure signpost to find the mystery. Chapter 11.1 Super Regeneration 2 Chapter 11.1 Super Regeneration 2 The Rudis mountain range was vast. After crossing the foot of the mountain and entering the wooded area, I realized that bringing a guide was the best choice. How could one find their way in such a complicated place? If I only set out relying on my memory, I would have quickly lost my way back, let alone find the place where the mystery was hidden. Finding the mystery seems to be more difficult than I thought. After all, nothing was easy in this world. After a short distraction, I took my eyes off the flowing valley water and got up. "Keep going." "Yes, my lord." Han, who had been examining the surrounding land, moved in the lead again. Asher and I followed suit, not to mention Asher. Han wasn't also at a low level, so they couldn't tire of hiking like this, but I was different. So, whenever I ran out of strength, I had no choice but to take a break like this, pretending to enjoy the surrounding scenery. If they even saw him panting unsightly, the Lord's authority would fall to the ground. It would have been nice if this damn body was above average. Still, I wasn't the only one suffering, so I stopped complaining. Khan, who was working hard as a guide, looked stiff even at a glance from earlier. My existence was quite burdensome, but even that was much better than when we started. I got it. He probably would have never imagined that in his life as an adventurer he would one day guide a lord. "How far into the mountains have we gone?" I suddenly became curious and asked Khan. I remember that some powerful monsters also inhabited the depths of Rudis Mountains. I've never been to a deep place. There were many ferocious monsters, so it's a dangerous place for me. "What monsters have you encountered?" The one I remember the most was a giant bear. But it's not a normal bear, because it had sharp spikes sticking all over its body. He meant spike bear. As I asked about this and that, the tension seemed to have eased up, and Khan talked a lot. Originally, he had a talkative personality. And there's also a crazy rumor going around lately. An adventurer said he saw an absurdly gigantic snake in the mountains to the north. Giant snake? If it's to the north, then it would be somewhere here. There was a time when that adventurer made a fuss about how no one would stop such a monster coming down to the city, that it would be a mess in no time, and that we would have to call the Overlord's castle for reinforcements when it happened. What happened next? First, the mayor listened and said that they would form an investigation team with the Adventurers Guild, but of course, most don't believe it. According to the story, it's a snake that's much bigger than the city walls, but Rudis Mountains aren't a demonic place. Would it make sense for that kind of monster to be here? A snake bigger than the walls of the fortress-like city of Genix. A list of snake-type monsters flashed through my head. Among them, only one came to mind. Belivagora? He's not in a green mountain range like this, but a named boss that actually lived in the Devil's Realm. I wondered if I was just thinking too much, and it was just a normal species of giant snake. Do giant snakes even appear in the Rudis Mountains? Well, in reality, only certain monsters appeared in certain areas. Giant snakes lived in forest areas, so it wouldn't be strange for it to appear here. If it's a full adult, its basic level would be at level 50, so it's a sufficiently catastrophic monster by normal standards. But even if we actually ran into it, it probably wouldn't be a problem. We had an even bigger on our side, Asher, and the chance of us bumping into such a monster in this vast mountain range would probably be low. Rustle. Then the nearby bushes shook and something appeared. LV.22 A wolf. Its belly was larger than normal, and at the end of its long tail was something thick and pointed like a mace. Flail wolf. Khan put his hand on the hilt of his sword with a nervous ace. With its gaze fixed on the side, the wolf had turned its tail and let out a low cry before charging towards us. A flash of blue light split it in half. Scattered blood. The chunk of meat, neatly cut in two, rolled across the ground and scattered noisily. I blinked and looked at the corpse, then moved my gaze to the side. With an expressionless face, I could see Asher putting back the sword she had pulled out. Khan, half stunned, looked back and forth between the half-cut corpse and Asher. I pretended nothing was wrong. Let's go. Ah yes, after all, there was no need to worry about monsters, because a strong escort was with them. Chapter 11.2 Super Regeneration 2 Chapter 11.2 Super Regeneration 2 The deeper we went into the mountains, the more often we encountered monsters. Besides the many beast-type monsters, including the spike bear mentioned by Khan, we also encountered a troll, a fairly powerful monster. There were no attacks in the middle of the night, but in the middle of a bright day and breakfast, sometimes wild birds the size of humans suddenly flew from somewhere. Not long after they started moving again, they were surrounded by a herd of wild boars. These guys weren't ordinary beasts either. They were monsters called armor boar, whose whole body was as hard as armor. Chow! As Asher swung her sword, the huge sword energy that spread horizontally cut them all in one blow. Seeing the forest with blood, she was playing the role of an escort perfectly. If none of the monsters we encountered came within 5 meters of me, I asked Khan, "Do you encounter monsters this often every time you climb the mountain?" "I don't run into them that often. Usually, I'm strictly vigilant so that I don't run into them." Khan explained that if he saw even an ominous sign, he retreated or turned in a different direction. It meant that he was only going straight, regardless of whether he found a trail. He probably realized that there's no reason to be careful after seeing Asher's strength. It would be just a waste of time. We arrived at the bottom of a cliff by the time the sun rose in mid-sky. It was a cliff high enough to be dozens of meters high, but Khan spat out absurd words. "If you go up here and move a little further, we will arrive at our destination." "What?" I looked at him, wondering what kind of bullshit he was saying, and Khan only smiled awkwardly. "Oh, I'm fine. It's a terrain with many places to step on, and I'm used to it because I've already climbed this kind of height once or twice." "No, I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about me." I looked up at the cliff. I forgot about it for a while, but for the superhumans in this world, climbing a cliff with no gears was no big deal. The cliff was not a blocked road, but a path that could only be climbed. "Is this the only path?" "Yes. If we look for it, there might be another way, but it's a long way back." "Then, I'll go up first." Khan said that and moved first. The other probably didn't think that I wouldn't be able to climb this much. Should I have brought a wizard as well? Khan clung to the wall like a lizard and started climbing the cliff quickly. I looked at him in dismay, then moved my gaze to Asher. Not that it came to this, there's no helping it. "Asher." "Yes. Carry me up." "Yes." Asher looked back with a doubtful expression, as if she was not sure if she heard me correctly. I said it again as boldly as possible. "I told you to carry me up." There was silence for a while. She had a complicated expression on her face, showing that she couldn't understand the intention of the order, but soon she knelt down and gave her back to me obediently. "Go on." And it took only a moment for us to arrive at the top. It was because her body rose as if it exploded with just one cloud of footsteps, and we reached the top of the cliff without even stepping on the wall. Most rides had a dizzying speed and the sense that your stomach was being emptied, but somehow I could withstand that and prevent myself from screaming. I didn't want to do that twice. I calmed down the tingling aftertaste and got off Asher's back. Looking down, Khan was about a third of the way up. I thought he could come up soon. If Asher helped him, he could arrive here quickly. It's weird to ask Asher that again. I just waited. Asher stared somewhere. I reflexively looked where her gaze was directed, but there was nothing. Instantly, the fishy smell stung my nostrils. The smell of blood. It was a bloody scent that I could easily recognize. Soon after, Khan, who arrived at the top, also looked around, shaking off the dust from his clothes, as if he also smelled the scent. He even commented, "It looks like there are some dead bodies of monsters nearby." We continued to move. The further into the forest, the stronger the scent of blood. We seemed to get closer to the source. When we reached a certain point, everyone was at a loss for words at the sight unfolding in front of us. The identity of the corpse was that of a huge snake. A huge snake with a gray coat, the size of a head and the length of a human body. It was, without a doubt, a giant snake. What stood out was that it was dead. The middle of the torso was cut off. No, it wasn't cut off, but the middle of the torso was completely gone. It was as if something much bigger than itself had eaten it in one bite. Chapter 11.3 Super Regeneration 2 Chapter 11.3 Super Regeneration 2 This guy, was the rumored. Khan opened his mouth and murmured. A giant snake that was said to be spotted in the northern mountains. But it didn't matter at all whether this guy was the subject of the rumor or not. Because it's dead. Who killed it? I looked around. As I looked for traces, as I did a quick sweep of the nearby ground, a strange scene of fallen trees was reflected. Zwick! A faint sound echoed in my ears for a moment. The ground shook with the eerie sound that seemed to stimulate life's instinctive fear. The overgrown bushes on one side collapsed, and something huge came toward us. Still, no one could move. Coo coo coo! Before long, the overwhelming presence raised its body and cast a shadow on the ground. Both Asher and Khan looked at it with shocked faces. LV.90 It was a huge, dark snake. It would not be strange to say that it was not a snake, but a dragon, a snake that was definitely gigantic enough to make the dead giant snake seem like a newborn baby snake. I was well aware of its identity. Belivagora, one of the named bosses of the demon realm. The first thing I thought of when I heard the story of the giant snake, but I honestly believed that it would not be in a place like this. Why the hell are you here? The answer to the question came right away. This was the 5 years into the past before the game started. It hadn't moved to the demon realm yet. That's right. If that was the case, then it actually made sense. I just never imagined that the giant snake of the rumors would really be this guy. Swick! A huge torn pupil came out and scanned the other two. It was as if it was contemplating which food to try first. Khan had a face that seemed like he would faint at any moment, and Asher was no different. Far from preparing for battle, her face turned white, and I could see that the hand holding the sword hilt was shaking. Just like a frog before a snake. Is this fear? Some monsters had a kind of fear ability that caused extreme fear and panic in weaker targets. Belivagora was one of them. No matter how strong Asher was, there was no choice but to be greatly influenced by the fear of the opponent with a much higher level. Even if one fought in perfect condition, they wouldn't be able to run properly when there was no chance of winning. Because I had the soul of a king, fear did not affect me. Still, it didn't change that the situation was the worst. How could I quickly become out of luck? I promised to take a certain risk, but it's already a crisis like this. I seriously wanted to laugh at this dumbfounding situation. As long as I could touch it somehow. I knew I had no choice but to survive in this situation. I only needed one contact. It would be the end if I died from being crushed by that gigantic body before I had the time to activate my skill. But he had no choice but to risk his life. I walked slowly towards Belivagora, an overwhelming size that left one speechless. It was absurd that she didn't even feel its presence, even though I was right next to it. Asher knew for the first time at this moment that such a gigantic creature existed in the world. She also instinctively felt that even if she fought it with all her might, she could never win. No, she couldn't even fight right now. I can't move my body, my breath stopped just by facing it. It's hard to even lift a finger. She gnashed her teeth and resisted fear. She did everything in her power to straighten out the fighting spirit that was about to be broken. But she still couldn't pull out her sword. The fear that engulfed her from the depths of her heart couldn't be shaken off, no matter what. All she could do was feel hopeless and helpless, and desperately raised her magical power to free herself from the bondage. It was then. The sound of footsteps breaking the silence. Her eyes widened. The seventh lord was slowly approaching the monster. With a light step, like as if this terrible pressure had no effect on him. The monster tilted its head and slowly lowered its head. The slightest movement raised wind pressure and made the ground tremble. It was as if it was wondering why there was a prey that could move casually. A distance close enough to touch if you stretch out your hand. The seventh lord standing right in front of the monster looked like he was in danger, as if it would suck him in if it opened its mouth and breathed in. The seventh lord slowly reached out his hand. To Asher, it was a calm gesture that did not contain any murderous intent or energy. And the moment his fingertips touched the monster, he smiled and said softly, "Did I look like your prey?" Kuam! The huge body of the monster collapsed with a huge vibration. Chapter 12.1 Super Regeneration 3 Chapter 12.1 Super Regeneration 3 Belivagora's body collapsed and hit the ground. I almost fell over from the shock, but I regained my balance. I looked at the fallen snake, literally feeling as if I had barely come back alive from the threshold of hell. It died instantly with its eyes open, as if its soul had just disappeared, leaving behind a huge shell. That was really close, just by their size difference. It was comparable to a human and an ant. If Belivagora just flicked his tongue, I would have been thrown off somewhere and died an unsightly death. I had to say that I was really lucky. When I finally made contact safely, the ecstasy rose to the point of nonsense. Even when I was on the verge of death, I still had that kind of composure. My mind must have gone twisted somewhere because of the soul of the king. Ugga, hearing that limp moan, I turned to where the two were. I saw Khan slumped on the floor with a face that seemed like his soul was drained. Asher stood with her eyes wide open, staring blankly at me. She was finally released from the effects of fear. The atmosphere was engulfed in silence, so I said nothing. It's a monster that wasn't supposed to be in a place like this. There was no clear response. Khan was almost exhausted because of shock and fear. So, he continued moving after taking a break for a while. Sorry. While I was sitting on a rock and looking at Belivagura's corpse, Asher said something out of the blue. I turned my head and looked at her. Basically, Asher's expressionless face made it difficult to read her emotions, but I clearly saw that the other had a sullen expression. After thinking about what she apologized for, all of a sudden, I realized. Is she saying that she failed to escort me properly? This was a completely unexpected disaster. It was far beyond her ability, so there was no reason to blame her. How could she deal with a monster that a lord could only deal, or someone of the same level? However, she could not tolerate that she did not fulfill her responsibilities properly. She just had that kind of personality. Asher was a person who had that kind of stubbornness, serious in everything and infinitely strict with herself. Or is it because of that? Perhaps it was the shock of not being able to resist even the slightest in front of Bellavagora. I opened my mouth. Some monsters and species that emit fear are rare. Asher blinked, a reaction showing that she didn't understand what I was trying to say. She probably also didn't know about fear. Fear was a kind of ability that had little information about because monsters that had it were rare. At her level, even if she met other monsters that emitted fear, she probably would not have been affected at all. So, it was unreasonable if this unfamiliar experience hurt her pride. It is an ability that causes fear, especially in opponents weaker than oneself. Usually, they completely lose the will to fight and fall into a panic. Only then did Asher look back at Bellavagora's corpse as if surprised. You probably never experienced it before. Yes, that little creature was so powerful that it was rare to see even in the demonic realm. At the words of consolation, Asher looked a little taken aback. She nodded her head without answering, then closed her mouth again and returned to silence. So, it's hard to know what she was thinking. Soon, Khan also came back to his senses. If you're not feeling well, get some more rest. Oh no, I'm really sorry for bothering you. Khan seemed exhausted, but seemed to have recovered enough to move his body. Since he was exposed to the fear of a level 90 monster, it's already good that he did not faint. Perhaps this was just a short hike in his adventurer's life, but he wondered if it would be one of the most memorable adventure for him. If something like that had really come down to the city, it would have been ruin. As if he still couldn't feel the reality, Khan muttered blankly as he looked at Bellavagora's corpse. Then, as he turned his head this way, his eyes met mine, and for some reason, he flinched excessively and lowered his head. Wasn't his expression the same one he had when he first saw Bellavagora? Are you treating me as a monster? It was not an incomprehensible reaction. In their eyes, it would have looked like I killed the monster just by touching it. Asher was pretending to be okay, but she was still secretly glancing at the corpse. Anyway, since the crisis had safely passed, it was time to complete my purpose for coming here. Let's move. All around, thick black trees were coloring the forest dark. The hidden piece was close at hand. Chapter 12.2 Super Regeneration 3 Chapter 12.2 Super Regeneration 3 As Khan said, it didn't take long before we finally reached our destination. A huge rock lying alone in the middle of the forest. Compared to the fat top and bottom, the middle part was constricted, and anyone could see that its shape was like an hourglass. We finally arrived. With the hourglass rock found, all that remained was to find the entrance. Near to the rock was a cliff. It was a much lower cliff than the one we climbed earlier. It seems like it was roughly that way, isn't it? Is it over there? I looked around and guessed the direction. However, my memory was ambiguous, and I was confused when I saw it in person, so I decided to just check it carefully. I wandered around the base of the cliff, carefully examining everything. The two followed me without saying a word, with faces that didn't know what they were doing. After several tens of minutes, I found a fine crack on one side of the wall that was vertically split at a height similar to mine. I could feel the faint chill seeping from the crack. Asher. Yes. Break this gap moderately wide. Asher looked at the gap I pointed out and raised her hand, saying nothing. I took a slight step back. Quetang. The wall crumbled as energy burst from her palm pressed against the crack. The inside of the chasm was hollow, like a cave, with an entrance large enough for 1 or 2 people to enter. Asher and Khan widened their eyes at the appearance of the hidden passage. Wait here. Leaving the two at the entrance, I went inside alone. The air was cold. The passage led down a gentle slope, but as soon as I descended a little, the light from outside could no longer be seen, and I quickly lost sight of anything ahead. At that moment, I took out a glowstone I had brought. When I unwrapped the tightly wrapped cloth wrapping the stone, a bright white light spread, and the surrounding instantly became brighter. Bugs attached to the wall of the cave also appeared. There were quite a few things, like cockroaches and centipedes. He clicked his tongue once and continued to move forward. As the slope gradually continued downhill, I had to take my steps carefully. When I finally reached the point where I couldn't go down without touching the ground with my hands, I broke out in a cold sweat. If I slipped, I'd be done for. Was the slope here originally in this shape? How much deeper would this slope be until I reached my destination? I put the glowstone I was holding in my mouth and touched the ground with both hands. It was fortunate that the ground was bumpy, so there was plenty of space to step on. As long as it doesn't get steeper than this, I won't fall unless I stumble stupidly. In an instant, my feet slipped on the ground, and my body collapsed. Fuck. Why did it have to be a flag as soon as I said it? I desperately touched the floor with my hands, but it was enough. My body rolled down the slope like a wheel into the darkness. Kulan! The fall stopped only after I felt a terrifying shock to my head and arms. I wriggled for a while, then I got up. My whole body throbbed, and I felt a fishy taste in my mouth. Ugh! I felt like something was flowing down my face. When I wiped it off, my hands were soaked in red. It was blood. With a distorted expression, I wiped the blood from my chin and looked down at my left arm. Likewise, it was so tattered and covered in blood that I could barely even move it. It might even look like it was broken. It was the first time I had ever been hurt this badly, so I was embarrassed for a moment, but it soon subsided coldly. The sharp pain stabbing my arm was excruciatingly painful, but my reason was not disturbed, as always. After a moment of heavy breathing, I stumbled and looked around. At the end of the downhill, I saw a small aisle bent to the side. Did it open like that after I hit it from rolling down? It was a far short reward for my body being in disrepair, but I descended the slope in an instant anyway. I picked up the glowstone with my free arm and walked into the aisle. A tingling pain came up every time I stepped on my right foot, as if I had sprained my ankle, but not that painful that I couldn't walk. As I progressed, the aisle gradually widened, and a faint green light leaked from the inside. Wow! When I finally reached the end, I spit out a short admiration at the unfolding scenery. A wide and empty cavity, with a green pattern engraved on the floor in the middle, emitting a soft light. I forgot the pain and smiled brightly as I limped towards the pattern. I knew what it was, so I didn't hesitate to approach it. I finally found it. Mystery of super regeneration. It's bigger than I thought. The mysterious pattern was close to a circle like a magic circle, but it was so large that it was several meters in diameter. Approaching it, I just stared down at it for a while. I found it, but I didn't know how to get this mystery. In the game, a message would pop up saying that once you found it and got close to it, you could get the mystery on its own. Can I just touch it? There was no other way, so I got down on one knee and stretched my hand towards the pattern. Hawak! Then, the light of the pattern burst brightly for an instant. I panicked and almost let go, then stopped. It's because the light climbed up my hand that touched it, and was absorbed into my body. Soon all the light was absorbed, and the pattern disappeared without a trace. The cavity sank into darkness. Feeling a little bewildered, I removed my hand from the floor and looked down at my left arm. Broken wounds were healing and regenerating in an instant. Chapter 13. Super Regeneration 4. Chapter 13. Super Regeneration 4. Broken bones stuck together, torn skin healed, and new flesh grew. It took only a few tens of seconds for the tattered arm to full regenerate. I clenched my fist and checked my condition. My wounds had all completely recovered. The same for the head wound and the sprained ankle. The body, which had been damaged until just a moment ago, returned to its normal state in an instant. What a cheat! Indeed, it was an ability worthy of the name Super Regeneration. Suddenly, curiosity arose. At this level, could severed body parts be regenerated? Super Regeneration in the game was just a passive skill that amplified the recovery of HP. Whether severed body parts were regenerated, it did not show it. However, that didn't mean that I would cut off a part of my intact body just to check it out. I was just curious. In any case, the first mystery was successfully obtained. Feeling refreshed, I picked up the glowstone and stood up. Although the wounds had healed, the bloodstains on it were still there. I couldn't go outside in this state, so I washed away the bloodstains with a canteen of water, and it soaked into my clothes. The walls and the ground of the cavity were full of bugs, just like the passage through here. As I looked at them, another thought came to my mind. I narrowed my eyes and looked alternately at the blood and insects that had fallen on the floor. Instant kill. The only attack skill I had. It was described as a skill that could kill any target once I contacted it. The question that came to my mind was this. What exactly did this contact mean? Until now, it was only natural to think of it as contact through the body. However, if one thought about it carefully, they need to consider how far the standard of this body was. For example, blood was also part of the body. Then, was the target that came into contact with my blood also within the range of instant kill? I definitely need to experiment. I picked up a bug that was crawling under my feet. Then, after putting the bug back on the spot where my blood fell, I activated instant kill. However, the bug did not die and was still alive. I was a little disappointed with the results that were out of my expectations, and I thought of other possibilities. Maybe it's because the blood had been discharged from the body for a long time. Well, let's test it. I found a sharp piece of stone on the ground and picked it up. I could heal even broken bones in an instant, so cuts were no longer a big deal. When I pressed the palm of my hand with the crude blade, the flesh tore open and blood flowed out. The wound immediately regenerated. I dripped the blood from my palm on the insects crawling on the floor. Then, when I activated instant kill again, to my surprise, they all died. The bugs no longer wriggled and moved. It's the same even if I poked at my finger. This time, it was real instant death. I tried a few more times with different bugs to be sure. The results were all the same. Only then was I convinced that my guess was correct. I can trigger instant kill not only through skin contact but also through blood. However, it's assumed that there was a time limit, as the blood that had bled out of the body for quite a while had no effect. Exactly how long it was still unknown, but anyway, this was a pretty awesome discovery. I never thought I could use it this way. If blood could be used as a medium for instant kill, the ways to use it become endless. I turned around, thinking that once I reached in rock, I'd have to do a more accurate experiment. When I went back through the passage and went out of the cave, I saw Asher and Khan standing side by side at the entrance. The two of them gave me a startled expression. I felt a little embarrassed because I knew very well that my clothes were torn, blood-stained, and dusty, and my appearance was a mess. I tried my best to say calmly, "Let's go back." Asher walked behind the Seventh Lord. She glanced at his back, especially at his left arm. Blood-soaked, the torn sleeve red. There were no visible injuries and serious marks. What the hell happened? It was the Seventh Lord who turned even the monster, which was so huge that it could even be mistaken as a dragon, into a cold corpse in an instant. So, it's hard to believe that he was just in a fierce battle. Overwhelming strength that truly deviated from reason. But what was the identity of the cave, and what happened inside, so that he suffered such an aftermath? Even if she thought it was just useless curiosity, she couldn't help but pay attention to it. The Seventh Lord was someone who was hard to figure out. This hike made it even harder to understand what purpose he had, let alone figure it out. She wondered if the only thing she learned a little about was his personality. From the way he had a casual conversation with the person who accompanied them as a guide, he didn't particularly care about status or rank. He also seemed to hate moving his body roughly. It was like that when she thought of how he stopped moving and leisurely looked at the scenery whenever he had a chance. Especially when they had to climb the cliff. He even had to borrow her back. No matter how much she thought about it, she still couldn't understand his intentions. He's a mysterious person. As they reached the cliff they had climbed earlier, the Seventh Lord looked back this way. "Asher." "Yes. Pick me up and go down." She really couldn't understand. Asher decided to no longer think deeply about the other's eccentricity in the future. The return to the city took much less time than when they climbed up the mountain range. It was only natural since going downhill was faster, but besides that, there was also the effect of my super regeneration. This was because super regeneration amplified not only the regenerative power of the body, but also the physical strength, so I rarely felt tired. Unexpectedly, even the stamina issue was solved. After returning to the city, Khan received a big pay as promised, and they told the mayor about the monster. "It's a giant snake that appeared in the northern mountains." "Ah yes. I'm planning to dispatch an investigation team because there are rumors like that. It's already dead. Just take care of its body." "Yes." After that, there was nothing more to see or do, so I left Genik City right away. Soon after, the wagon entered the territory of the Seventh Lord and Rock and quickly headed for the capital, passing through several cities again. And, finally arrived. I stared at the massive city walls that appeared in the distance. Excluding the Overlord's castle, it was the tallest and most massive wall of any city I had ever passed. The capital of the Seventh Lord's territory, Buckhorn. We finally arrived at our destination. Chapter 14.1 Alchema's Workshop 1 Chapter 14.1 Alchema's Workshop 1 Big cities were symbols of congestion and diversity. But now, on the road along which I was riding, there was only still silence. Many soldiers and knights lined up at intervals with their swords on both sides of the path while citizens were watching. I could see numerous emotions in the passing faces, but it was mostly tension and fear. The solemn and heavy atmosphere made me feel like a great tyrant. Is it because the Lord's seat had been empty for quite a while? It was the first time in several years that a new ruler had been welcomed, so they were probably all anxious. Because the Lord was an absolute being with omnipotent power, and if a madman sat on such a throne, it could become a literal living hell for them. A typical example was the Sixth Lord the Tyrant, or the Eighth Lord the Black Sea Empress. But all their worries were for nothing. I was already too busy taking care of my own life, so would there be time to sit down and play emperor? I had no intention of directly intervening and ruling this land. As long as I solved that one problem. Alchema's Workshop was located here in Buckhorn City. The owner of the place, the alchemist, Scarlet. It's a matter that needed to be resolved before I left in search of another mystery. She was the talent I was planning to pull to my side, just like Asher. The top priority was to improve the specs, but I should also take care of the talented people I could take care along the way. If it's this time, maybe they are currently being hit by the very emergent core. While thinking about this and that, the carriage soon arrived at a huge castle in the center of the city. The procession of soldiers was filthy long, stretching all the way from the entrance of the city to the main gate of the castle. What kind of useless waste of manpower was this? After passing through the front gate, I got off the carriage. The two people who greeted me at the front were an elf wearing luxurious clothes, and an old man with gray hair who looked like a butler at first glance. The elf greeted me politely. "Greetings to Enrock's new master." I am Baslan, who was the regent of the territory. Regent? Was there anything like that? There was no way that they would leave the seat of the lord empty, so something like a regent was only natural when I thought about it. I thought the other would explain this, and that while guiding me to the castle, but the words that followed were unexpected. I was waiting to see and greet the seventh lord before I returned to the Overlord Castle. Return? Yes. I am originally an administrator belonging to the Overlord's castle. I was dispatched here under the command of the Overlord and acted as the regent. Oh, was it like that? He was an official with a high enough ranking to take the place of a lord. The old man next to him also came forward and introduced himself. I'm Floto, the butler of the castle. The real guide was this one. The elf immediately left the castle, and I entered the central hall of the castle, following Floto's guidance. The interior was exactly what I had imagined. A typical landscape that came to mind when talking about a castle in a fantasy world. Spacious, splendid, majestic. The banquet is ready, my lord. I nodded. Originally, I would have rejected it, but a day or so would be fine. It's not like I would leave the castle right away anyway, and it seemed like the other had already prepared everything. If I rejected it, I would ignore the effort made by the servants. And since I had to look at the faces of the servants of the castle at least once, the banquet was, to some extent, was something that I just had to do. Honestly, it's all excuses. I'm human too. So, I also wanted to take a break for a while, because I had a hard time getting here. With the mindset to work hard again from tomorrow, I enjoyed a comfortable rest today. A huge mansion on the outskirts of Buckhorn City. It was the building of the Varia Merchant Corps, which completely dominated and monopolized the upper road from the northern border of Inrock to Buckhorn. Two men were sitting opposite each other in the upper living room, talking. So what about the information about the new seventh lord, brother? At the words of the man wearing an eye patch, the dignified man shook his head. He was Varia, the owner of the merchant company. There's no particular gain. From what I've heard, he's a complete outsider. And he's human. Have you seen his face at the parade? I've seen a glimpse from a distance. He's quite pale. Bark, even if there are no ears around to hear. I always told you to watch your mouth. It's only the two of us anyway, so it's okay to talk comfortably. Bark grumbled lightly. This is a good situation for us. Those tenacious alchemists are now without a windshield. Alchema's Workshop. An old group of alchemists in Buckhorn City. Many efforts had been made for a long time now to get them out, but with the vacancy of the seventh lord's seat, it came to nothing for a while. For the past few years, the newly dispatched regent managed the city strictly. Of course, bribes didn't work. However, with crowning of the new lord, the situation had changed. There were the ones who reigned at the highest level. Competition for power and interests of those lower was nothing more than a fight between worms to them, so they cared little. Just like the previous seventh lord did. As long as the new seventh lord was not a lunatic like the tyrant, or the Black Sea Empress, the situation would turn in favor of the upper ranks again. I'll have to visit the workshop tomorrow. Are you going to pressure them right away? It's true that the situation is in our favor, but we still don't know what kind of character the seventh lord has. It's best to make those people from Alchemist to raise the white flag on their own as quickly as possible. That's right. The workshop owner and the elders must have their pants twisted by now. Varia and Bark smiled evilly at each other. Chapter 14.2 Alchema's Workshop 1 Chapter 14.2 Alchema's Workshop 1 The next day, after enjoying the banquet, I started doing what I had to do. He brought a lot. I looked down at the wriggling caterpillars in a bucket full of them. The butler brought it after receiving my order. The larvae were experimental materials to be used for a precise investigation of instant kill. Shall we start? I picked up a knife. The purpose of the experiment was to find out how long instant kill would take effect after the blood had been discharged from the body. The method was simple. I would drop blood on the caterpillar and activate instant kill, and every time it succeeded, 5 seconds would delay the activation time. After sacrificing dozens of caterpillars, I completed the experiment. About 3 minutes. As a result of the experiment, the effective time for instant kill using my blood was about 3 minutes. Blood that had flowed out of the body for over 3 minutes could not activate instant kill. The first thing that came to my mind while contemplating how to use this newfound knowledge was the vampire blood technique. If I had the ability to freely manipulate blood, the synergy with instant kill would be truly amazing. Problem is that I can't change my race. There was usually no way to change the race one was born with in this world. Even if I could change it, I wanted to remain human as much as possible. A way to use blood magic even if I was not a vampire. There was one thing that came to mind, but it was a way that had considerable risk. Let's put it behind my mind for now. Anyway, I got the information I needed, but there was still a lot I didn't know. For example, what was the range of targets that could be instantly killed? Would instant kill work on the undead, as well as spiritual bodies? These too should be checked later, when the opportunity arose. The next thing to deal with now was the Alchema's Workshop issue. I said to Asher, who was waiting outside the room, I need to go out for a while. I was curious about how effective the potions in this world were, and I also wanted to look at the workshop. Aria was an apprentice alchemist at the alchemist's workshop. Her morning job was to work at the counter in the store building. The workshop's main source of income was the city councils of nearby cities, including Buckhorn, and other adventurers as well. The city council rarely came to the store directly because they made bulk purchases, and adventurers were not yet active at this time of the day. In short, Aria was having a leisurely time, as there were few guests. Aria, who was yawning, saw the figure of a customer who just entered the store. She hastily shut her mouth. The guests were a young man and a woman. She looked like an escort. The two were both very attractive, especially the man. Aria greeted brightly, thinking that her eyes were blessed so early in the morning. "Welcome." The man silently nodded and looked at the potions on display. "Is he a young master from another city?" It was a face she hadn't seen before. The man, who had been looking at the potions for quite some time, came closer to the counter. "Are all the potions you have currently on display?" "Ah, all the potions on display are below average quality. High-quality potions are usually made to order." The man nodded and asked again. "I want to buy the highest quality healing potion in the workshop." At that, Aria laughed inwardly. Apparently, this ignorant young master didn't know how expensive the product was, especially the potion made by alchemists. "If you are talking about the highest quality healing potion, there is Scarlet." "Isn't that the name of the workshop owner?" "Yes, since it was a potion invented by the owner, that is how it was named." "How much?" Aria replied with a bright smile, thinking of teasing the other a little. 3 platinum coins. In terms of gold coins, a whopping 300 coins. It was an amount that couldn't be readily purchased with a light heart. Aria looked at the man's face, expecting a shocked reaction. But he just nodded his head, without a change in his expression. "I will buy it." "Yes? If it's made to order, how long will I have to wait? Can I pay the full amount in advance?" Saying that, the man took out a purse full of gold and platinum coins from his bosom. Aria couldn't close her open mouth in shock. Then she stuttered. "Now wait. I'll bring the workshop owner right away." Chapter 15.1 Alchemist's Workshop 2 Chapter 15.1 Alchemist's Workshop 2 Looking at the various potions, sealed in flasks and sealed with corks, I felt a strangely laboratory-like atmosphere. It wasn't long before the clerk who hurriedly escaped returned with 2 figures in 2. One was a woman with frizzy hair and wearing a dull robe. Another was a man who looked like an escort guard. I knew right away who the woman was. Scarlet. I didn't really intend to meet her right away, but somehow it just happened. It was natural for the owner to step forward personally, since I was a customer who said he would buy a potion worth 3 platinum coins. LV.4, one on the male side was the younger brother, right? I knew Scarlet had a younger brother. Unlike Scarlet, I remembered it was a setting that was contributing to the force of the workshop by walking the path of swordsmanship rather than alchemy. At that level, he was quite capable. Scarlet, who found me, strode towards me and greeted me right away. "I'm Scarlet Artema, the workshop owner." It was a tired voice with haggard eyes. Even in the game, it was not surprising to remember her as a character who was half crazy about alchemy research. "I've heard the story. Are you planning to buy Scarlet?" I knew it was the name of the potion, but somehow it sounded strange. I nodded. "Do I have to pay the whole amount now?" "No, you just have to pay half the price in advance. Rather, I came here to explain the potion's efficacy." She put on a strange expression, as if my attitude to purchase without asking was strange. "If you don't mind, may I ask you where you are from?" "Should I tell you?" "It's unnecessary, but it's better to have a clear identity. First, it's an item that I invented, so you can't blame me for being wary." She must be wondering if I was from a dangerous organization, or if I came from another workshop. She must be concerned about those. A person willing to pay a large sum of 3 platinum coins couldn't be just an ordinary customer. I thought for a while and then replied, "Shall we discuss your potion first?" "Okay. I'll treat you to tea, so let's sit down for a while." She passed the topic with little concern, and led me to a room in the main studio building. I came here with the intention of just observing, but somehow it ended up like this. I listened to Scarlet explain about the potion over tea. First, since it is basically a healing potion, its regenerative effect is very excellent. It is possible to attach parts that have been amputated as long as time has not passed. In addition, it can restore damage to the internal organs to some extent by drinking it. Of course, pouring it directly is much better and more effective. "Is it impossible to completely regenerate the severed parts?" At my question, Scarlet looked at me with a slightly absurd expression. "Even if it's an elixir, that would be hard to do." Elixir was the name given to some of the best potions on the continent. In short, she was telling me not to talk nonsense. "How long will it take to fully heal a broken bone?" I asked this question because I wanted to compare the effect of my super regeneration to her best potion. Scarlet replied, "It depends on the location of the broken bone and the severity, but in case of a finger fracture, it usually heals within a minute. For an arm or leg, it takes at least a few minutes." As expected, my super regeneration was much better. Other side effects include, as I listened to the explanation that followed, I was lost in my thoughts for a while. Scarlet was an excellent alchemist. I didn't know exactly what her skill level was now, but in the game's story, with her own ability, she could create an elixir. It meant that she was a talented person with the potential to develop that much in the future, even if she could not reach it right now. There was nothing wrong with keeping the kite together. Scarlet's first appearance in the game was with the crumbling of Alchema's workshop. It was because the very merchant core, who coveted the workshop's potions and Scarlet's ability, did several dirty tricks. Didn't they say that they are almost monopolizing in Rock's northern merchants? I asked Floto, the head butler, to get all the details. Even though Alchema's was a historic workshop in the capital, such as capital and connections, they were far behind Varia. According to the known future, after this, Alchema's would be half absorbed by them and would be completely tied up to them. And originally, as the story progressed, the player's performance would safely restore her identity, but now I just have to solve it. It was too simple to do with my current influence. Chapter 15.2 Alchema's Workshop 2 Chapter 15.2 Alchema's Workshop 2 Another bonus chapter. Thank you to ZXC for the donation. She ended her explanation after she finished detailing the usage and precautions. Ending the conversation, I asked Scarlet, "How long does it take to make?" "It will take at least a month." "By the way," Scarlet seemed to hesitate. She said, "To be honest, I have a bottle of Scarlet already finished." I tilted my head. "Didn't they say that high-quality potions were made in advance?" She calmly explained the situation. "I received a custom order from the mayor of Dartmouth City just a while ago, but the deal fell through shortly." "Why?" "They were deprived of their position, and the monarchy confiscated all their property because of corruption. Of course, the advance payment that had been received during the transaction was recovered during the investigation of the funds. The potions were just added to our inventory, so it was difficult." "Oh, so I can give you the finished potion right away, but if you don't want to receive it in advance, I'll make a new one." "Do potions lose potency over time?" "I can guarantee that there will be no degradation in efficacy, unless you had not used it for several years." "I swear on my honor, as well as my workshop." I nodded. "Then I'll take it." It obviously surprised Scarlet when I accepted so easily. "Thank you, but are you really sure? Didn't you ask me to buy it while bringing up a story that didn't have to be brought up?" If they really wanted to deal with their inventory somehow, she wouldn't have bothered to say this, which meant that she only wanted to sell the potion. So we made a deal right on the spot. After a while, Scarlet brought the potion. The potion was bottled and sealed in a luxurious wooden box. After paying 3 platinum coins and taking the potion, I left the workshop, and we said our goodbyes. "By the way, didn't you say that you would let me know where you came from once you get the goods?" "Oh right." I stared at Scarlet and said, "I'll see you soon, so let's put it off." At my words, Scarlet's expression became incomprehensible, but she still nodded. I left the store and walked down the main street, taking the potion out of the box and examining it, a reddish liquid flowing in a glass bottle. Anyway, since I didn't need potions anymore, it was something I had no use for. But because of my curiosity, I still paid an exorbitant amount of money to buy this. After all, I now had a lot of money. Even if it wasn't for me, this potion might be something Asher could use later on, so I bought it as an emergency medicine. I'd like to see the effect myself, but while I was walking with that thought in mind, I suddenly heard an urgent scream from somewhere. "Help me! Someone please!" I looked in the direction from which the sound had come and saw 2 boys. The one being supported had blood dripping from his stomach, as if he had been stabbed. However, passers-by looked at them and either ignored them or clicked their tongues. "What kind of fuss is that again? Noisy. Looks like they're having fun since morning. Back alley parasite bastards." Ah, was this the case? I could roughly grasp the situation by listening to what people were saying nonchalantly. The one supporting was also not in good condition, so the 2 both fell to the ground, as if he had lost his strength. He squeezed out his voice with all his remaining strength and called for help. "He's my brother. If anyone has a potion, please give it to me. If you help me, I won't forget the grace for the rest of my life, so please." Someone laughed. "Is that bastard crazy? He's going to die anyway. What kind of idiot would give him their precious potion?" No one offered a helping hand to the earnest cry. While looking at the scene, Asher's expression suddenly caught my eye. Rarely, the expressionless expression was broken. She was looking at the 2 children with pity. Come to think of it, Asher also had a younger brother. During the invasion of Santia, one of the 5 stars killed her younger brother right in front of her eyes. I remembered it being set up like that. So, for her, it must have been a more unfortunate sight. Asher glanced at the potion in my hand. Then she met my eyes and winced. She seemed to have something to say, but in the end, she just bit her lip saying nothing. How frustrating. I clicked my tongue and walked towards the boys. Regardless of Asher, I was thinking of helping them anyway. No matter how precious this potion was it more precious than human life? As I approached, The little guy who had been screaming in a hoarse voice looked at me. Put it down here. I'll treat you. I opened the stopper and drizzled the potion over the injured area. The older brother watched the scene in a daze. Suddenly, the surroundings were quiet. Soon, the flesh seemed to heal in an instant. The bleeding stopped, and the cut that looked deep disappeared without a trace. I didn't think I used even a tenth of the amount in the bottle, but as Scarlet explained, its effect was great indeed. Boomed the younger brother, who was unconscious, blinked and opened his eyes. A boy who urgently checked his brother's condition finally cried out, "Thank you, sir. Thank you very much." Leaving behind the boy who cried out in gratitude, I got up and turned around. I said as Asher and I went back on our way. Asher. Yes. Did you think I would regret using this potion? Or did you think that saving their lives wasn't worth it? From now on, if there's anything you want to say, say it. Tell me what you think. What I want isn't a doll that only obeys orders. Asher made a strange expression I had never seen before. Yes, I will. After a moment of silence, she spoke again. Thank you, my lord, for helping them. It was an awkward way of showing her gratitude. As if she knew it herself, Asher cleared her throat slightly after she said it. I chuckled. I don't know if it's an illusion, but it felt like the distance between us was gradually narrowed. Chapter 15.3 Alchema's Workshop 2 Chapter 15.3 Alchema's Workshop 2 Who the hell was that, sister? At the words of her brother, Thane, Scarlet shrugged. I don't know. Honestly, I'm concerned. He's the one who paid such a huge amount right on the spot. Well, judging from what he said, it looks like he'll come back soon, so we'll know then. Of course, Scarlet was also curious about the man's identity. The attitude of treating 3 platinum coins as if they were a small amount of money without even signing a contract. It would be difficult for even the most wealthy or high-ranking aristocrats to do so. There were some people who used money to bluff and then scam businesses, but there were no lunatics who would do that using platinum coins. At that point, that would no longer be considered a bluff. A human male with black hair and golden eyes. Where the hell did he come from? It occurred to her that the other might be someone who was not from Calderic at all. They muttered. Come to think of it, there are rumors that the 7th Lord who arrived in the city yesterday is also a black-haired human male. For a moment, the two of them closed their mouths and looked at each other. Soon Scarlet smiled and said, Say something that makes sense. Haha, is that so? I just thought of it and said it. I think that a lord would visit this workshop in person. Rather, someone from a royal family of a neutral country would be much more realistic. The flow of thoughts naturally led to the 7th Lord. Scarlet's expression darkened slightly. Regardless of what kind of person the new 7th Lord would be, the problem with the high-ranking members of Varia was much bigger. She knew well that the reason those people hadn't been able to do big tricks so far was because of the regent. However, that ended with the new 7th Lord ascending to the throne. Those people would slowly reveal their teeth to the workshop again. I can expect the 7th Lord to mediate. The possibility that the Lord would be interested in the fight between Varia and the workshop. There was no hint of such a thing. And if the Lord was indifferent, the side that the territory's high-ranking officials would side with was, of course, the Varia Merchant Corps, who could bring them more profits. Scarlet sighed. She remembered her struggles with those people just a few years ago. As the owner of the workshop and the head of the Adima family, the responsibility was heavy. How nice it would be if I could just focus on alchemy research without worrying about anything. At the words she spat out, as if grumbling. Thane looked at her with calm eyes. He was also a member of the family, so he knew things were not going well. Don't worry too much, sister. Those people would be busy to pay any attention to us, so they won't be able to do anything right away. It was then. Knock knock. Come on in. A vassal entered the room with a dark expression. What's going on? Varia merchants accompanied Bark and visited the workshop directly. They say they want to have a formal conversation right now, to fix our difference in opinion. Scarlet burst out laughing with a stunned expression. What formal conversation after coming here without a warning? What should I do, househead? Call the elders together. We'll have to listen to what nonsense they're going to say again. It was practically a threat, so she couldn't ignore it. Although she spoke calmly, Scarlet's face showed her deep thoughts. Varia's side was moving into action much sooner than they thought. Chapter 16.1 Alchema's Workshop 3 Chapter 16.1 Alchema's Workshop 3-2 Thank you to her, Philia, for the donation. Returning to the castle, while busy reviewing plans, I heard the report from the head butler, Floto. Are you done cleaning up already? I just ordered it this morning, and they did it quickly. I glanced at some papers he passed to me. It was a rough list of the vile things that Varia Merchant Corps had committed so far, starting from the problems from the upper ranks of the group to the behavior of the people under them. Still, the investigation didn't show something so big that could prevent the merchant group from continuing their activities. But this was enough. In fact, there was no need to investigate. In Calderic, the Lord was the law. Whether or not Varia broke the law, it didn't matter. It's just that it's not possible to immediately dismantle them if I wanted to. By the way, even when Floto gave me a detailed explanation of my job as a lord, It was funny that he did not mention the power that the Lord had over his territory. Only a few restrictions. The great constitution enacted by the Overlord, the iron rule of non-interference between the Lord's territories, and the inability to exercise independent military authority over other countries. I really could do anything I wanted, as long as it wasn't a dictatorship that destroyed the basic structure of the monarchy. Anyway, the reason I did this kind of investigation was because of a small bit of conscience. I knew Varia was like a villain because I had played the game, but that's all I knew. Wasn't it like stepping on someone with no justification just because I didn't like them? Butler. Yes, Seventh Lord. Bring the head of Varia, and Scarlet, the workshop owner of Alchemas, to the castle. Treat the workshop owner politely and with respect. I will do as you command immediately. Floto did not show the slightest hint of surprise or doubt. He just walked away quickly after giving his answer. He must have already known what my intentions were based on my series of commands. I looked at the map again. I finished what I was doing and waited for the two of them leisurely. I said that I'd see her again soon, but I never thought it would be this soon. The large room of the Alchemist's workshop. In a chilly atmosphere, Varia said calmly while savoring his tea. As expected, it's a place where artisans gather, so the tea tastes great. It makes me want to learn the secret. Scarlet, who was sitting across from him, said with an expressionless face. You should drink it in moderation. After all, it might be too fine for your coarse taste. I hope you don't misinterpret my sincere compliment like that. Let's get down to the main topic. I would feel sorry for wasting the time of Varia's busy owner. Varia raised the corner of his mouth and put the teacup down. What do I want to say? I'm just repeating the proposal I've always made, and the workshop owner will reject it as always. Scarlet replied calmly. It's an obvious ploy to mass-produce alchemist potions with your capital, and to exploit the skills of our artisans. As others say, the workshop owner is too full of negative prejudices about our group. Who the hell was it that created that prejudice? Blocking the distribution materials, conciliating the workshop's customers one by one, and mobilizing many petty things until just a few years ago to put pressure on the workshop? Bark, the man with an eye patch sitting next to Varia, giggled. Workshop owner, be careful with what you say. We are not polite enough either. It would be unfair to accuse us like that without evidence. What do the elders think? For the sake of the workshop's future, shouldn't the loyal vassals break the stubbornness of the head of your family? An older elder standing near Scarlet snorted. For the sake of the future of the workshop, it is a proposal that should not be accepted. It really makes little sense. Our group would provide all the resources and funds necessary for potion production for the workshop. What the hell is wrong with this proposal? And the price would be the technology of the workshop and the ability of the family head. You probably have a workshop in operation in the nearby city of Flick. After a few years, they will absorb most of our technology and steal the workshop's business partners one by one. In the end, our workshop will slowly fall, or you will force us to hand over the management rights of the workshop to you. Or is there a more elaborate and vicious strategy than this? Varia laughed at the elder's sharp words. I envy you because you have like-minded and loyal vassals, workshop owner. Scarlet frowned. It was because she already knew that the other attempted to bribe several elders. He failed, of course. They are proud people who have dedicated their lives to the well-being of our family. I don't think there will be anyone who would have the same opinion as you. That's right. Is it the turn of threats next? Workshop owner. Varia gave a smile that bordered on sneering. You don't have to pretend to be calm. You know that things have changed. The new 7th Lord arrived in the city just yesterday, and there was no more regent. Do you think the Great Lord would take the slightest interest in such a trivial quarrel? Or, if he had won it all, whose side do you think he would be? Will he listen to you? Maybe if you have an elixir hidden in your family as an heirloom, if you donate it, he might be on your side. Bark interjected and said with a sinister laugh. Or since the workshop owner is beautiful, you can seduce him. There's a rumor that the new lord is a human male after all. Watch your words. Thane, who had been standing behind Scarlet and kept his mouth shut, spoke with gritted teeth. The expression of the elders also turned stern at the remark, openly insulting the head of the family. However, Bark still spoke in that manner, as if he didn't hear Thane. Just in case, how about marrying some young master? The workshop owner is not too old to be married. You shouldn't just live in such a dull place like this. You should also know the joy of being a woman. Thane was about to explode, but Scarlet raised a hand to stop him. Did you just come here to do such a lowly provocation? You've thrown away your modesty. Varia stood up with a sneer. Today will probably be the last warning. I hope you make a wise choice for the future of the workshop, Miss Scarlet. Then we will go now. No need to see us off. The elders looked at the two with dark expressions as they walked out of the room. They came here without prior notice and threatened them. The future situation turned too unfavorable for the workshop. Even from tomorrow, there was no way to know what kind of dirty tricks Varia Merchant Corps would use. It was because until a few years ago, all the elders had been through so much that their teeth trembled at how nasty Varia had treated the workshop. Scarlet touched her forehead, as if her head hurt. Why don't we gather again in the evening and hold a meeting, family head? Yes, we should. Then, for now, Scarlet and the elders talked about the future. Thane listened to the conversation with a firm expression, then sneaked out of the room. Chapter 16.2 Alchema's Workshop 3 Chapter 16.2 Alchema's Workshop 3 Varia and Bark, who had passed through the workshop central hall and were heading towards the entrance, looked back. The person who called them was none other than Thane. Do you need something? Thane looked at the two of them alternately, then continued to speak, while glaring at Bark. Bark, I challenge you to a duel. At that statement, Bark widened his eyes and pointed at himself with a mischievous smile. Did you just say duel? With me? Varia stepped up and said. I don't know what you're trying to do. But Thane Adima, is this the meaning of the workshop? No, I'm doing it on my own. Why are you suddenly requesting a duel? Because he insulted my sister. I don't think the one-eyed slayer Bark would refuse because he was afraid of a young swordsman like me. Bark looked at Thane as if he was looking at some kind of puppy. It was common in this world to resolve trivial conflicts through a duel. However, that was only for opponents of equal standing. Bark was a warrior with a reputation for being the best in Varia. They even gave him the name One-Eyed Slayer. If I show off my strength here by defeating Bark, Varia cannot act recklessly. Thane did it because he thought it was worth it. He was also an outstanding martial artist for his age, and he had his own confidence because he had made great progress recently. Bark glanced at Varia. Varia smiled broadly and nodded his head, as telling his brother to take care of it. Well, good. I'll waste my time with you for a while. Bark smiled and stepped forward. The central hall was wide enough for two people to cross swords. Thane Adima, you've been fairly well known in the capital lately. Did you make it to the finals in the last Darthmed City swordsmanship competition? A young and talented warrior's challenge is always welcome. Thane drew his sword first, and Bark drew his sword slowly as well. He raised the corner of his mouth and switched his sword to his other hand. Shall I give you a handicap? I'm right-handed, so I will wield my sword in my left hand. That should be enough. Do as you please. Thane immediately went full force, intending to startle the other and force him to use both hands. The blade of his sword shimmered in blue. Kong! The sword, which was swung with great force, was blocked languidly. Before one knew it, Bark, with one hand behind his back, was blocking the sword attack. Even the blade of his sword shimmered with a blue aura. A blow that was blocked too easily. Thane was a little taken aback by the other's sword that was not pushed and did not move at all, but he continued to attack again. Kong! Kang! Kakakang! Blue lines intersecting in the air. A continuous roaring sound. The flashes that were hard to see with the eyes of ordinary people continued to come and go. Thane's sword was fast and sophisticated. He was clearly a high-level swordsman for his age. However, all his attacks were blocked and destroyed by Bark's lightly swinging sword. As time passed, darkness fell on Thane's face as he wielded his sword. He couldn't have imagined that the gap would be this large. Jang! And at some point, pieces of metal scattered. Bark's hand, which suddenly sped up, shattered Thane's sword. Thane, shocked as he was, let out a moan of pain and fell to his knees. Looking down at him, Bark grinned. People arrived at the same time. Scarlet and the elders immediately came out after hearing the commotion downstairs. Thane! Scarlet shouted with an urgent expression and came running. She then glared intently at Varia. What did you do? Don't misunderstand. The one who challenged Bark for a duel was your younger brother. Thane lowered his head with a horribly distorted expression, avoiding Scarlet's gaze. Realizing the situation, she let out a sigh. I will apologize for my brother's rudeness. The victory had already been decided, so please stop the duel. At that, Bark raised an evil corner of his mouth and said, He's the first to attack. Wouldn't it make sense if I finish it at least? Fool, look! He plunged the blade into Thane's arm, as the other lay on the floor. Arik, the faces of Scarlet and the elders turned white. The younger brother of the workshop owner can't control his hot-bloodedness, so we should give him a chance to learn this time. Wait, stop! Tisk. It's not like I'm going to kill him. Why are you so nervous? There are a lot of good quality potions here, so there shouldn't be any problem with treatment. Bark said that, and swung the blade into his arm. Thane couldn't stand it, and let out his screams of pain. Stop now. Scarlet completely lost her composure, and cried out, as if pleading. Bark chuckled as if he was having fun. Ha! If you're that desperate, get down on your knees and beg a little more earnestly, workshop owner. Then I'll stop it was then. Rattle. Suddenly, the entrance to the hall opened, and a series of knights appeared. Everyone's eyes were drawn to their sudden appearance. Varia's eyes widened. He, who had just been watching the situation with a leisurely smile, murmured with a puzzled expression. Iron Blood Knights? Iron Blood Knights directly under the 7th Lord's castle. Varia couldn't understand why the most elite force of the Lord, who did not move unless it was a serious matter, suddenly appeared here. Scarlet and the elders looked at them with bewildered expressions, and Bark dragged out the sword stuck in Thane's arm. The blonde-haired man at the head of the knights looked around, then approached the center of the hall and opened his mouth. Varia, the owner of the Varia Mechant Corps, follow me right now. You have no right to refuse. I will not take questions. And this time, he turned his head to Scarlet and spoke in a much more polite tone. Are you Scarlet, the owner of Alchema's workshop? Yes, I am. Please accompany us as well. The Lord is looking for you. Everyone's faces were filled with astonishment. If the knight called someone Lord, then it couldn't be anyone than the seventh Lord. Meanwhile, Bark asked with a frown, could it be that you're going to the Lord's castle? Why are you taking my older brother suddenly? At least give a reason. Whoa. Bark's words were cut short. It was because the knight he asked drew his sword and attacked him without warning. Bark also hurriedly drew his sword and defended himself, but his blade shattered. Puke! Bark fell to his knees as fresh blood poured from his chest that had been split diagonally. The knight looked down at him coldly and withdrew his sword. I said I wouldn't take questions. Do you dare to question the Lord's mandate? Chapter 17.1 Alchema's Workshop 4 Chapter 17.1 Alchema's Workshop 4 Bark grabbed his bloody chest with trembling hands. Varia, who was watching the situation, finally regained his composure and opened his mouth. I apologize for the rudeness, so please have mercy, Sir Akin. He didn't bow and apologize. It wouldn't be strange if someone's neck was blown off. Even Varia, someone who had a great influence on the entire North, was just a meaningless existence in front of the Lord's power. The knight who cut down Bark was Akin Cradle, the vice-captain of the Iron Blood Knights. From the moment a big man like this showed up in person, he already had a hunch that something unusual had happened. But the words that came out of the other's mouth were beyond his imagination. The Lord's order? Why did the newly enthroned seventh Lord ask for him in Scarlet? Didn't he arrive in the capital just yesterday? What was even more incomprehensible was the vice-captain's attitude. Anyone could see that he was overbearing on their side, but was polite to Scarlet. While Varia was confused, he couldn't help but feel an ominous feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The vice-captain who drew the sword approached Scarlet and stood next to him without paying attention to the fallen Bark. Then we'll move right away. Scarlet looked at Thane and the elders in embarrassment, as the others were looking at the knights at the same time. Why are taking the family head? One elder opened his mouth involuntarily, but shut it back immediately. He had no choice but to do so because Bark, who did the same, was now in that kind of situation. However, the vice-captain answered in a polite voice this time. Don't worry, the Lord asked us to escort the workshop owner, so it's definitely not a bad thing. The elders had no choice but to remain silent. Although they were worried about why the seventh Lord was looking for the family head, but they couldn't stand in the way of the knights either. See, sister. Thane grabbed his wounded arm and stood up. Scarlet saw that and was about to talk to the vice-captain, but another elder stepped forward and said, Family head, don't worry and go. We will treat Thane's arm right away. She hesitated, then nodded. Knights were attached to both sides of Scarlet. Some knights then approached Varia. Varia let out a small sigh and turned to Bark. Treat your wound. The knights led the two of them and moved straight to the Lord's castle. After passing through the main gate of the castle and entering the inner sanctuary, Scarlet looked around with a nervous expression. Just looking at the sight of the knights standing guard throughout the castle, she felt the severity of the situation. There was no way that she, a mere outsider, had ever entered the interior of the castle like this. When I reached the huge building in the center, there was an elderly butler waiting at the entrance. He bowed his head and greeted Scarlet. My name is Floto, the head butler. The Lord is waiting for you. Let me lead you there. Then he turned his gaze and took a quick glance at Varia before he started walking in the lane. Passing through a wide and long corridor and stairs, we arrived at the highest floor of the building. When I arrived at the central hall on the top floor, I saw a man sitting on a chair looking at something, and a female knight standing behind him. Upon seeing the scene, Scarlet's face was instantly filled with doubt and bewilderment. It had to be, because the faces of the two were familiar. The unknown customer who visited the studio in the morning and bought a scarlet potion, and paid 3 platinum coins, as if they were a penny. But what were they doing here, my lord? Floto said, and bowed his head. Scarlet also looked at the man with a dazed expression. Suddenly, the conversation she had with Thane flashed through her mind. A conversation about the newly enthroned seventh Lord. As you commanded, I brought you the owner of Alchema's workshop and the head of the Varia Merchant Corps. Putting down the thing he was holding in his hand, the man slowly turned his head to look at Scarlet and opened his mouth. We met again so soon, workshop owner. Scarlet, who finally grasped the whole situation, lost her mind for a while, then belatedly lowered her head. It's an honor to meet the seventh Lord. The seventh Lord then turned his gaze to Varia this time. Varia did not dare to make eye contact and hurriedly bowed his head. It's a lifetime honor to meet the seventh Lord. Why do you think I called you? Varia felt his heart froze at that indifferent and cold voice. Chapter 17.2 Alchema's Workshop 4 Chapter 17.2 Alchema's Workshop 4-2 Thank you to Jess for donating. Varia had noticed by now. Why did the seventh Lord call him in Scarlet? Unlike his side, the knights treated Scarlet politely, and then there was the reaction of the lord now, as if they were already familiar with each other. Varia desperately shook his head, feeling a sense of crisis and fear for the first time in his life. What kind of answer should he give? Soon, Varia dropped to his knees and said, "I have committed a mortal sin, my lord." In an instant, the hall became quiet. Varia hung his head on the floor and waited for an answer. After a while, the seventh lord opened his mouth again. "What sin did you commit?" "I coveted the talent and labor of Alchema's workshop, and did various dirty tricks on them. I blocked the distribution of materials, conciliated the workshop's customers one by one, and threatened the workshop owner and elders like I did today." Varia confessed his sins like flowing water. He started out empty-handed with nothing but a sense for money, and built up the current merchant group. No matter how much he thought about the most likely way to survive here, this was the best way. After all, the lord would know everything. Scarlet, who was standing next to Varia, looked down at him as if he was a little bewildered. The seventh lord asked her this time. "That's right, workshop lord." "Ah, yes. What do you want to do with the Varia merchant core?" Scarlet and Varia's eyes met. Varia looked up at her with the most earnest gaze. "Please forgive me, workshop owner. I will formally apologize for everything I've done until now, and I will thoroughly compensate you for everything. And I promise that I will no longer be blinded by greed and commit dirty tricks against the workshop." Scarlet looked at him with a complicated expression on his face as he spoke up and pleaded. Then she let out a small sigh and nodded her head. "I get it." Varia was contemptuous enough to make her teeth tremble, but she didn't want to ask his head for it. The story ended blandly like that, and the seventh lord gazed down at Varia and said, "Hopefully, I don't have to call you here again. Go." Varia shuddered from her seat and followed Floto out of the hall with a drained face. Left alone, Scarlet stood still, with a bewildered expression on her face. The seventh lord looked at her and said, "You must be wondering why I am helping the workshop." "Yes, that's right." The problem with Varia, which had been hounding her, was quickly resolved with just a few words from the lord. To be honest, it felt unrealistic. As much as she was grateful, Scarlet did not know what the hell was he trying to do by helping her. "The reason is simple. Your qualities as an alchemist stood out for me. The Scarlet Potion is quite good. I hope you will focus on your research and develop that potion even further. That's why I solved the annoying problem for you." Scarlet's face became even more incomprehensible. "So what the lord was saying is that you're not planning to ask anything from me just because you highly valued my abilities?" "Yes. If you don't understand, think of it as a debt. One day, there may come a time when I would need your ability. You can consider paying me that favor when that time comes." To Scarlet, that sounded even stranger. How could a lord ever need the help of an alchemist like himself? "If you don't have any further questions, you can go." Scarlet was silent for a moment, then bowed her head deeply. "I have received a great grace from my lord. As you wished, if the time comes when the lord would need my ability, I will do my best to help." After saying goodbye, Scarlet went outside, following Floto, who just returned. The new seventh lord was truly mysterious, she thought. After sending the two of them back, I finished drinking the tea I was drinking. That guy acted pretty fast. I thought of Varia kneeling down and apologizing, and I smiled. Just like that, he lowered himself and confessed, so the investigation of Varia Merchant Core was no longer necessary. The conversation only took a few minutes. Anyway, this was the end of the workshop issue. Varia noticed I was involved with the workshop, so he could no longer show his ambition. He even tried to mend his relationship with Scarlet. Of course, I didn't need her ability right away. However, if I formed a relationship with the NPCs who appeared as good characters in the game one by one like this, they might be a big help to me someday when I least expected it. Then, what's left is, I looked back at the map I had set down on my desk and crossed my arms. The sooner I leave here, the better, so I could find the next mystery. I'm a little worried about the route I should take. My top priority right now was to collect all the mysteries within the realm of Calderic, and among them, the most necessary was the defense type ability. Therefore, it's already fixed that the next mystery was the floating curtain. But the route I should take to get there was still not fixed. I had to be careful about going around Calderic after all. Lord, I was thinking about that when Floto came back and called me. I wondered if there was anything left to say about the workshop or the merchant group, but the words he said next were totally unexpected. "A guest has come. The fourth lord is here. He said he came to see the lord." I almost spit out the tea I was drinking. "Who's here?" Chapter 18.1 King of the Dead, Astra. Chapter 18.1 King of the Dead, Astra. The fourth lord, the King of the Dead, Astra. As a newcomer, and an undead lich, he perfectly suited the title of King of the Dead. But why? Why did he come looking for me suddenly? "He's waiting for you at the entrance of the castle." I let out a deep sigh, buried my back in the chair, and immersed myself in brief agony. I wanted to avoid meeting another lord until the next meeting. But why was this happening already? I can't just ignore this. A lord himself came here to visit. He even said that he came to see me, so of course I should welcome him. That's why it's hard for me to refuse. This was my base, and it would be rude if I refused to see him. I already had a somewhat bad relationship with the Thunder Lord. The fourth lord was the opposite of the tyrant, a lord who maintained a gentle relationship with all the other lords. So, I wanted to avoid being his enemy. In fact, a meeting with a lord didn't mean that I have to take a huge risk. Since I was also a lord, the other would definitely not act recklessly. However, since I was so weak, contact with someone much stronger still felt burdensome. There's no way he came here without a reason. Still, the King of the Dead was a lord who belonged to the normal side among the lords. Having made my decision, I told Floto, "Take him here." I wondered if I should go out and greet him myself, but I thought there was no need to do that since he was the one who came here himself. It took a while before Floto, who bowed his head and retreated, returned with someone. A black robe rimmed with gold, and a skull visible through the hood. The place where the eyes should have been was empty, and I could see the ghostly blue eyes glowing faintly. As the being entered the hall, the secluded atmosphere seemed to be filled with gloom. He stopped at the entrance of the hall, and made eye contact with me. LV 95. This skull was the King of the Dead, the fourth lord. He looked nothing like what I saw in the game. The King of the Dead was holding in one hand a huge wooden staff that was as tall as his height, and that was also the staff he was holding in the game. "Nice to meet you, seventh lord." A strange voice that seemed not to be coming out of the throat rang in my ears. Come to think of it, how did a guy, who was a skeleton, but had no vocal cords, speak? Was that all magic? "I'm sorry for coming here so suddenly, with no warning. I'm just here to have a quick chat. May I sit down?" I gestured to the seat opposite. The King of the Dead approached with brisk steps and sat down on a chair. Silence fell in an instant. Sitting close to him, I could feel the energy surrounding him much more clearly. If what I felt when facing the Mad King was the pressure that seemed to weigh down my whole body, what I felt from the King of the Dead was eerie. It's as if death took shape and materialized as it was. Now I'm really thankful for the soul of the king. If it wasn't for that, my body might have been already shaking without me realizing it. Once again, I felt grateful for this absolute mind barrier skill. "What the matter?" I asked, feigning indifference. Since it was their first meeting, I couldn't think of anything that we could talk about, and I wanted to end this conversation as soon as possible. Interacting with him was much less gruesome than the Black Sea Empress, but it was equally burdensome to face a skeleton for a long time. The King of the Dead, who was staring at me with his blue eyes shining, soon spoke in a voice that sounded like laughter. It surprised me when I heard the Overlord had appointed a new lord straight from the meeting. Now I regret not being able to attend the last meeting. I made no reply. When there was no reply, he continued to talk about useless things that he obviously didn't come here for. "Seventh Lord, I have a lot of interest in you personally, especially after hearing what happened during the meeting. It's been the first time that a human sat on a lord's throne after half a century." "King of the Dead," I cut him off. "I don't like useless dialogue." The King of the Dead said nothing for a while, then burst into laughter. "Then, I'll tell you right away. The corpse of the warrior you killed, seventh lord, I came for it." Those words brought back memories I had forgotten. Chapter 18.2 King of the Dead, Astra. Chapter 18.2 King of the Dead, Astra. Right, there was that. Didn't Daifan take the warrior's body before escaping the convoy because there could be someone who might want it? I thought the King of the Dead would be the only one who would want a dead body. Seemed like my guess was correct. Well, if it's the corpse of a strong man like the warrior, it's worth coveting. Spirit magic that controlled the dead by reviving them. The King of the Dead was the continent's strongest necromancer, with no one to compare him to. He was a terrible enemy in the game. Among the lords of Calderic, there were two beings that had their own large armies aside from the troops of the Overlord, and that were the King of the Dead and the Black Sea Empress. The army of corpses led by the King of the Dead was enough to be called a one-man army. But why did he go here for that? Daifan had the body, so why did he go here to get it from me? That's what I thought, but the words that he said next answered my question. "Since you're the one who killed the warrior, you technically own his body. So I'm here to ask permission to have it." "Oh yeah, ownership. Come to think of it, Daifan said that I own the body. So, the King of the Dead came to see me personally because he wanted to take over the authority of the corpse. He really didn't need to go to me just for that. Even if he didn't ask permission, I wouldn't have cared. Still, from the perspective of the King of the Dead, I wondered if he asked for permission just in case I would question him about it later. However, after coming all the way here and asking for permission like this, it really felt like just a waste. As soon as I stared at him, the King of the Dead continued, "I'll pay you a fair price." A fair price. Several things ran through my mind. For example, magic items. Since the King of the Dead was a mage, shouldn't he have defense-type items I need the most right now? But that's hard to say. It's as if I'm openly confessing that I need items because I lack defensive skills. And when I thought about it, I didn't even know if I could use magic items properly. I thought about it for a while and then said, "I want nothing from you." Then the King of the Dead said, "Then how about leaving it as a debt? Later, when you want something from me, I'll pay the price equal to the value of the warrior's corpse." I nodded my head because it was ambiguous to ask for something right away, and it was not a bad suggestion. I thought it would be better to end it at this point without poking further. Do you need anything else? No. You don't seem to enjoy my company, so I'll be going right away. After saying that, the king of the dead got up from his seat and leisurely left the hall. I buried myself in the chair, feeling empty for no reason, probably because the conversation I worried about ended blandly. At that moment Asher, who was standing behind me, let out a small trembling breath. I glanced at her expression. The presence of the king of the dead affected her this much. I was fine because of the soul of the king, but the fear that the king of the dead exuded seemed to be a considerable burden to her. Was I going to be continuously stuck between these monsters? The conversation with the king of the dead, which was short and bland, only gave me more hopelessness about the future. But this was the path I chose. I have to collect the hidden pieces as soon as possible. An undead knight in black armor waiting in front of the castle gate bowed his head toward the king of the dead, who walked out. You came out right away. Necromancers and their subordinates were spiritually connected, allowing dialogue through their consciousness, as well as sharing images of what they saw. The undead knight had doubts about the feelings of the king of the dead, who were rarely happy. The king of the dead laughed mentally. The new seventh lord is really interesting. Hundreds of years of leading immortality in the undead's body. Since death no longer meant anything to him, paradoxically, he could feel death more clearly than anyone else. But how long had it been since he felt this feeling? I never thought I would feel the fear of death. I couldn't feel any aura or mana from the seventh lord. Neither magical power nor physical strength could be felt, so he looked like an ordinary human with no real abilities. But the other definitely could kill him. The only person who he felt this kind of feeling after he became a lich was the hero of Santia, and it was only faintly felt even by the overlord. He had come in person to get the warrior's corpse and to see what kind of person the new seventh lord was, but it turned out to be more enjoyable than he thought. I can't wait to see what kind of request he will make later. That's why I was happy to even create a link through debt. The king of the dead pondered over the realization of death he had felt for the first time in a long while, and firmly imprinted the existence of the seventh lord in his mind. Chapter 19.1. Before leaving Chapter 19.1. Before leaving, now that I thought about it, I have never read so many books in my life. Back in my real life, I was only interested in playing Raw, breaking achievements, and getting more items and skills. If I wasn't so crazy about this game, maybe shit like this wouldn't have happened. My thoughts drifted away for a while, but anyway, the reason I suddenly had this thought was because of what I was doing. I closed the book I was reading. On one side of the desk, there was a heap of things that looked like old books, all of them related to vampires. Currently, my daily routine in the castle was to look at a map or read a book repeatedly. The books I read were all related to vampires. These guys are also a rare species, so there isn't much information. Most of the rare races, like the White Moon tribe, lived somewhere in the depths of the forest among themselves. Besides, among the many races in this world, vampires were a race that had a bad reputation. Because of this, it was even more difficult to find information because other races had ostracized them from the world for a long time. Even in the game, there were few stories related to vampires. There are mysteries, but if I could use blood magic, the synergy with instant kill would be great. The reason I was so obsessed with vampires was because of the racial trait, blood art. Each individual had a unique ability, but freely handling blood, as if using telekinesis, was a common skill that all vampires could use. No matter how much I thought about it, there was no better way to maximize the efficiency of my instant kill than to get blood magic. The problem was that in order to get it, I had to directly go to Elrod Forest, one of the hiding places of the vampires. It's completely suicidal. In this world, not all vampires lived by sucking blood. Vampires were divided into tribes, and there were ones among them that did not suck the blood of other races and lived well among themselves. But because there were still those who did, even those tribes lived while being ostracized and persecuted. Because of this, most tribes who had been unfairly treated had quite severe hostility towards other race. Elrod Forest was also a place where some vampire tribe lived. It wouldn't be strange if I, a human, would be attacked right away if I appeared there. It's really difficult. It's difficult to decide. The order of obtaining the other mysteries was pretty much all set. However, suddenly discovering a new way to use instant kill and blood magic, I couldn't help but wonder if I should visit Elrod Forest in the middle. If Asher and I went there alone, things would definitely become bad. But if I mobilized the troops of my territory, things would get too big. It would be equivalent to going to war. No matter how peaceful a tribe was, vampires themselves were a fairly warlike race, and they had a lot of hostility towards other races. If I led my troops to Elrod Forest, the vampires there would definitely resist, no matter what kind of threat they faced. If that happens, I will become a killer who massacred a whole tribe just to get a blood skill. And since Elrod Forest was in a different lord's territory, it would have been difficult to lead an army. The reason I sought an escort like Asher in the first place was because I couldn't lead my army on the lands of the other lords. I sank into the chair and let out a sluggish breath, and I turned my thoughts elsewhere. A way to use instant kill from a distance without blood magic. In the Rudis Mountains, where I climbed to get super regeneration, I met Belvagora and almost died. I had to travel all over Calderic looking for other mysteries, but I could encounter such unexpected dangers again that even Asher couldn't handle. There's nothing wrong with preparing a way to use instant kill more efficiently to prepare for that time. Long distance attack, if there was a way to just cut a wound and splatter blood. However, since that would only fly a few distances, it was difficult to even call it a long-range attack. In this world overflowing with all kinds of monsters, if an enemy came within a few meters to attack me, I would be much more likely to die before I could do anything. Another method was to smear blood on something and blow it off. For example, shooting an arrow with blood on the arrowhead. That would seem to be the best. But of course there's one problem. I didn't know how to shoot a bow. I just need to learn if I don't know how. Anyway, the danger I was likely to face while searching for mysteries was huge monsters like Belvagora. Those filthy strong guys should be able to dodge several shots from a poor archer. I didn't intend to waste time, but it wouldn't hurt to learn how to shoot casually. And because of the mystery of super regeneration, my stamina was overflowing, so you could practice as much as I want without needing to rest. Then let's learn it. I got up from my seat. It's far-fetched to ask the other knights of the castle to teach me how to use the bow. Then, there's only one suitable person. Chapter 19.2. Before leaving. Chapter 19.2. Before leaving you want to learn the bow. Asher, who was standing guard in front of the door, asked the seventh lord, who came out of the room and spat out nonsensical words. The other nodded. Don't you know how? No, I know. Then go straight to the gymnasium. With a slightly confused expression, she looked at the seventh lord, who spoke calmly. This erratic lord was doing something eccentric again, just like he did in Rudis Mountains. A bow. What kind of request was it to suddenly ask her to teach him to shoot an arrow? As if what she was thinking was clearly visible on her face, the seventh lord said, I just suddenly became interested. Asher couldn't ask for anything more and had no choice but to follow the seventh lord. The two moved to a spacious private gymnasium in the basement. Butler Floto finished preparing the bows, arrows, and targets. The seventh lord and Asher stood side by side, each holding a bow, keeping their distance from the target. Let's shoot first. At the words of the seventh lord, Asher immediately put an arrow on the string and shot it at the target. Pang! The arrow flew with great force and accurately hit the center of the target. He nodded and said, Now teach me. Asher asked, not knowing where to start. You don't know how to shoot at all? Yes. Then, start with the posture. She said to put an arrow on the string and pull it. At that, the seventh lord hung an arrow on the string and pulled it lightly. It was a sloppy form. You lowered your right shoulder too much, and the hand holding the arrow. At Asher's request, he slightly changed his stance. Aim at the target like what I just did, and now shoot. The seventh lord set up a demonstration. The arrow flew sloppily and fell to the floor without even reaching the target. Asher looked at it and said, You lost your posture the moment you fired. Let's try again. As the seventh lord continued to shoot arrows, Asher watched from the side and pointed out what was wrong. About half an hour passed. The seventh lord still could not hit a single arrow at the target, which was less than 30 paces away. Asher looked at the arrows piled on the floor and the walls with a slightly stiff expression, then turned her gaze back to the seventh lord. Pang! The flying arrow hit the wall next to the target without fail. You made a mistake in your grip again. The seventh lord kept repeating what she had pointed out nearly 10 times. Like a person who had no sense of moving his body at all, the seventh lord lowered his bow and looked back at her. Are you mad? No. Your voice is stiff. You must be angry. I'm not. The seventh lord shook his head and said, How about correcting my posture once? It meant putting her hands directly on his body and guiding his posture. Asher hesitated for a moment before moving closer. Was it a big deal to touch a lord's body? She even carried him on her back in Rudis Mountains. Fix your shoulders like this. As she touched the seventh lord's body here and there, Asher felt it again. It's really a soft body that hasn't been trained in the slightest, as if it would break just by touching it. The image of the seventh lord, who defeated the monster snake in the mountains, suddenly flashed in her mind. What was the source of that unreasonable power he showed? She felt a bleakness that was hard to gauge from the fourth lord, the king of the dead, whom she had unexpectedly seen before. However, on the contrary, Asher did not dare to judge the seventh lord by any standard, just because she felt nothing of the sort from him. Wouldn't even this lousy body be a shell with little meaning to him? Pang! As she corrected his posture, the seventh lord who shot the arrow finally hit the target for the first time. He put on a slightly satisfied expression. I'm getting the hang of it. As he said, the seventh lord fired a few more shots, all the arrows hit the target, and the practice was over. An update schedule for this novel is every other day, which means that it could be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday will usually be posted on days that I'm not scheduled to update. This will follow the gym plus a time zone. Chapter 20.1 Floating Veil 1 Chapter 20.1 Floating Veil 1 It had been a week since I arrived here, in my territory. I couldn't just stay here forever, so I finished all the planning I needed and prepared to leave. I'll probably not return until the next Lord's meeting. Even without me, this territory would still function, so there was nothing to worry about. Among the lords, there were also some who left their territory and wandered outside. Like the Mad King, for example. Floto bowed his head with the same expression as always. I'll prepare it right away as you have instructed. Except for Asher, I went with only one attendant. It was because there had to be someone who was familiar with the geography of Calderic and could do miscellaneous tasks. I had to go around other lords' territories, so I thought one person was enough. I just couldn't drag a bunch of people around, and it made little sense to attach a few more people cumbersomely. LV 46 My name is Barrows, a first-grade butler. A cold-looking male elf wearing glasses greeted us politely. Floto brought him under my command to find a suitable person to become my attendant regardless of age and gender. The level was also quite high, well over 40. I'm going to wander all over Calderic. Can you guide me without us getting lost in the process? Yes, Lord. Then get ready to leave immediately. Composition of the crew was over and Floto took care of the packing. Prepare a plain and inconspicuous wagon. It didn't seem like a good idea to ride around in a huge, patterned, ornate carriage like the one I rode here from the Overlord's castle, because it could have exposed my location en route to the other lords. Since I was planning to go to the other lords' territories without revealing my identity as much as possible. Although there's a rule that lords couldn't hurt each other, there was always an if. There's nothing wrong with being careful. After finishing all the preparations, Asher and I got on the wagon at the entrance of the castle and Floto saw us off. Safe travels, my lord. Passing by the knights, who were saluting at the castle gate, the carriage briskly pulled out of the main gate. The next mystery to be targeted was the Floating Veil, a defense-type mystery. This mystery, with a somewhat unusual name, was an excellent mystery that could be said to be absolute, at least in terms of defensive ability. Its level in the game was 9 stars, the same as the Soul of the King. Of course, there was one fatal penalty as well. However, for me now, it was more important than anything else to get excellent defense, so the penalty wasn't that important. Instant Kill was the best offensive ability, but it had no defensive ability at all because it only activated once I was in direct contact with the target. I was in a precarious situation in which, even if a level 20 hit me with a punch, my head would explode as it was. It was definitely necessary to improve somehow. Tyrol Mountains. The hidden location of the Floating Veil was somewhere in the Tyrol Mountains on the northern border of Seragal, the 5th Lord's territory. I didn't remember the exact location like the Soup Regeneration, because it was not a mystery that I found myself. There was a video of another player who recorded getting the Floating Veil, and it became a hot topic, so I kind of remember it. It's in a place like a ruined dungeon. It wouldn't be easy to find, but I was going to find it and get it somehow. There might be a way to mobilize a good deal of manpower by seeking help from the Mad King, but it was a method I was reluctant to use. It was because the Mad King herself was not a person who could communicate with others well, and if I was asked to explain the reason, I could not. It's not a good idea to borrow someone else's power to get the mystery, because once someone touched the mystery pattern, that person would absorb the mystery. If someone discovered the mystery first, and they gobbled it up, there was no way I could make them spit it out. It would be best to only hire a guide, as with Soup Regeneration. Currently, the wagon was passing through the woods. Calderic was a land formed with the Overlord's territory as the center and the lands of the 9 lords surrounding it. The road I chose to the 5th Lord's territory was to go obliquely past the outskirts of the 6th Lords. It was the fastest straight route. Barrows, who's driving right now, would take care of it. Chapter 20.2 Floating Veil 1 Chapter 20.2 Floating Veil 1 I looked at Asher on the other side. It was because she, who had been sitting motionless, as always, glanced out the window. Just when I thought something was wrong, the carriage came to a slow stop with the sound of a horse clattering. "Ha-ha! How dare you pass through such a forest fearlessly without an escort?" A gruff voice echoed from outside the carriage. "Is it a thief?" In this medieval fantasy world, thieves and monsters were common on the road. It was only when I headed to Enrock from the Overlord Castle that the escort knights were full, so I never encountered a group of bandits. But that was not the case now. It's not a situation I didn't expect. "Get off the wagon! Give everything you haven't, whoa!" And the screams continued. The sound of something being torn to pieces and a terrible scream echoed continuously, and soon it was quiet outside. I sneakily opened the window and poked my head out to see the scattered corpses and Barrows wiping the blood from his glasses. Around him, something like the wind took shape, swaying, then disappearing. Was that a spirit? Barrows, who met my eyes, lowered his head as if to apologize. "My apologies. We stopped moving because of the garbage." "It's fine. Barrows climbed into the driver's seat, and the carriage started again. There seemed to be no need for Asher to take care of the thieves. After that, our travel continued, encountering thieves and monsters intermittently. After a long time, we finally arrived at our destination, the territory of the Fifth Lord Saragal, the city of Korsian, a large city in the northern frontier. After spending a night at a luxury inn to wash off my fatigue, the next day, I immediately went to the Adventurers Guild in the city. That's why, at that desperate moment, I grabbed the monster's horn and left it. Sally, how about a drink tonight? Just the two of us. Huh? After earning a lot from the previous request, I can buy you expensive alcohol. How could I describe the inside of the guild building? The atmosphere was exactly what I had imagined. A person carefully looking through the request forms pasted on the wall, a person who was continuously bragging about his heroic deeds, and a person who was flirting with the staff at the counter. After looking at the scene for a while, I approached the counter, and was greeted by a woman from a beast tribe who was doing her job with a smile. Welcome, young master. Do you have a request you want to apply for? She asked that, probably after judging based on my outfit that I came here to request something. I nodded and asked, which adventurer in this city is the most knowledgeable with the geography of Tyrol Mountains? She answered without a moment's thought. You are looking for an adventurer knowledgeable in the geography of the Tyrol Mountains. Do you want a guide? Yes. Does it matter if it's an adventurer or just a normal individual? Does not matter. Then, I recommend the Blue Fox Adventurer team. The leader, Mr. Ron, is a first-class adventurer, and has a considerable reputation here in Korsian. They are sitting right there right now. Would you like to meet them? At the place the woman pointed out, several men and women were sitting around and talking on the railing on the second floor. As I followed her up the stairs and got closer, I met their questioning glances. 5 adventurers, men and women, each armed with various weapons such as swords, spears and bows. LV. 36 among them. The female receptionist talked to the man with the highest level, a huge sword standing next to the table. Mr. Rodden, there is a request for you. The young master said that he is looking for a guide who is knowledgeable about the geography of the Tyrol Mountains. Huh? A request. He looked back and forth between me and the receptionist, scratching his beard, then spoke to her. Chelsea, we already agreed to take on an escort request to Polyp City. Didn't you know? Yes. Did you? Yes. I'm sorry, but I don't think I can take on that request, sir. Find another adventurer. Unaware of the fact, the receptionist had a puzzled expression on her face. I asked her, are these guys the most knowledgeable when it came to the geography of Tyrol Mountains? Yes, that's true, but I'm sorry, young master. Since they already agreed to a prior request, I'll introduce you to another. I shook my head. Looking at the levels, the skills seemed clear, and I wanted to bring the best manpower. If it's like that, I'll pay more. So, can you cancel that request and take mine? At my words, a man named Rodden laughed a little and replied, I can't do that, sir. If I cancelled the commission I already received, I have to pay several times the advance payment as a penalty. That was only natural, since, if the adventurer side arbitrarily cancelled the request, it would harm the client as well. I asked again, how much is the cancellation fee? Since the advance payment received is 5 gold, I will have to pay 10 gold, which is doubled. I'll hire you for 20 gold. How about it? Rodden's eyes widened, as if my condition sounded quite unconventional. But in the end he shook his head. A penalty is also a penalty, but there is trust with the client. If we break the first request to take on another request, what will people think of our group? I'll double the commission to 40 gold. Rodden's pupils twitched. I'm sorry, but I really can't, sir. 3 times 60 gold. There is a thing called credibility. 5 times 100 gold. This is my last offer. Rodden's words were cut off. The other members also gulped and looked at Rodden. He slowly got up from his seat, dragging his chair, and bent his back. Welcome, dear client. Chapter 21.1. Floating Veil 2. Chapter 21.1. Floating Veil 2. Thank you to Javi for sponsoring 10 chapters. Under the contract signed with money, I had a more detailed discussion with the group of adventurers about the task to be commissioned. Rodden, who had been listening to my story silently, asked in a puzzled tone, So, you mean you're going to search all the peaks of the Tyrol Mountains? Yes. Even if I said it, it sounded very absurd, but I couldn't help it. Unlike super regeneration, the only topographical feature that I could remember about the location of the floating veil was that it was somewhere at the top of the peaks of a mountain range, and that it was probably a canyon, like terrain. I might get a sense if I went and looked for it myself, but there was nothing else that came to mind right away. In order to find this mystery, I had to be prepared to work even harder than during when I was looking for the super regeneration. Still, one lucky thing was that the Tyrol Mountains were smaller than the Rudis Mountains. How long do you think it would take to go around all the canyons at the peaks of the Tyrol Mountains? Rodden let out a sigh and answered, It's vague that I can't get a proper estimate, but if I had to guess, it would take at least 15 days. over a fortnight. In fact, as he said, it was too vague, so in the end, it was something you could only be determined by going there yourself. Rodden opened his mouth again and asked, "But may I ask who you are?" Client who asked for a guide in the mountains by paying a lot of money. It would be natural for him to be curious about my identity, so I answered appropriately. I came from a family from another city nearby. It's difficult to reveal my origin. Then why do you want to climb the Tyrol Mountains? I'm looking for something. What do you mean? That would be difficult to say. Ah, yes, for a moment, there was silence in the place. Rodden and his members looked quite disturbed, as if they didn't expect that they had to do this after accepting my request. I took a money bag from my pocket and put 5 or 6 gold coins on the table. They focused their attention on the gold coins piling up on the table. I'll give you 30 gold right now as a down payment. I know it's not an easy request, but you will definitely receive a good pay. Still, if you can't take on the request, I will understand. So will you do it? Rodden, who was troubled, seemed to exchange glances with his members, and finally nodded his head. Do we only have to guide the two of you? Rodden looked back and forth between me and Asher, who was standing behind me. I nodded. He too nodded and briefly introduced himself and his members. My name is Rodden, the leader of the Blue Fox Adventure Team, and starting from the left, Arma, Ludd, Baxter, and Sheen. 5 people, including 2 men armed with swords, shields, and spears, a woman holding a bow, a woman who looked like a wizard because she was unarmed, and Rodden. A woman carrying a bow called. Sheen smiled and looked at the gold coins piled on the table. In fact, there are no other adventurers around who are as knowledgeable about the geography of the Tyrol Mountains as we are. You really came to the right place, young master. That crazy bitch. Look at how she's staring at the money. Ludd, who was sitting next to her, spoke as if muttering, and then was slapped on the back by Sheen. I also simply stated my name. My name is Ron. This is Asher, my escort. Yes, anyway, thank you. We will accept this request. Rodden's Blue Fox adventurers eventually accepted the request. It didn't matter if we started right away, but they also needed to prepare, so I had an extra day of rest. Early the next morning, the adventurers and I gathered in front of the eastern gate of the city. There was no need for Barrows to be there, so he stayed at the inn, and only Asher accompanied me. Then let's go. I could feel Asher looking at me strangely as I came out of the inn room. She must be looking at the bows and arrows I brought. In her eyes, I could see that she wanted to ask why I have to bring these items when I couldn't even shoot properly, but I ignored it. Who knew what other unimaginable dangers there would be this time, like Bellavagora? Even the slightest complacency could lead to death. Preparing everything that could be prepared was the right attitude to survive in this harsh world. Are you here? He met the adventurers waiting in front of the gate and headed straight for the Tyrol Mountains. Tyrol Mountains. One characteristic of this mountain range was that there were a lot of orcs. Orcs were common monsters that could be found anywhere, but they were especially common in the Tyrol Mountains. However, since they were only level 20 at the highest level, there was nothing to worry about safety. A few hours after I started climbing the mountain range, I could keep pace with the adventurers without running out of stamina and more. And not long after, we encountered a group of orcs. Quick! Chapter 21.2 Floating Veil 2 Chapter 21.2 Floating Veil. 2 large, green-skinned monsters emerged from the brush and approached with low cries. They looked just like what one would see in the game. 8 in total. Some of them had rusty iron swords or spears in their hands. Are these bastards crazy and coming down here to hunt? Rodden and his members did not hesitate to step forward and start slaughtering the orcs. Those with spear swords fought in front, and assisted in the battle by throwing arrows and magic from behind. Asher and I watched the scene in silence. In particular, since there was Rodden who was over level 30, the battle ended simply. We sat down for a while, rested, and chatted with the adventurers. Orcs are smarter than you think, so even seasoned adventurers can be hunted and killed if they make a mistake. The weapons the orcs were holding earlier were originally used by stealing other adventurers' weapons. Right, horse, that was something I knew. Since orcs lived in a community as a tribal unit, their intelligence was excellent for a monster. As I accepted the conversation well, the adventurers also added more stories. Do you know about how the orc monster wave happens? Isn't it something that rarely happens when a mutant king appears? Yes, you knew. Originally, because of their tyrannical nature, they couldn't gather in large groups. When a king is born, all of them unite under him and become a completely terrible disaster. Monster wave. As the name suggests, it referred to a phenomenon in which a huge group of monsters rushes like a wave. There were many causes, but one of them was the existence of a king, a mutant that was very rare among monsters. The monsters from which the king was born were typically orcs and lizardmen. When the king was born, an overwhelming army of monsters, from thousands to tens of thousands, was formed and invaded human territory. If it's an orc king, then it would be over level 70. Anyway, such monster waves were major events that often occurred in the game's story. After taking a break, we started moving again. It had been a week since we started searching the Tyrol Mountains. As expected, the adventurers did not get lost and successfully guided them to their destinations. However, after searching many peaks and canyons, I still hadn't found the mystery. Even as I moved, I continued to search hard for my memory. I'm sure it was a canyon terrain. It was not narrow, but quite wide, and I remembered that the slopes of the cliffs on both sides were gentle, although not accurate. None of the canyons I had passed so far matched my memory. And what else was there? It's a canyon, Rodden said as he looked at the scene that appeared in front of us. It was now the fifth gorge they had encountered. Wait a second. I narrowed my eyes at the shape of the gorge, which somehow seemed to match my vague memories. I was busy moving my gaze and scanning the gorge, but there was a commotion around me. There were also orcs. This time, instead of a few, Rodden and his members frowned at the horde of orcs that protruded in dozens. There are a little more this time. They're still just orcs though. Arma, prepare a big magic. As always, Rodden and his men prepared for battle. Still, there were a lot of numbers this time, so they showed a bit of nervousness. But they were still always the first to go into battle. Asher. Yes. Take care of everything. The orcs were a great hindrance to this situation, where I was trying to remember something. At my words, Asher drew her sword and swung it at the slowly approaching group of orcs. Chow! The gigantic blue aura that erupted from her sword cut the bodies of the orcs in two at once. Rodden and the members, who were about to go into battle at the sight, instantly became stunned. As the canyon became quiet again, I continued to look around and retrieve my memory. Soon after, I rushed to one side when something came to my mind. Asher followed me. Yes, obviously, this was it. I moved while looking at the cliff, just like when I was looking for super regeneration, and stopped at a certain point, and I raised my head. A convex cliff faced high overhead, and a tree standing alone at the edge. The video of the user who got the floating veil clearly had this composition of view. Asher, try breaking down this wall. Quetang. As Asher broke down the wall, the stone fragments came crashing down, revealing a passage inside. Old stone stairs going down. Seeing that, I smiled with joy. I finally found it. This was the dungeon where the mystery of the floating veil was hidden. Rodden and the rest of his group also came up and looked at the entrance. Why it died. I told them, wait here for a while. Leaving them behind, I went down the stairs with Asher and headed inside. Chapter 21.3 Floating Veil 2 Chapter 21.3 Floating Veil 2 I carried the glowstone I had brought and relied on the light to advance through the dark passage. Huge stone statues stood on both sides of the old, wide hallway leading to a straight line, and Asher looked around at them with a slightly nervous look. A dungeon was basically an artificial space created by ancient wizards. There were traps, and there were guardians guarding them. But I didn't worry and kept walking. Because obviously, even when I saw the play video, this dungeon was already broken, so there were no traps or guardians. There was no danger until we could reach the innermost hidden place, where the mystery of the floating veil was. Soon after reaching the end of the hallway, a huge door appeared. I stopped walking for a while. It was because there was a huge stone statue, like the one hanging on both sides of the hallway blocking the doorway leading inward. That's no big deal either. It was probably a stone statue that wouldn't move anyway, so I moved on again. It's okay if Asher destroyed everything and went inside. Wait a minute. LV85 Why do I see the level of that guy? There was a level above the statue's head. I sensed something strange and stopped walking. Suddenly, a blue light shone in the statue's eyes, and he opened them and swung the spear he was holding. Quack 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 quam. Goosebumps ran down my spine at the gigantic aura of blue light that passed right next to me. Then, an inorganic voice flowed from the stone statue. I warn you, I will consider anyone who crosses that line an intruder. Those who don't deserve to enter, please go back. What was that? Wasn't this a dungeon without a guardian? Confused, I looked down. When I looked at it, I saw that the floor was dented and had a line-like mark. Were you going to attack me if I walked over this? Another unexpected situation dumbfounded me, like the one I encountered with Bella Vigora. I had come this far, but something happened like this again. Coo. The expression of Asher next to me hardened, as if she sensed that the energy radiating from the stone statue was unusual. Its level was much higher than Asher's, so it was impossible for her to deal with it. I thought to myself, does instant kill work on golems too? That guardian was, at a glance, a magical golem made of magic. To put it bluntly, it was more like an inanimate creature than a living thing, so it was doubtful whether instant death would work. But there was no other way. I had no choice but to try. It's still the one and only 10-star skill. Shouldn't it also worked on golems? I took out the arrow I had brought with me, scratched my palm, dipped it in blood, hung it on the string, and aimed at it. Asher swallowed a gulp as she looked at the stone statue spewing out huge magical energy in front of her. Could she win with all her might? She checked, but she wasn't sure. What was this dungeon like space for? What was that monster? Although she had great confidence in her abilities, and was always regarded as a genius among her clan, she somehow constantly encountered opponents she could not handle when traveling with the Seventh Lord. She suddenly looked to the side. It was because the Seventh Lord was suddenly aiming at the golem with an arrow on a string. Hey, Aing! When the Seventh Lord let go of the string, the flying arrow hit the body of the stone statue and bounced off helplessly. As she was watching him blankly, he muttered, as if he was sorry. I tried to aim at the head, but I still lack a lot. What the hell were you doing now? When a question arises about an act that seemed to play a joke that did not go well with the situation, the Seventh Lord opened his mouth again. Now get out of here, stone. Don't block the road. Guam! The stone statue lost its balance and fell to the ground. Seeing the scene, Asher's eyes widened in astonishment. The Seventh Lord put his bow on his back and said, "Go inside." Asher stared blankly at his back as he moved forward with light steps. Then she moved her steps belatedly. Chapter 22.1 Floating Veil 3 Chapter 22.1 Floating Veil 3 Wah! Asher broke down the huge stone gate and we went inside. Moving beyond the rubble of collapsed stone fragments, what appeared was a huge cavity. Ha! I sighed a little and looked around. Unidentifiable geometric patterns drawn on the floor and walls below, structures, and even the luminous stones embedded in the ceiling dimly illuminated the space. It must have been built quite a long time ago, but those glowstones were not still exhausted. It was a scene that oozes a more mysterious atmosphere than the corridors I passed through. I walked further in, feeling the same joy I had when I reached the end of the dungeon while playing the game. Now it was time to claim the reward. Let's see. On one side of the cavity was a door slightly smaller than the door where the stone statue that had just been demolished was. It must have been that way. The user who I watched from the game video was disappointed in the dungeon without a single item like a relic, but they must have entered that door, discovered the mystery, forgotten about the feeling of loss, and danced in the pants of joy. Come to think of it, it was strange why the mystery was hidden in this dungeon. Mystery was the setting of an unknown power that had nothing to do with mana or magic, and the place where it appeared was completely random. It could be just a crazy coincidence, or there could be a reason I didn't know about. Of course that was a good thing. What mattered to me now was the existence of the mystery of the floating veil waiting for me beyond that door. But it's not just that, right? Suddenly, a possibility came to mind. The timeline of the current world was a point in the past, 5 years ago, in the world played in the game. There's a possibility that the mystery hadn't been created yet, so there could be nothing in there. Asher, break down this door. I ordered Asher, brushing the ominous assumptions out of my head that I did not want to imagine. Standing behind me, looking around the cavity, she came over and broke down the door. Asher, who was brought here so I could use her as an escort, was actually used more to destroy things. Wait here. After I told her that, I went inside alone. As I went further along the path that was narrower than the corridor, another cavity came out. The only difference was that there were traces of human life here. I looked up and stared at the ceiling, not paying attention to anything else. I was staring at a pattern drawn on the ceiling and shining brightly in white. The corners of my lips rose slowly. Excitement welled up along with relief. Floating veil. Mystery was more powerful as the size of the pattern increased. The pattern of the floating veil was much larger than the super regeneration, so it could not fill the ceiling of the wide cavity and continued to the wall below. I laughed for a moment at the joy of finding the mystery, but soon realized the situation and let out a small sigh. Ha! Come to think of it, was that painted on the ceiling in the game video? I couldn't think because I was concentrating on other things. The ceiling of the cavity was high enough to easily exceed several times my height. At a glance, it looked like it was 10 meters. It should be absorbed only when it was touched, but how should I absorb it? I stared blankly at the ceiling like a dog chasing chickens, then glanced back. Should I go back and get Asher? However, even if it's Asher, I did not want to show her the existence of a mystery. Was there another way? I turned my gaze to the wall. There were a lot of protruding parts, so I thought I could climb it if I tried hard enough. Ugh. Anyway, there was no easy way to get anything. I let out a sigh and moved closer to the wall. I never thought I would do rock climbing like this, which I had never done before in my life. There was super regeneration anyway, so I didn't have to worry about getting hurt if I fell, and my stamina also wouldn't run out that easily. Holding on clumsily to the protruding part, I climbed slowly, groping. If it was my original physical ability, I would have climbed a few meters and my arms would have trembled, but thanks to super regeneration, the lack of strength was immediately filled. As I slowly climbed up like that, I was already right under the ceiling before I knew it. If I stumbled once and fell, I had to climb up again, so I carefully fixed my center of gravity, slowly released one hand and stretched out. Oh. Chapter 22.2 Floating Veil 3 Chapter 22.2 Floating Veil 3 The light of the pattern burst brightly and slowly was absorbed into my body. I was feeling the elation in the middle of it, but suddenly the part I was stepping on crumbled and gravity pulled me down. Ugh, just like that my body fell and crashed on the ground. I let out a suppressed moan and rolled onto the floor for a moment. As I struggled in pain like that, the intense pain that had been piercing my back, as if a bone had been broken, soon disappeared. Ah shit. I rubbed my back and lifted myself up. Anyway, with this I got the mystery of the floating veil. It was the same when I got super regeneration. From the moment I got floating veil, I had a sense of what kind of ability it was and how to use it. I stretched out my arms forward for no reason and activated the floating veil. I couldn't see it with my eyes, but I could feel a protective barrier spreading around my body. I was amazed for a moment, but then I realized something and immediately recalled my ability. Then, I muttered with a slightly puzzled expression. No, was the penalty not being able to breathe? Floating veil. Absolute defense ability that could block any powerful attack. However, the penalty was that the caster could not take any action while the veil was open. So in the game, it was used as an invincible skill that chewed the boss's ultimate skill. But when I tried using it myself, not only could I not move while using this ability, I couldn't even breathe. I tried the ability once again. As I practiced and used my abilities several times, I soon realized something was different. This did not last continuously once used, but can be cancelled at will, and there was no cooldown or activation delay. Unlike in the game, it became an on-off type of ability that could be freely turned on and off. I didn't know if the form of the ability had changed to match the reality, but it could be said that it was much improved than the game anyway. However, while the veil was active, no action could be taken, and even breathing was impossible. I get it roughly. I thought it was a decent penalty. To be honest, it didn't feel like a huge penalty to me, because I didn't have any ability other than instant kill, so if I tried to use this ability, how would I use it? Wouldn't I rather use it mostly just to stand still and block my opponent's attacks anyway? I just have to hold my breath for a while, and if I have to keep it activated, I can control it by turning it off and on in between. Assuming this and that, I thought about how to use the floating veil in different situations. In addition, it was possible to control the shape and size of the veil. I could spread the veil to stick to my body like armor, or I could spread it around the body in a spherical shape, like a barrier of magic. This was a great defensive ability. It's good. Besides super regeneration, I felt reassured at the thought that I now had one more means to protect myself. I brushed the dust off my body and looked around. After attaining the mystery, the scenery of the cavity came into view. There were traces of people's lives, such as desks and beds. I wandered around and looked around to see if there was anything else I could get, but nothing came of it. After looking around the cavity one last time, I moved toward the aisle. After passing through the passage, I passed through and coming out of the first joint, I saw Asher, who was wary of the surroundings. When she saw me, she seemed a little relieved. She was nervous that the same stone statue from earlier would come out. In the end, I did not know what this dungeon was. Maybe this was a dungeon that someone had already robbed, but I thought maybe mystery formed behind it because of an unfortunate coincidence. Whatever it was, I got what I wanted, so I didn't care anymore. Let's go out. I moved to the aisle leading outside with Asher. Chapter 23.1 Floating Veil 4 Chapter 23.1 Floating Veil 4 The adventurers were talking in front of the entrance. Shouldn't we just leave now? The member Lud said. A slight uneasiness flared up between them. An unknown passageway through which the two entered. No matter how you look at it, it looked like a dungeon. They felt like they were involved in something unusual. The dungeon was a treasure trove of ancient ruins. No matter what dangers might lurk inside, it was also a greedy trap that made many adventurers dream of a chance to get rich. He couldn't believe it, but what that young master was looking for was a dungeon. The problem was that the woman who was the escort of the client, Ron, was more powerful than he had imagined. She could fire a huge sword force and tore all the orcs to pieces. They had never seen such a rare sight in their entire life. There was no law saying that the client would not come out of the dungeon and try to kill everyone on this side to keep their mouth shut. Among the nobles, there were many crazy people who would do anything to achieve their goal. He also had a bit of regret that they had received an unclear request too hastily because money blinded them. The boy didn't look like that kind of person, but Sheen stepped forward and said, "Hey, are you saying something crazy? I haven't even received the rest of the commission yet. Didn't you see that the woman is not an ordinary strong woman? If she says that, she'll keep our mouth shut and tries to kill us. Had she meant to do that, she would have killed us before she even went in with that young master. Would she have left us intact here like this? Since they don't know the way back, she might try to kill us after we guide them back. Are you not only an idiot, but also a coward?" Sheen hit Lud's back with her bow. Of course, what Lud said was just a hypothetical assumption. If not, she would do something stupid by leaving the client behind even before completing the request. And she wouldn't even be able to get 70 gold. Yet she decided to wait a little longer. But then she heard a squishy cry. Orcs appeared one by one again around them. Oh, those orcs again. Were there any tribes that have settled near this canyon? The expressions of Rodden and his members, who were preparing for battle, as if tired of it, slowly turned into dazed faces. This was because the number of orcs in sight continued to increase. A few to 10, 10 to dozens, and dozens to a group of orcs filled the area. Among the bushes, on top of the cliffs, orcs continued to appear in the middle of it, and now it completely looked like a green wave. Shit. No one could understand what the hell was going on. They all stepped back with pale complexions, and not even thinking about raising a weapon. Strangely, there was an orderly atmosphere between the many orcs, like a well-organized large army, waiting for the leader's command to lead them. Kruk. A low, clear sound rang out in the stillness. At the ferocious cry that aroused fear, Rodden and his members shuddered thinly. As if one side of the green wave was splitting, the road seemed to open, and something slowly stepped out from between them. A gigantic orc twice as large as the other orcs, and covered in large muscles all over the body. Looking at him, Rodden muttered in disbelief. King. King. An existence that could unite and lead monsters that cannot be united. They could understand now. How could so many orcs be gathered in one place? Among the orcs of the Tyrol Mountains, the worst mutation that would cause a monster wave was born. The eyes of the Orc King, shining red and bloody, turned to them. It looked like it was full of murderous intent to tear them apart and kill them at any moment. There was no other way to deal with that monster. Even without fighting, everyone could instinctively realize that fact. With orcs all around them, there was only one place to run. As Rodden looked at the entrance to the dungeon next to him, he barely let out his voice. Arma, Magic Arma, who was half lost, suddenly came to her senses and prepared her magic. She was thinking of throwing some kind of magic to slow it down for a moment, and then running inside. There was no other way. She pumped all of her magic with all her might. The magic power that was flowing around and clumped together soon rose into flames. The Orc King charged towards them with a heavy volley of feet. A huge fireball the size of a man cut through the air and flew toward the other with fierce force. Whoops! Run inside! Everyone turned and ran toward the entrance of the dungeon. But it was futile. Fireballs fired by Arma didn't even hit the Orc King, let alone stop it for a moment. It jumped out of the flames and closed the distance between them in an instant before everyone could take a few steps. The first target the Orc King aimed at was Arma, who had cast magic. Rodden, who was right next to her, reflexively threw himself, but was hit and bounced off the cliff, crashing. There was no time to use defensive magic. Then, seeing the huge fist that was about to hit her body, Arma sensed her death and closed her eyes tightly. That was the moment. A gigantic blade of sword flew from inside the dungeon's entrance and cut down the Orc King. It let out a cry of pain and stepped back, grabbing its bleeding arm. Arma slowly opened her closed eyes. The other members also looked at the entrance where the sword force came from. Two people, Ron and Asher, were slowly walking out from inside. Chapter 23.2, Floating Veil 4. Chapter 23.2, Floating Veil 4. What's all this? Leaving the dungeon with light steps, I looked at the scene unfolding in front of me with absurd eyes. Many orcs covering the gorge. I didn't think it had been half an hour since I entered the dungeon, but in the meantime, shit was going on outside. Is that an Orc King? As I looked at the howling giant orc with its arm cut off by Asher's sword blade, I immediately understood the situation. LV 72. Its level was 72. It was a very high level even for a king. To encounter a really rare Orc King like this, would all this mystery quest always going to be eventful until the end? However, since Asher was at a level that could deal with it with no problems, I didn't worry too much. Take care of it. Yes. At my words, Asher immediately approached the Orc King. Somehow, it felt like she was trying to make up for not being able to deal with the statue guardian in the dungeon. I turned my gaze to see Rodden, who was pinned against the wall to the side. It looked like he was barely breathing as he was crying and bleeding all over his body. Leader! Members who had been in a state of fascination belatedly ran in that direction. I took Rodden out of the wall and laid him on the floor. Arma hurriedly reached out her hand to his battered body. A green light enveloped his body. She seemed to pour out healing magic, but Rodden's focus was only slowly dissolving, like someone who was about to die. Oh no, no! I watched her crying and casting her spell, then I pulled something out of my arms. I know that in order to survive in this world, I have to live selfishly, showing no favors. However, I had no intention of living while ignoring the people dying in front of me. Get out of the way! I took out the scarlet potion and checked Rodden's condition. The hollow in his chest meant that this was a fatal wound. I poured the potion on it. After a while, his wounds slowly regenerated, and I heard bones and muscles slowly reconstructing. Soon Rodden's complexion eased, and his breathing returned to normal. The other members were staring blankly at the sight. Then they hurriedly bowed to me. Thank you, young master. Really, thank you. Okay, check his status further. Having finished my work, I turned my gaze to the side. On one side, the battle between Asher and the Orc King was in full swing. Quack 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 wham! It was a battle that was so fast that it was difficult to see what was going on. Every time Asher and the Orc King clashed, The surrounding ground turned upside down, and all they swept away the trees. The wind pressure pushed up to where I was, which was quite far away. Seeing Asher fight properly for the first time made me realize that she too was a monster. Bellavagora, the guardian who is well over level 80, and the people I met so far were all monsters of a different caliber, so it's just that I hadn't been able to properly see Asher's skill. Asher's sword raged like a storm, and the Orc King could not fight back and only poured out blood. In fact, if Asher really gave her full power, it would be dead by now. The 9-level difference they had was huge. But now, since she didn't use her racial trait, she was out of power. The battle seemed to take longer than expected, but I thought it would be over soon, so I folded my arms and stared at the fight. It was at one point. Big! The Orc King let out a roaring roar, as if preparing for the final clash, then suddenly turned and charged towards us. That also took aback Asher, so she came up behind it a bit late, but it was already close to them. In the blink of an eye, I saw the guy who came right in front of me and immediately used a mystery. Floating veil. An invisible, transparent veil spread between me and the Orc King. Its fist stopped in front of me, and the ground next to me exploded with the impact. Its attack, which would have shattered even a huge rock, did not shock me in the slightest. I still stood with my arms crossed, staring at the bewildered Orc King with nonchalant eyes. That was its last moment. Chow! Ah! Asher's sword followed, in an instant, and decapitated the Orc King. Chapter 24.1 Ter Bamin 1 Chapter 24.1 Ter Bamin 1 Blood poured out, and the Orc King's head, that tumbled to the floor. Watching its body collapse after losing its head, I removed the veil. Only then I let out a small sigh, and met Asher's eyes as she brushed off the blood on her sword. She bowed her head with a look of guilt. Sorry. It's fine. I was a bit surprised, but thanks to that, I could confirm the defense power of the floating veil. Looking around, I saw the orcs who had lost their leader, wandering around in confusion. There was no need to ask Asher to kill them, because they soon scattered in all directions, as if they were running away. Even orcs would have the intelligence to distinguish who would be annihilated if they attacked. Few of the adventurers who were standing on the side watching the battle looked relieved. Rodden was also getting up from the ground, staggering as if he had picked himself up. I told them, now let's go down. Finding this mystery was also eventful. After coming down the mountain range and returning to the city, I paid the rest of the request money to the adventure group. Rather, they stubbornly refused, saying that they did not have to receive it in the name of receiving grace. But a promise was a promise, so they were forced to accept it. Thank you very much, young master. I hope you have only glory on the road ahead. They thanked me with genuine respect in their eyes. It was a natural reaction, given that I saved their leader's life using a precious potion, and even gave them such a huge amount of money. However, thanks to them, I also successfully got an important defense-type mystery, so I didn't think it was a waste. And it was only a few hundred golds anyway. The money I took from my territory was dozens of platinum coins that I now have in my arms. We left the city right after a day. The boring carriage trip began again, and the next destination was the First Lord's territory ruled by the Weissman. Thinking of the mysteries to be gained there, I blankly watched the scenery outside the wagon. Then, out of habit, I turned my gaze to Asher, who was sitting across from me. Her expression seemed weakly shadowed. Your complexion doesn't look good. At my words, Asher looked this way. Did you have any injuries sustained in battle? No. Just, as she licked her lips, her expression became a little darker. She said, Lord Ron appointed me as an escort. I made a mistake against the Orc King before, not finishing the battle properly. Was it like that again? Something like this happened when we ran into Bellavagora before. Whether it was dealing with junk mobs or breaking down walls, she was actually helping me so much that I couldn't do what I needed to do without her. However, she was having a difficult time because she couldn't stand up to the really powerful ones. I said nothing about that, but her naive personality was really, it's annoying. But it was also cute. Compared to the first Asher, who seemed like I was facing a wall, this was a great improvement. Didn't the fact that she bring up such a story and have a conversation with me meant that her trust in me became deeper? I was choosing what to say, and then opened my mouth. I said that when I first met you, that I knew about your abilities. Yes, but it was more like talking about your potential, not your current abilities. I know your current limitations. I know what you can do and what you can't. I continued talking to Asher, who was listening. The snake in the Rudis Mountains and the golem you met in the dungeon were all opponents you couldn't handle, even with all your might. That's why I've never been disappointed in you yet. Do you understand? Of course, it was a mistake to miss the orc. She seemed to chew on what I said, then bowed her head. I looked out the window again and watched the passing scenery. Chapter 24.2 Ter Bamin 1 Chapter 24.2 Ter Bamin 1 After quite a while, we arrived at Wilpik, a city in the southeast of the Fifth Lord's territory. We were driving along the boulevard in the carriage when something suddenly came into my mind. Come to think of it, was that restaurant here in the city? When I played the game, there was a very famous restaurant in the city of Wilpik. Was the name of the restaurant Gold Chicken? There was also a sub-quest in the game to get ingredients for a chef who was struggling with a new menu. More than anything, the reason this restaurant remained in my memory was because, as the name suggested, it was a restaurant that sold chicken. In terms of the concept of this medieval fantasy world, the dish called fried chicken was quite unfamiliar and hard to find. Shall we stop by? After lodging in the city's luxurious inn, I said to Barrows, find out if there is a restaurant called Gold Chicken in this city. It was 5 years ago, so maybe it hadn't opened yet. However, Barrows, who returned shortly after, brought the news that the restaurant existed. This restaurant opened a while ago, and is gradually becoming famous in the city. It is said that they mainly sell fried chicken dishes. We had dinner there and immediately left the inn. When we arrived at the restaurant and went inside, quite a few people were eating. It had a moderately noisy atmosphere. An employee walking around the hall saw us and greeted us brightly. Welcome. Are the three of you here for a meal? The employee guided me to a seat by the window, and I sat down first, with Asher and Barrows sitting across from me. This kind of seating arrangement was awkward at first to Barrows, but he got used to it. When I ate at the inn in the city that I first arrived after leaving the territory, I was annoyed that Barrows didn't dare to sit down to eat with me. He would just stand by and wait on me. He was a great man, in charge of all the chores on this journey. But if there was one thing, it was that he was too loyal. The waiter held out the menu and asked, how would you like to order? If you are not familiar with our restaurant, please let me explain. No, that's fine. I'll order 3 chickens. Yes, I understand. Cooking takes a little time, so please forgive me. This medieval world, especially in a big city like this, had a lot of weirdly modern corners mixed in, like this restaurant. It was a game world created by modern people in the first place, so it was probably just natural. What's not natural is my situation after entering this game world. Asher was by nature silent, and since Barrows was someone I couldn't have a comfortable conversation with, I thought for a while, waiting for our food. Why did I come into this world? I had not yet found the answer. Come to think of it, a god actually existed in this world. The only god in the world of Ra-Sa who gave the holy sword to the hero of Santia. Maybe that god could tell me why this happened. Whatever it was, survival was the most important thing right now, so it was just a futile idea. If I continued to survive, I could meet the hero someday. That was something to think about. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a bit of a relief. Then the door opened and 2 customers came in. A luxuriously dressed woman, who seemed to be the daughter of a certain family, and her escort knight. But when she looked around the restaurant and frowned, she shouted in a clear voice, Manager, are you not accepting guests soon? It surprised the manager inside to see her face, and he hurried over. Welcome, Lady Denbury. It's an honor to have you visit our store. Tusk, dirty and sluggish. The woman looked around her. These days, this restaurant's cuisine is so famous, so I came to taste it myself while out on an outing. But the inside is dirty and unfashionable. Haha, I'm sorry. It's still not enough to welcome the noble young lady. What are you talking about? Quickly, guide me to the best seat. Who was that idiot? As I watched the scene, the atmosphere inside the store suddenly became quiet. All the other guests were paying attention to her. She must have been quite a celebrity in the city. Lady Denbury? Could she be the mayor's daughter?